Our heroes did not come from a future where everything has gone horribly wrong. They did not travel back in time to save the world from a bleak or miserable fate. As a matter of fact, all they want to do is find a way back home as soon as possible. So, all 3 of your students have progressed to the second round. Well done, Kakashi. Might Guy gave his eternal rival a grudging show of respect. From his point of view, to anyone else, it would have looked like his usual nice guy pose trademark sign. It was the thought that counted though. It's a shame about Lee's loss, Kakashi said. I understand he was your favorite Guy laughed. Please, Kakashi, no decent teacher would ever play favorites. I love all 3 of my pupils equally. Really? Kakashi gave Guy a disbelieving look. Because that's not how it looks from my perspective, or literally anyone else's. What do you mean? Guy asked, giving him a genuinely baffled look. I simply give Lee the most help, because he's the one who most needs that help. This time, he actually did perform his nice guy pose trademark sign. Kakashi's sweet dropped. Well, at least I know that I don't play favorites, he muttered. In an estranged timeline roughly 25 years ahead of this one, the 6th Hokage sneezed. Temari gulped a tad anxiously as she stepped down into the arena, facing off against her opponent. She did a good job of obfuscating her nerves with a show of mildly contemptuous disinterest, but those who knew her well would be able to see right through. Everyone had their tells, whether they knew it or not. Naruto knew Temari's as well as anyone short of her brothers and husband. Not that she knew that he knew, but even if Naruto hadn't had a fairly close acquaintanceship with Temari's future self, what with the woman being the wife of his advisor and right-hand man, he still had his empathic abilities, which derived either from some aspect of his Uzumaki ancestry, his mastery of Kurama's chakra, or both or neither. It was a little ambiguous, depending on who you asked. Still, Naruto could tell that Temari was more than a little tense as she took her place across from him in the arena. It didn't take a genius to work out that she was at least a little scared of him, after his defeat of Gaara. To him that seemed a little silly, but people were weird like that. So, Naruto decided to break the ice with the best method he knew. Step 1. Create a shit ton of shadow clones. Step 2. Have those clones perform a mass transformation. Step 3. Step 4. Profit. Reverse harem jutsu. Shikamaru style. Temari's first reaction was to stare blankly as a dozen-plus shadow clones transformed in puffs of white smoke before her eyes. Was this a joke? She misheard that, right? Yes, she had to have. No one in their right mind would seriously give their jutsu such a ridiculous name, unless you counted the Werok no jutsu this kid had used against Gaara in the first round, of course. But really, how many variations could one guy possibly have on a single technique? Temari got the answer to her question as soon as the smoke cleared. Hey, babe, want some sugar? Came the voice of her previous opponent in stereo. Lookalikes of Shikamaru Nara winked at her and struck poses they presumably thought of as cool or seductive, rather thin wisps of smoke the only thing covering their shame. Well, she thought, at least 2, apparently. One of the not Shikamaras blew her a kiss. Temari shuddered. Possibly more. Up with the other disqualified competitors, the real Shikamaru side. What a drag, he grumbled. Hinata and Sakura shared a smile and a laugh, amused as much by Shikamaru's prototypically him response as by Naruto's choice of jutsu. Sasuke on the other hand, facepalmed. Lee, for his part, was largely nonplussed. Karin was simply trying not to imagine a Rock Lee version of that jutsu. Gaara's sand had once more sprung up to block his view, and Shino furrowed his brow in mild consternation. That boy has a real obsession with his sexy jutsu, doesn't he? Tsunade said, shaking her head bemusedly. Jiraiya was listless and despondent in his seat next to her. I have no godson, he said in a dreary monotone. Tsunade snorted and gave him a punch on the shoulder, half friendly and half irritated. Oh, get over yourself, Hiruna. The hidden grass representative with a name as bland and generic as everything else about her village, cocked an eyebrow. That's an interesting jutsu, she said. How many variations does he have, I wonder? Who cares, Rosa said flippantly, still a little peevish over Gaara's earlier loss. I find his regular sexy jutsu to be more agreeable, personally, said Hiruzen as loftily as he could manage. Hiruna smiled. Yes, that was a very interesting transformation as well, she hummed in what might have been appreciative recollection. The Hokage and Kazekage promptly developed matching nosebleeds as their imaginations ran away from them. Back down in the arena, Temari twitched. She closed her eyes for a moment, thanking her lucky stars for the smoke covering the private places of these henge. Then her eyes snapped back open, and she let out a low, dangerous growl. You damn pervert. Fluidly, menacingly, she drew her war fan and unfolded it to reveal all 3 moons. Kameitachi no jutsu. With a lone swing, Temari kicked up a terrible windstorm. In her fury she exerted more power, if less control, making several of the trees in the arena rock and sway from the force of the shrieking gust, despite failing to hone the gale into a proper flurry of keen edges. Like exchanging a sickle and chain for a meteor hammer, she smote the battlefield with sheer blunt force. Dust devils cavorted at the feet of the naked Shikamaru harem, dirt and particulate specks of matter picked up and tossed in a crashing, twisting torrent. Temari glared daggers, her chest heaving a touch more laboriously in its accustomed respiration than it ought to have. Glinting on a dusky brow, a single bead of sweat trickled down into her eye. She winced and blinked it away. Perhaps pouring so much of her chakra into that attack hadn't been the best idea. She should not have been breathing this heavily already. Maybe she'd spent more stamina in that first round than she thought. Blinking 3 more times in quick succession, Temari raised her eyes to assess the damage as the dust finally cleared. Said eyes then widened to their furthest limit, so much so that it took a conscious strain of effort to hold the lids apart. Temari gaped and nearly dropped her fan. Blood rushed to her face so quickly, and in such a quantity, that for a moment she fancied that either her cheeks would combust or her legs would buckle. Naruto's Shikamaru-hinged clones were still there, if a bit dusty. Only one significant change, it seemed, had occurred from Temari's wind-scythe assault. The smoke was gone. An uproar burst from the audience. Smack! An irate Ino socked Shikamaru in the jaw. Gah! You exhibitionist, she raged, lashing out at the nearest available target in annoyance. Shikamaru winced and rubbed his cheek. What did I do? He whined. Ino reddened and punched him again, striking with more frustration than force. It's the principle of the matter, damn it. I don't want to look at your naked. Grah! She flailed inarticulately, grasping for some kind of actual words to use. Shikamaru sighed and rested his chin on his hands. Ugh, whatever. That's a lot bigger than I would have expected from your friend. Keru said this to Chaoji, the two of them seated in the audience. Her teammates sat on either side of them, Samui next to Keru, Omoi next to Chaoji. B was at the end, seated right next to the aisle. Omoi squirmed in his seat, looking self-conscious. It didn't take a psychic to figure out what had him so antsy. Samui had her eyes closed with her temples visibly bulging. It looked like she was counting back and forth between 1 and 10. B was perfectly nonchalant, like this was the kind of thing that happened every day. Chaoji hummed and looked down into the arena. He squinted. Nah, Naruto's just embellishing. Keru gave him a look. And how would you know that? She asked. Not that there's anything wrong with knowing it. Chaoji shrugged. Me and Shikamaru have been friends for years, he said by way of explanation. The Kumo quartet decided to take his word for it. Temari could see everything. Everything. Silently, slowly, her expression perfectly blank. The blonde raised one hand. Without flinching for even an instant, she bit through the calloused pad of her thumb and drew a trickle of red blood. Kachayos, Temari whispered lowly. With a single mechanical swipe of her hand, she smeared that blood over the 3 purple moons adorning her fan. This, and a bit of chakra, was sufficient to summon her rarely seen familiar, Kumatari. White, small, and furry, the weasel clutched a scythe as large as his body. A handful of other phantasmal scythes floated around him, wreathed in a glow of chakra. I'll cut you, said the weasel in an incongruously gruff voice. The wind mistress raised her fan. She seemed perfectly serene, with the exception of her eyes. Those glared daggers sharper and more perilous than any sickle she could summon, piercing through the shamelessly naked forms of the Shikamaru lookalikes. With a slow, steady exhale she swung. Kirakiri Might was a devastating attack. This was a jutsu capable of leveling entire swathes of forest at a point in time when most of Temari's peers would be lucky to knock down more than 1 or 2 trees in a single go. A standard of measurement that Naruto had once joked would make the first Hokage cry, even if it was remarkably effective. The Shikamaru doppelgangers were ripped to shreds before they could blink, and they burst into smoke almost instantly. Shrieking, slashing winds tore at the battlefield around Temari, gouging the earth and felling most of the trees in the arena. Paul Bunyan would have been proud. After a deafening few seconds of absolute hell, the jutsu wound down, speeding TS momentum. The air stilled once more, save for a light breeze that brushed over some of the fallen branches, rustling leaves. It took Temari a moment to notice something off about this scene. She looked around, frowning curiously. Naruto was nowhere to be seen. What? Where the hell could he have gone? She didn't slice him to ribbons, did she? An instant after thinking this, Temari felt an abrupt and distinctive sensation in her gut. Her insides seemed to float, suddenly, as though bereft for a moment of any hindering, burdening substance. It was a feeling she recognized, if only somewhat. It was the sensation of weightlessness that came in the seconds before a free fall. She couldn't feel the ground beneath her sandals. Wah, Temari started to say. Hands grabbed her ankles, snaring her legs from beneath, and she realized that she was being dragged into the earth. It swallowed her up like quicksand in the blink of an eye, rising up to envelop her legs, her stomach, her chest, her shoulders. Nearly before she knew what was happening, Temari was encased up to her neck in distressingly tight-packed dirt, and above her crouched the guilelessly grinning jackass, who had just humiliated her. Headhunter Jutsu, a real classic, said Naruto Uzumaki, giving a V sign that made Temari long to break free and punch him in that cocky bastard face. I guess that's another victory for me. Sorry Temari, but you'd have to get up pretty early in the morning to beat this guy. He chuckled and looked up. Hey, that rhymes sort of. Sorry Temari. Temari glared at him in righteous indignation. I hate you, she hissed. You're not the first, Naruto said, and you won't be the last either, I'm sure. Lots of people hate me, but way more love me, Temari growled irritably. Twitching, she looked askance at the referee. Then a thought struck. Naruto had been right underneath her. You didn't look up my skirt, did you? She asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. A beat. 2 seconds passed. Of course not, Naruto said. You're a little too far on the young side for me. Temari scowled, unsure as whether to be relieved, offended, or vaguely weirded out by this remark. Elsewhere in the arena, Genma belatedly dug his way out from underneath the rather hefty cedar. Seeing Temari buried in the ground and Naruto standing over her, he did the sensible thing and announced the match as a win in the boys' favor. Naruto would proceed to the next round, either the finals or the semi-finals, depending on the outcomes of the next 2 fights. Rosa twitched, up in the cage box. His expression was a tad baleful, such that the CUSA representative inched tentatively away from him. I know I was largely expecting this outcome, after how handily the boy defeated Gaara, he said under his breath, almost a sigh, but still, this was just embarrassing. What? Said Hiruzen. The way he provoked your daughter into losing her temper and used the ensuing chaos of her jutsu to sneak up on her and launch a surprise attack from underground. No, Rosa said. That was sound tactical thinking, even if the ease with which Temari rose to his bait was just a touch disappointing. No, I'm talking more about the fact that both of my children have lost to someone who seems obsessed with the most puerile of ninjutsu. I mean, really, it's appropriate though, in a way, Hiruzen mused. Kitsune have long been depicted as using such shape-shifting powers to trick and seduce humans. What was that? Rosa looked up from his mulish brooding, distracted. Oh, nothing important, Hiruzen chortled. Rosa frowned, seeming mildly perplexed. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Hiruna's jaw dropped, the hidden grass representative quickly connecting the dots. Well, call me a monkey's uncle, she muttered, swallowing. The Sandame smiled. The next match was highly anticipated by young lads and lolicans alike, hoping to see a catfight. Everyone else was just excited to see the Hyuga clan heiress and Tsunade's youngest apprentice duke it out. Bets were placed, money changing hands all over the place. Expectations were high. It was sure to be a knockdown, drag-out slugfest, a real slabberknoker of a fight. Hinata Hyuga and Sakura Hiruno faced off. They shared knowing smiles. While they had never been especially close in the academy, or as genin, in the latter halves of their lives thus far, the two of them had come to establish a certain bond as women suffering, at one point or another, from unrequited love. They came to share a camaraderie and mutual support for one another's affections, a shared understanding. Even if Sakura's initial motives had been less than entirely selfless, she'd still ultimately played a bigger part in convincing Naruto and Hinata to get together than just about any other single person. And Hinata had been immeasurably grateful for this, and had stood by Sakura in her own search for love, a close friend and confidant in lonely times. Ino, for how in sync she and Sakura were, was nonetheless admittedly not always the best at keeping secrets, or the most capable of understanding Sakura's troubles. In matters of love, when it came to her relationship with Sasuke, it was usually Hinata in whom Sakura confided, whose quiet strength and boundless patience she leaned on and borrowed to carry her through lonely years spent waiting for word from her husband. Hinata and Sakura got each other in a way that few people did, male or female. Let's make this a good show, okay? Sakura said. Our success hinges on making this look impressive. Yes, Hinata said, nodding. Let's. It began. Sakura's fingers danced through a quick sequence of hand seals. With a grin, she slapped her hand down on the ground. Earth style. Mud wave jutsu. The ground rippled violently, concentric circles traveling outward from the point of contact. Like the surface of a pond disturbed by a pebble, compacted soil rose and fell in a classic waveform. Hinata jumped over the crest of the first wave, landing in the trough and kicking off. She cleared the next two in a single bound, landing on the rear side of the fourth wave. She formed a hand seal, and sparks crackled around her feet. She vanished in a blur of motion, and the ground stilled. Sakura was already weaving the seals for her next jutsu. Inhaling deeply, she focused her chakra, cheeks puffed out, and she spat a formidable quantity of water in front of her. Water style, water wall. Flames blossomed before the wave, starbursts of red and orange impacting the fluid rampart. Hissing steam billowed, flame quenched and water boiled. For an instant, Hinata's silhouette was visible in the cloud of vapor. Then the steam broke on one side, a dark figure leaping out too fast for its shape to discern. It swerved quickly, looking like it aimed to flank Sakura. Scoffing, The pinkette formed another seal and kicked the ground. A wall of hardened earth shot up, an immovable bulwark intercepting the figure's trajectory. She started running to one side, and more walls rose up to follow the first one, like a line of fortifications painted out in a castle building RTS. Another figure appeared in front of her, outrunning the wall. In the moment it slowed down while shifting its velocity, swerving on sandaled toes to face her with pale eyes. She saw that it was Hinata, or maybe a clone at least. Sakura cocked her arm back and curled her hand into a fist. Earth Spear. Her skin darkened, like getting a considerable tan in mere seconds. She punched, her fist past Hinata's head. The flesh and blood blow didn't land, but the bow wave from her arm, the mere wake of her punch, was enough to knock the other girl off her feet. Hinata stumbled and fell into Sakura's body. There was a smile on her face, a shadow clone destabilized. In lieu of a harmless puff of smoke, it broke apart in forks of electricity lashing Sakura's body, coursing through her defensive jutsu like it wasn't even there. Damn, that's bracing, Sakura hissed, biting her lip. Her skin reverted to its normal shade, except that her face was a touch rosier than usual. She smirked crookedly. Are you trying to get me excited, Hinata-chan? She stepped to the side, and Hinata passed palm first through the air, where Sakura's back had been a second earlier, a silent and cat-like pounce. Perhaps I am, Hinata smiled in good humor. That's one way to take an opponent out of the game, isn't it? A very unorthodox way, Sakura laughed. They spun. A fist came up with blinding speed, ripping through the air like an anti-tank round. Fluid and graceful, Hinata twisted her torso and sidestepped, a palm lancing out at the same moment. Sakura's punch clipped Hinata's midsection, and Hinata's strike grazed Sakura's shoulder. One staggered and coughed up a bit of blood-flecked spittle, pressing a hand to her gut and wincing. The other grimaced and flexed, clenching her fist stiffly and awkwardly, her arms' movements a bit clumsy. Meeting one another's eyes, they leaped back to gain distance, then snapped their hands together in a blinding series of seals. Both inhaled deeply, then exhaled at the end of their mudra. Suten, Tsurayuden no Jutsu. Sakura expectorated 10,000 drowned lungs worth of lung, an oriental whim of pure water. Its coiled length moved ponderously through the air, an elongated head coming down with jaws spread wide. Kaiten. Kiryu Enden. Hinata spewed a sea of flame, and from the inferno rose the visage of a terrible drake. It leaped up bearing fangs of yellow and orange, illusory eyes like deep red coals set into a spectral, sneering head. It was a clash of ninjutsu in the most ancient sense, two warriors shaping the elements to do their bidding, bringing their phantasmal arts to a head in a single, terrible stroke. Dragons of fire and water dueled with a cataclysmic roar of crackling flame and rushing current. Steam billowed. It enveloped the arena in a thick, searing cloud. Shizune took a moment to pick her jaw up off the floor. Her mouth was agape, and her eyes were open wide. Iruka, next to her, was gawping at the spectacle of Sakura and Hinata's fight. Knuckles went bone white with the force of his grip on Shizune's hand, and she was returning the favor ounce for ounce. Incredible, she breathed. I didn't think these kids were at such a high level. I'm not sure I could pull off that kind of ninjutsu. They're shoo-ins for Chunin. At this rate, Iruka said, slowly shaking his head. At least, as long as they don't make any serious tactical blunders. But it would take a lot of repeated, foolish decisions on their parts to fumble it by this point. Shizune nodded slowly, still a little in shock as she observed the scale of the pair's battle. You know, the crazy thing is, I'd swear they're not even going all out, she muttered under her breath, her forehead crinkling and corrugating as she knitted her brows and pursed her lips. Iruka did not miss this, neither Shizune's words, nor what she observed. He caught both, and had to admit that she might have had a point, even as inconceivable as it seemed, but he wasn't sure he wanted to believe that. He simply wasn't ready to think that these kids were fighting at this level and yet still holding back. It was a little too scary to contemplate. Shinero, Sakura's battle cry tore through the arena, and a slight figure could be dimly seen leaping through the steam, scarcely more than a shadow to most of the observers. She struck the ground knuckles first. Hinata, her Byakugan active and capable of seeing Sakura's chakra through the steam cover, handily dodged the attack. The earth, unfortunately, could not. Scattering, the cloud of steam exploded. It was blasted away by dust and shockwaves. At Sakura's feet, beneath her fist, the ground tore open. Rock shards and clods of dirt sprayed through the air, solid earth buckling and fracturing around the rim of a newly formed crater. Hunks of soil and gravel ranging in size from small caliber bullets to minivans flew out from the epicenter of Sakura's brutal strike like the frag grenade from hell. Hinata spun on her heels, seeing a good deal of this ballistic debris headed right for her, and performed a flawless kaiten. The shrapnel broke, or rebounded off of the defensive waza, and for a moment the swirling dome of chakra gouged the soil out in a crater to rival the impact from Sakura's punch. Wisps of ethereal light began to unfurl then, after a handful of seconds, and it dissipated. For a moment, Hinata seemed to be staring Sakura down, then she stepped out of the crater and thrust both palms forward. Hack. Kuwahekishao. A wave of pressurized air and chakra slammed into Sakura, and the pinkette had to roll with the attack to keep from being knocked down. She somersaulted backwards and ducked to minimize her profile. On your feet, Sakura. I know that wasn't enough to end this, heh? Whoever said I was off my feet? Hinata smiled. With a flex of her inner power, she manifested a pair of ghostly lion's heads over her hands. Her body itself became enveloped in the aura of a dragon. Sakura, at the other end of the field, cracked her knuckles and tapped into her seal of 100 strengths. Arcane script unraveled from the diamond mark on her forehead, spreading to frame her face. The pinkette bit her thumb and weaved a quick and fairly familiar series of seals. In a puff of smoke, a mini Katsuayo appeared on her shoulder. Grinning, Sakura clenched her fists. Is it time already, Sakura-sama? The polite slug queried, addressing her summoner with the utmost respect. Yeah, just like we practiced. Okay, Katsuayo nodded. Her form glowed momentarily with chakra, but the luminescence quickly faded. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Sakura's irises turned a piercing gold. Dark red pigment bloomed around her eyes. Hell yes, she growled. Time to kick some Hyruga booty. Jiraiya inhaled with a sharp hiss, eyes nearly bugging out of his sockets. Spinning around to face Tsunade, he gaped at her smugly grinning face. I don't mean to be rude, but isn't that sage chakra? Yes, Tsunade said, smirking at her teammate. Yes it is. You taught that girl how to use sage mode, Jiraiya repeated, at a loss. I didn't know, Tsunade said. Katsuayo showed her the ropes. Jiraiya shook his head, slowly settling back into his seat. Wow, and she already has the hang of it, he whistled. Man, that boy really wasn't kidding about how strong his teammates were. If that girl was 10, 20 years older, she'd kick your ass. Well, yes, probably, Jiraiya grinned, but I reckon I'd enjoy it, depending on what kind of a woman she grew into. Tsunade rolled her eyes. Incorrigible lech, she muttered. Jiraiya shrugged. I am what I am. Metsu Hadouken. An orb of deep indigo flame shot across the battlefield, as large as any Gaokakayu in Uchiha had ever spat. Hinata threw the fireball with her hands, summoning it between the lions' heads through strength of chakra and force of will. Sakura flipped over the fireball, a graceful and acrobatic move that would have won her the perfect score at any civilian gymnastics competition. Deftly, she bounded and vaulted over subsequent waves of pressure and bolts of energy, elemental chakra flashing across the arena. They met in the center. An exchange of blows took place, swift and artful. Sakura's fists shattered the earth with every swing, embedding craters in the arena wall without even coming close to touching them. Hinata danced a perilous tango with her foe. The dragon aura absorbed the worst of the force from Sakura's blows, but it was still enough to nearly lay her out flat with every strike. Hinata's hands were a blur, springing to and fro. Palms struck, fingers jabbed, while twin lions followed her every movement. Sakura's tinketsu closed, here and there, but the girl was clever and knew enough about anatomy to understand where she did not want Hinata hitting her, and mostly managed to protect those spots. Damn, that's one tough cookie, Sakura muttered, ineffectually smiting the brow of Hinata's dragon cloak. You're barely even staggering when I hit you. I know how to take a punch, Hinata said, but so do you. I must say, I am really not making much headway here. Hinata grazed Sakura's left arm, barely managing to stick out her thumb and jab it into another tinketsu. Sakura drove a knee into Hinata's gut, and even through the defensive aura the Hyruga winced. How much chakra do you think you have left? Sakura asked, panting. With how we've been burning through it, Hinata said, beads of sweat scintillating beneath her chakra shroud. Maybe half. Damn, Sakura muttered. I can't be at more than a third full, myself. We'll have to really stretch to make this convincing. You haven't tapped into the yang chakra yet, Hinata said. I don't want to overpower you. Just end this in a draw, Sakura grinned crookedly. Plus, I don't really like using that chakra for fighting. As long as I keep it in reserve solely for healing, I can sorta justify spending the rest of my chakra on big, flashy jutsu. Hinata smiled. You just want to show off, don't we all? Sakura laughed. Besides, this was your idea, that is, ending the match in a draw so our husbands can fight each other on even footing, or even-ish. At least, Hinata stepped back, and so did Sakura. The former's chakra shrouds dissipated, the latter's eyes went back to their natural color, the markings on her face fading. Katsuayo disappeared in a puff of smoke. Bullets of sweat fell in a torrential shower from their pores, uncountable beads of moisture slicking their skin and dampening their clothes. Oof, Sakura panted, wiping some perspiration from her forehead. Damn, I am going to reek by the time we get back to the boys. This body really can't take the heat. Literally. Hinata nodded, looking a little woozy. Shall we? She said, moving into a marginally shaky stance. Yes, Sakura grinned. and they collided in one last exchange, a single blow each. Hinata landed a palm square to Sakura's sternum. Sakura drove a fist into Hinata's abdomen. Both coughed up a bit of blood. Then they swooned as one, collapsing backwards into the dirt. A dead faint seemingly, Genma poked his head out of the shelter he'd erected at the opposite end on the arena, constructed from the logs of the trees Temari had cut down in her rage at Naruto. Is it over? He wondered anxiously. A pause. He looked at Sakura and Hinata's seemingly unconscious forms. Oh, well, he said. It seems this round ends in a tie. The audience cheered. Hinata and Sakura smiled.
It was time. Two competitors walked out into the arena, bowing to one another, giving pre-fight greetings and nods of acknowledgement. Naruto, Sasuke, in the cage box, Rosa and Hiruna looked more bored than interested, most likely because the participants from their villages were out of the running. Now it was just a fight of one Konoha ninja versus another Konoha ninja. Even if one of those ninja was one of the last survivors of an ancient and noble clan, and the other was obviously the son of the fourth Hokage and slightly less obviously the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon fox. Not that Rosa had actually worked out that last bit, yet, it was still ultimately just a fight between Leaf Ninja. Neither the Kazekage nor the Kusagakure Jounin Council's representative had any particular investment in this match. Surely they'd already seen the extent of these kids' abilities by now. Maybe they might still have one or two tricks left up their sleeves, but how much more could there really be? They were both already shoo-ins for Chunin anyways. It didn't matter to them who, out of Naruto and Sasuke, won. Either way, it was a victory for Konoha. Big deal. The tension in the audience, on the other hand, was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Admittedly, actually trying to do so would have promptly earned one a shuriken through the eye from one of the Twitch-ear ninja spectators, but it was still a useful metaphor. And the chakra was just as thick, between Naruto and Sasuke. Iruka was torn between swelling with pride and developing an aneurysm. Shizune was patting him on the shoulder and fighting the urge to sweet drop at the sheer levels of power radiating from the arena. Jiraiya grinned smugly, and Tsunade scoffed. Anko cackled and puffed out her chest, draping an arm over Kakashi's shoulder. Guy on the copy ninja's other side, was wide-eyed and bushy-browed. Asuma and Kunui, in another section of the audience, respectively puffed on a cigarette and took a draught from a flask smelling strongly of vodka. Heiate Gecko and Yugeo Yuzuki were not present in the stands. They'd slipped away to share some alone time at the start of the second round, and were probably snuggled up in some remote cranny right about now. The other Konoha ninja in the audience demonstrated reactions ranging from hometown pride to slight anxiety. Even civilians with zero chakra sense could feel the pressure emanating from the arena. Hell, the stadium itself was nearly starting to shake as Naruto and Sasuke presented the seals of confrontation to one another. Itachi Uchiha had his Sharingan active, and he was sitting ramrod straight in his seat. He was one of the only people here, along with the Sandaime and the time travelers themselves, and their mentors and sensei, to a lesser extent, who had any idea of just how high up the relative power scale Naruto and Sasuke really were. Him, and basically just about every sensenin within 10 miles of the arena, whether the two boys had been partially erasing their presences until now, or had only just now begun to seriously imbue their chakra, the effect was truly awe-inspiring either way. Itachi was sure he could see pebbles and smaller bits of debris floating up around and between the youths as they stared off in the arena. Hayashi and family, in one of the rows in front of Itachi, were blatantly gobsmacked. Neji looked like he was close to breaking down in hysterical paroxysms. Hayashi was gaping like a goldfish, and Hanabi was perplexedly asking her father some very awkward questions about that giant nine-tailed kitsune standing behind Naruto. Tenten, for her part, was simply perturbed by her date's behavior, and wondering what on earth Hanabi was talking about. She didn't see any darned foxes. Genma looked ready to piss himself, down in the arena, and he was frantically inching away from the two finalists. His face was chalk white, not an ounce of killing intent was coming off those kids, and yet they were almost visibly brimming with chakra. If you squinted, you could even see a slight glow around their bodies like a human corona. Let's keep this a clean fight, okay? Genma squeaked, standing around 15 meters, nearly 50 feet, give or take, away from the pair, practically at the very edge of the arena. We're ninja, Sasuke said in response, Onyx eyes alternately graying and erebusing, a Sharingan word to life. Of course it will be a clean fight. Genma was not the slightest bit reassured by this. Very well, he said, inching still further back, moving until his back hit the wall of the stadium. The poor referee felt acutely like an ant at the feet of giants. Begin. He swung his hand down. Sasuke and Naruto smiled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a blur of motion, a field of gleaming black that seemed to flash between the pair. It lasted less than a second, accompanied by a noise like thunder in its volume, but more akin to the clashing of a million swords in its piercing ring.
In an instant, the ground between and around Naruto and Sasuke became ringed with a thick field of darts. Shuriken and Kyuubi bristled in packed soil, bent and blunted and sundered as though they had each endured thousands of impacts over years of use, except they had the clean, polished gleam of new metal, the shine of weapons, which had not yet seen extensive use, and probably never would, now, given their present shape. From an aerial view, the result of this nigh instantaneous exchange looked rather similar to how iron filings would arrange themselves around two opposing magnets on a flat plane. Slowly the audience paused what had just happened. In a fraction of a second, it seemed Naruto and Sasuke had bombarded one another with enough throwing weapons to make Tenten blush, and deflected every last one of them just as quickly. Most of the darts had to have clashed in mid-air, Shuriken intercepting Shuriken, Kyuubi glancing off of Kyuubi. Neither of the combatants had a single scratch on them. Genma gaped. In the audience as well, many spectators were astounded by the sheer speed at which this fight had occurred. Rosa and the Kyusa representative both stared, shocked out of their impatient boredom. Sasuke hummed, flipping a bent and twisted Kyuubi in his hand. "You threw them too hard," he said, smiling idly. "This was one of my good knives. I could say the same to you, Sasuke." Naruto laughed and lazily tossed a similarly battered Kyuubi into the dirt at his feet. "Your shuriken were going just as fast. Speed used to be my thing, between the two of us," Sasuke replied. "Back before you got all those boosts from Kurama." He drew another Kyuubi, and this one danced with flickers of electricity. Chakra extended from his blade like a partially defective lightsaber, sparking and buzzing around the edges. He brandished it like a sword, tightening the blade and honing it into a perfectly straight and controlled edge. "That was a very long time ago," Naruto said, shrugging. He drew a Kyuubi himself, and visibly channeled chakra around the blade. "Besides, you can teleport." "Yes, so I can," Sasuke smirked. Suddenly, the pair of them vanished. An instant later, they reappeared, their chakra streamed Kyuubi clashing together. Dust was kicked up in spiral ridges at their feet, and they swung their blades in a flurry of movement. Soil and gravel were sliced up cleanly around them, fine cuts and deep gouges quickly marking the dirt. Naruto and Sasuke started changing the natures of their chakra. Wind bit into the edge of a tethered lightning bolt, and sparks erupted in a gout of flame fed by that wind, which bore back down in a crash of water threatening to consume the fire, only to break as flame cooled and became rigid earth, over which the waves washed harmlessly, only to course with lightning and smite the rock, shattering it, save for a fierce wind to sweep out from the broken earth and rebuff the thunder, so on and so forth, ad infinitum. They cycled through the elements with each swing, strategizing on the fly like a life or death game of rock paper scissors to anticipate their opponent's next choice. And considering that both Sasuke's Sharingan and Naruto's Senjutsu granted them a kind of combat precognition, they were naturally making dozens of split-second adjustments with each swing, a game of mental cat and mouse played at a speed most ninja could only dream of. Doing this much was mere child's play for them. Neither of the combatants even felt the infinitesimal drain this continual streaming and shifting of natured chakra put on their reserves. It was mere droplets out of an ocean, nothing over which to concern themselves. Killer Bee cocked his head. "Ha, you think so, Hatsun? That's a trip," he said seemingly to himself. "If I couldn't feel that chakra, I'd say get a grip." Omoi, seated nearest to Bee, eyed him curiously. "What are you talking about, sensei? Those boys down there are hella strong." Bee grinned. "Kyuubi at least, if Hatsun ain't wrong." Chaoji cocked his head. "Ha, what's that about the Kyuubi? Who's Hatsun?" Samui, seated on the opposite side of Keru, quickly paled. She put two and two together with ease, and whipped her head around to stare at the two combatants in surprise. "I didn't think Konoha had Jinchuriki," she muttered. Chaoji blinked. "What's a Jinchuriki?" Samui, Keru, and Omoi turned to stare at him. They looked at B-sensei, then back to Chaoji. They looked away. "Nothing important," they lied, looking rather anxious. Puzzled, Chaoji absent-mindedly took a potato chip, and ate it. Crack! Naruto and Sasuke leaped back, dropping their respective Kyuubi. Iron blades crumbled into dust, scattering on a breeze before they could touch the ground. The two fighters landed at the opposite edges of the crater which had formed at their feet, torn up by the repeated, cataclysmic clashes of the elements that had erupted from every swing of their knives. The arena grounds were already a complete mess, with fallen trees and pitted earth everywhere, and this did nothing to improve the state of the landscaping. Rocks ranging in size from pebbles to great boulders were tumbled across gouged and pockmarked soil, and a once level field was now as much slopes and crevices as flat ground. A trio of commas ringed the pupil of Sasuke's right eye. His left eye was grey with concentric circles like a layered focusing lens. Naruto had dark orange marks around his eyes, and bar-shaped pupils and golden irides. HMPH. "Streaming chakra isn't your specialty," Sasuke observed, idly clenching his fist. "Your technique is still sloppy in that area." Only in the sense that you're a little better at it than I am, Naruto said. He clasped his hands as if praying. You haven't taken advantage of the openings left by my missing arm, either. Sasuke knitted the fingers of his own hand into an esoteric configuration. And don't try to say there aren't any openings. I know there are, and I know you're good enough to take advantage of them. It's obvious, isn't it? Naruto said, rolling his eyes and smirking. You're just trying to bait me. The moment I move in to exploit that apparent opening, bam, you'll grow a mech arm and sock me in the gut. I'm not stupid, Sasuke laughed. Even after all this time, I continue to underestimate your intelligence. I'm smarter than I look. Naruto grinned. Sasuke inhaled through his nostrils, nearly imperceptible. Kaiten. Gauka Mikayaku. He spewed a massive orb of fire, vast and ponderous. It swept through the crater and scorched the dirt, waves of heat rolling off it in an oppressive manner, nearly suffocating in their intensity. With his visual prowess, Sasuke could see Naruto spitting out a small lake's worth of water in response like it was happening in slow motion. Acting half on instinct, Sasuke jumped up into the air and formed another seal. Kaiten. Goenka. He spat out 3 fireballs at once, and they descended like a trio of burning comets. In response, the tall waves crashed and climbed upward, arching like a raised shield over Naruto's head, the water forming into a solid dome around the blonde. It looked like a Daibakusu Shouha, but Sasuke wasn't completely sure. Either way, of course, the jutsu would probably suffice to nullify his 2 fire attacks. Sasuke looked at the ground behind Naruto, and he teleported behind his teammate in an instant. He raised his hand, and it sparked with electricity, but lightning would penetrate with ease. Chido. A fist crashed into his jaw, and Sasuke stumbled back. The attacker spun around, aiming to drive an elbow into his gut. He caught this with his hand, but his assailant twisted and flipped upside down, and a hard knee struck his shoulder. Sasuke let go and body flickered a few steps back. A shadow clone stared him down with the same sage mode eyes as its maker. Naruto's water dome steamed and rippled as the flames from Sasuke's prior jutsu washed over it. Only a couple of seconds had passed. By their usual standards, the blonde was effectively standing still. He turned around slowly inside the dome as the flames continued to gutter and fizzle. Mind you, the speed of this action would still have seemed respectable to most ninja, and terribly impressive to most civilians, but it was painstakingly slothful to Sasuke's perception. The original Naruto was far from his primary concern. However, Sasuke ducked to avoid having his head taken off by a Rasenshuriken, then jumped over a second Rasenshuriken, and teleported to the left to dodge a third and fourth. Shrieking detonations tore up the battlefield, Naruto's shadow clone throwing around Rasenshuriken like they were, well, ordinary shuriken. Sasuke burned a few precious seconds on the evasive, weaving and rolling and leaping and teleporting to avoid a seemingly endless barrage of randomly natured Rasenshuriken. One scorched the earth in a hellstorm of fire, leaving behind vitrified soil like glass. Another crashed and rumbled with the sound of thunder, smiting the arena wall like Thor and Zeus playing a game of darts. The water dome collapsed. Yet another Rasenshuriken exploded in a shower of lava after carving a trench halfway across the field, filling one of the larger craters up to the brim with molten rock. Even more caused everything from localized earthquakes to blizzards to screaming Komeitochi on steroids, and this was still only a fraction of the elements at Naruto's disposal. Wow, and here I thought Sasuke had won the lottery with his chakra natures. Anko whistled, looking down into the arena as her apprentice dodged through a bullet hell of insanely destructive jutsu. Where would a person even get all those affinities? I know his mum didn't have half that crap, and the Yondame's parents were just fishermen. Kakashi shrugged. For sanity's sake, I've been assuming he got it from, well, you know. He looked around, seeing a number of foreigners and kids in the seats around them. Furry little problem. Kurama, you mean, said Guy. Kakashi turned his head to stare. And how do you know that name? He asked. He himself had only learned of the Kyuubi's supposed true name when Naruto told it to him after a little freakout he had the first time the boy had used his other chakra in training, and it had still taken Kakashi more than a few doses of tranquilizer to calm down from that revelation. Tenten, Guy said simply, as if this was completely normal. She heard it from Neji, and he heard it from his cousin, Hanabi, who apparently heard it from her sister Hinata, who knew it from. He paused and shrugged. Well, you know, a beat. Know what? Anko wondered. Kakashi sweet dropped. Are those two really that obvious? Sasuke ducked under an acid-style Rasenshuriken, and narrowly sidestepped a steam release one as well. He wasn't entirely clear on the exact distinction between the two, save that one was more gaseous while the other was more liquid. Both dissolved things, after all, so maybe it was just a matter of semantics, but he was distracted from this train of thought by another Rasenshuriken, this one with unmistakable wind chakra. His Sharingan blazed, and a giant skeletal arm of purple chakra came into being on his left. Phalanges locked together,
bony fingers curling over the buzzsaw spokes of the shadow clone's most recent attack. A shoulder sprouted from the arm's base, translucent flesh beginning to knit over ghostly bones as ribs spread out and curled around Sasuke's flank. The Rasenshuriken detonated, and blades of wind tore at the arm of a storm god. It had minimal effect. Sasuke's form seemed to dance with flames, for a moment, deep violet tongues flickering up from his body. Then his chakra surged, and his eyes flashed. A great, armored Tengu enveloped his form, wings spreading out, and he stood up on two legs like trees, towering over his opponent. Naruto's shadow clone paused in its barrage. Well shit, it said. Looks like Sasuke's tired of dodging. Yeah, the original Naruto appeared at the clone's side, his hands clasped. I kinda figured that would happen, enough fooling around. Naruto came, Sasuke's voice from the Susanoo. It glared down at the blonde and his shadow clone. Fight seriously for once. Naruto let out an exasperated sigh. Geez, this guy, he can say what he wants, but he really is just like that ancestor of his, isn't he? In one way, at least. An arrow of black flame pierced the ground next to Naruto, narrowly missing him and his shadow clone. It devoured rock and dirt, incinerating them all in a slow but steady burn as hot as the sun. Or that's how it was classically described, at least. If you don't want to fight me for my sake, then do it for your sake, Sasuke said, his Susanoo stepping forward and making the ground tremble under its weight. It's only natural, after all, for a man to want to show off in front of his, well, he trailed off. The semi-real visage of a Tengu warrior curled in a knowing smirk, mirroring the expression on its creator's face. A moment passed. Go set up a barrier, said Naruto to his clone. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles, an eye twitching. This fight's become a matter of pride, it would seem. He smirked half in spite of himself. His shadow clone nodded and formed a cross seal, splitting into 4 identical blondes. The duplicates scattered to the corners of the arena. Naruto, the original, took a deep breath as his clones clasped their hands and stood in formation, flaring their chakra. As the fiery crimson walls of a 4-red yang formation barrier joined around the battlefield and rose into the sky, Naruto slowly exhaled. Orbs of black as deep and dark as the metaphorical void manifested behind him, and his clothes became wreathed in a rune-marked, shining gild. He clutched a monk's staff in his right hand, an implement of purest ebon, and a coat of flame danced over his torso. Sasuke swung a fist down, and the austere visage of the Nine Tails caught the blow on a shimmering brow, a shroud of golden chakra, in the shape of Kurama's head manifesting to guard Naruto. The ground depressed into a crater at his feet, a vast bowl of cracked and crushed soil thrice as wide and twice as deep as any that had been made by Sakura or Hinata. You want to fight, Sasuke? Naruto grinned. Do you? Sasuke rejoined. In answer, the fox head's mouth opened and spat a Bijudama into Susanoo's face. Spectators dumbly gaped. That's an impressive barrier jutsu, Kin Suchi hummed, seated next to Teiwaya. It reminds me a little of your Shishinjin. I bet it's nowhere near as strong, though she smirked, an expression intended to share a sense of confidence with her girlfriend. Teiwaya sheepishly averted her gaze. The 4 violet flames formation, she knew, could theoretically be performed by any 4 halfway competent chunin. In contrast, the 4 red yang formation could only be performed by cage-level ninja. Lord Orochimaru had emphasized this point when teaching the sound for their barrier jutsu. Shiseki Aojin was to Shishinjin, he'd said, as a tiger was to a house cat. The last time on record that the former jutsu had been performed, it had been by Lord Orochimaru himself, working alongside his old master and teammates, the god of shinobi and legendary Sannin. That was the baseline minimum level of power needed to pull that jutsu off. Yeah, Teiwaya said, not meeting her girl's eyes. Sure, but I suppose it's impressive, in its own way, Kin continued, chortling haughtily. That these losers could perform even a much degraded form of your own jutsu, right? Teiwaya murmured. She winced and coughed into her fist, fidgeting. It's not exactly my jutsu though. It does take all 4 of us sound 4 to pull it off, after all. Kin looked at her with half-lidded eyes. Modesty doesn't suit you, dear, she said flatly. Teiwaya blushed and decided to change the topic. What is that? Neji deadpanned, pointing at Sasuke's Susanoo. Looks like a giant made of chakra, said Tenten. Well, yes, obviously, but where did it come from? Wasn't your Byakugan active, nephew? Higher, she said, veins bulging around his eyes. It looked to me like the chakra came from his Sharingan. Is that a Daojutsu power, then? Hanabi wondered. Making giant armor out of chakra? Neji twitched. It can't be, he protested. That doesn't make any sense. Itachi, a row or 2 back, cocked his head. How so? He inquired, catching the Hyuga family's attention. It makes perfect sense to me, Neji sweet-dropped. Susanoo brandished a sword of black flame, and Sasuke swung the blade in a wide arc. Tongues of burning pitch lashed out, carving through the arena floor like a knife through warm butter, gouging deep rifts down even into bedrock. Shiseki Hyojin shuddered and flexed, and the air whipped and whirled about Susanoo, roaring in displacement with every movement it made. Naruto darted around, nimbly dodging every stroke of Sasuke's giant, burning sword. He flew both metaphorically and literally, zipping about Susanoo's feet and shooting up around its head. He intermittently thrust fists of chakra at the guardian construct's body, hands several times the size of his body appearing out of nowhere to punch the armored icon. Then he began to retaliate in earnest, holding out his Shikujo, the staff he'd formed from a truth-seeking orb. Naruto swiped it through the air. Blades of wind arced out along the trajectory his strokes described, slashing at its limbs. He stabbed the butt of the staff down, and the ground at Susanoo's feet turned to mud, a deep mire, burying it up to its waist. Jabbing the tip upward and swinging the staff down, he called lightning from a clear sky, smiting its head. Spinning it around, he summoned a raging deluge from cracks in the earth, battering its flanks. Thrusting it forth, he spewed a torrent of flames, enveloping its chest. The elements danced at his command, a concert of awesome power swirling about Sasuke's Susanoo. The titanic Tengu staggered under the assault, and the sword dissipated in its hand. After a moment more of this barrage, Susanoo's form wavered, then imploded with a deafening boom. Naruto landed back on the ground, looking up at the smoke. A second later, he felt Sasuke's hand on his shoulder. I figured you'd escape," he remarked, unperturbed. "But how do you do it, I wonder? It doesn't look like you were in there absorbing the jutsu." "I teleported out of the Susanoo halfway through the assault," Sasuke replied. "It's a new trick I'd been working on for our fight. I suppose you could consider it a kind of super-sized Kurumi. But what about you? Throwing around those jutsu without any hand seals?" "I've always been terrible at remembering long seal sequences," Naruto said with a shrug. "You know that, in 6 Paths Sage Mode, athlete, I find it easier to just manifest the elements and shape them directly. Kinda like with Rasenshuriken, but simpler." Sasuke rolled his eyes. "Only you could say something like that with complete sincerity, Naruto," he said. "Literally anyone else would tell you that's completely backwards." Naruto laughed. "I suppose it is, isn't it?" he said. "But I think that's how I've always been. Yes, perhaps," Sasuke chuckled. For a moment, they just stood like that, Sasuke behind Naruto with his hand on the blonde's shoulder. Then they exploded once more into motion. A truth-seeking orb slammed into Sasuke's chest, throwing him back. 2 more orbs followed this one, and began shaping themselves into restraints. Sasuke manifested a partial Susanoo though, and the orbs crashed against an armored torso. Electricity sparked from his fingers. Black lightning crashed down on Naruto's shoulder, throwing him forward, and the blonde had to spin in midair and dig the butt of his staff into the dirt. Forming the seal of confrontation, he conjured up a full-sized Biju shroud. Kurama opened his mouth wide and swung his tails. The barrier surrounding the battlefield shuddered and warped, flexing from the force of terrible shockwaves. The 9 tails spat an incomplete Bijudama, a wave motion gun of pure chakra blasting out with a roar. It washed over Susanoo, a wall of blinding light. After a moment the giant stood up, seemingly unperturbed, and produced an ornate longbow as tall as the Hokage Tower. It was unfazed, undamaged. Naruto looked out from inside Kurama's throat. "You're absorbing ninjutsu now, huh?" he guessed. Sasuke smiled and knocked an arrow. "So I am." In the waiting area, most of the disqualified participants watched this fight in steadily mounting awe. That's an awful lot of chakra," Karen murmured, swallowing. "Oh wow, holy shit, where in the world were they hiding all of that?" "What do you mean, Karen-san?" Lee looked quizzically at his girlfriend. He could see the awesome display out there with his own 2 eyes of course, but being a pure taijutsu user with no talent for ninjutsu or jinjutsu, Lee didn't really have any particular frame of reference for just how much jutsu like this would take out of a normal shinobi, nor any ability to objectively measure the amount of power being thrown around. He understood that this kind of thing was insanely impressive. To be sure, he wasn't blind, but, still, the sheer scale of this fight kind of threw everything out of perspective. He couldn't even begin to imagine it, despite seeing these things unfold with his own 2 eyes. "Those 2 are monsters," Karen said, weakly gesturing to the combatants. She looked pale, and she was trembling. "Goddamn, I've never felt so much chakra coming from a single person, ever, let alone 2 at once," she shuddered. "It's beyond human. How do you even begin to cultivate reserves like that?" Lee cocked his head and hummed thoughtfully for a moment, stroking his chin. Then he smiled and gave his girlfriend a thumbs up. "Isn't it obvious? Hard work of course," he beamed. "Naruto-kun and Sasuke-kun must truly be paragons of diligence, to achieve feats like this. Mere genius, surely, cannot account for such raw power." Karen's sweet dropped. "I don't think you quite get what we're talking about," she mumbled. "No matter," Lee laughed and threw an arm over her shoulder. "With enough perseverance, even the tortoise can outrun the hare. Maybe they seem overwhelming now, but we'll just have to work 10 times as hard to catch up with them."
He pulled Karen into a comradely hug, side by side, brimming with warm confidence. She blushed and melted in his arms, suddenly no longer caring about anything else. Rosa twitched. I hate you, he told Hiruzen. The Hokage smiled. Whatever for, he asked. You know damn well what for. Rosa glared and pointed into the arena, where the form of the nine-tailed demon fox could be seen as clear as day. That, since when has Konoha had a Jinchuriki? Half a beat. Nearly as long as it has existed, said Hiruzen blithely. Hiruna cocked an eyebrow and leaned forward, squinting at the spectacle in the arena. The two male Kage took a moment to appreciate the view. It's a well-kept secret, isn't it, she said. Is it really? The Sandame laughed. Perhaps from the children, but otherwise, he shrugged and gestured vaguely. Rosa scowled and leaned back in his seat. You're an utter bastard, he muttered. So I have been told, Hiruzen chuckled. A mushroom cloud of light blossomed at Kurama's feet. The gleaming fox bounded aside, tumbling as chunks of earth the size of oxen shot up with the speed of bullets and broke apart on his flank. He spat out a trio of Bijudama, aimed not at Susanoo, but its feet. Explosions ripped through the ground, tearing the arena to pieces. Susanoo staggered for a moment, toppling as it lost footing, only to spread its wings and alight into the sky. At their full size, now, the barrier felt very crowded. Susanoo's wingspan alone reached nearly the full distance from one wall to the other. Kurama's tails beat the sides of the barrier as he sprang up and spread his jaws wide. He roared with his voice in Naruto's, and the blonde formed a Bijudama in the gaping maw, encasing it with a shell made from his truth-seeker orbs. Clawed hands grabbed a Tengu's legs, and a Kitsune spat a midnight black globe up into its gut. Susanoo groaned like the sides of a ship tossed about on a stormy sea, and its abdomen depressed as the truth-seeking Bijudama drove deeper, one hand wreathing itself in black flame, the other shrieking with black lightning in a slow, almost melancholy kai, kai, kai. Sasuke thrust Susanoo's fists down onto Kurama's head. He spat water from his mouth, and beating wings fanned Kagastachi with a mighty gust. Lightning coursed over Kurama's form, and flames likewise engulfed it. Black smoke and roiling steam billowed out, a booming, flashing thunderhead enveloping the Kitsune in a Kailing's embrace, and two hands pierced the Kyuubi's shroud at the crown, thrusting down through and into its throat. At the same moment, Susanoo's ribs gave way with a thunderous crack, unable to absorb the truth-seeking shell around the Bijudama. The sphere proceeded into Susanoo's chest, where it detonated. The combined force of these attacks shook Shiseki Aojin, the Hokage-level barrier capable of tanking Bijudama from the fucking Jubi, and tore into ribbons, destroying it utterly in a single flash of light. The stadium quaked, rumbling down to its foundations. The battlefield disintegrated as a great explosion chewed through dirt and rock, creating a single rift that dwarfed every other maar and crater heretofore made, swallowing it all up in a single, uniform depression that spanned the full breadth of the walls and broke through deeply buried pipes. Fresh water poured out from the sides of a crater that had once been the arena, cooling slowly in the very bottom of the vast hole. For a moment, the spectators were breathless. Genma, who had been outside the barrier when it was made, breathed a tentative sigh of relief as he scrambled back down the arena wall. It was cracked and crumbling in places, but overall the stadium itself appeared to have suffered only superficial damage. This seemed frankly miraculous, but that wasn't the only apparent miracle, no. Naruto and Sasuke stood at the bottom of the newly formed basin, standing on the slowly rising waters. Their shirts had disintegrated, and their pants were also fairly tattered, but by and large the pair seemed amazingly intact. That was a nice spar, Sasuke said, smiling contentedly. When Sasuke Uchiha awoke, the first thing he noticed was that he was naked. This was mildly distressing, as he never slept in the nude, ever. The second thing he noticed was that he was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room, and that his surroundings seemed somehow smaller than they ought to have. Proportions were all subtly off, skewed lower and closer seeming than his brain expected. The third thing he noticed was that his left arm seemed to terminate prematurely in a useless stump of a thing. He had only a single hand, a single usable arm, and this realization would have sent him into a bit of a panic, regardless of his usual stoicism, if not for the next thing he noticed, namely, the naked woman lying next to him, except that saying she was next to him implied at least some modicum of distance separating their bodies, while here that was clearly not the case. She was practically lying right on top of him, to be frank, an arm curled around his shoulder while her lower half draped intimately over his midsection, and certain parts of her body were nuzzled very uncomfortably, comfortably close to a bit of aching stiffness unrelated to either muscles or exercise, and Sasuke probably would have gone into shock at this realization right away, if he hadn't then noticed something even stranger. The person lying next to slash on top of him was clearly an adult woman, fully grown and mature. He could tell that much even in this dim light. She had, well, all the features indicative of an adult woman, and many of those features were pressed very snugly against his own body. But that was part of the strangeness. Sasuke Uchiha was only 12, and not particularly tall for his age, so why on earth did this adult woman look short-earthed at him? She didn't have the proportions of a dwarf or pygmy, being shaped in the ratios of her arms and legs and torso like an ordinary-sized adult. So what the hell was this? The fact that she had pink hair of the same shade as one of his new teammates didn't help anything. Anxiously, Sasuke stirred. He tried to push the woman off of himself, wincing at the rather upsettingly pleasant discomfort of, certain things rubbing together. He stopped, uncontrollably blushing a deep red, and took a sharp breath in an attempt to calm himself. His brain was swirling despite an inability to think anything remotely coherent, and he was painfully cognizant of the fact that any attempt to maneuver this woman off of him with his single arm would be sure to meet with considerable complications. With a sound distressingly similar to a whimper, Sasuke went still and tried to think of a solution, but this was in vain. He was at a loss, and no ideas were forthcoming. Twitching and fidgeting unconsciously, feeling intensely uncomfortable with how content certain newly surfacing parts of his psyche were with this position, he tried to roll over. Nothing doing. That only exacerbated the problem. With how entangled her limbs were with his, she clung tightly to him in her sleep, made some worryingly fascinating noises in response to the movement of his body. He stopped, tense with anxiety and dread. Slowly, over several agonizingly long seconds, he perceived the woman beginning to stir. She yawned and mewled, shifting atop his body in ways of which he was far too acutely aware. Her eyes fluttered open to reveal striking emerald lamps. Despite himself, Sasuke's heart skipped a beat. The woman blinked. She stared at him, and he saw some sort of realization dawning on her face. It seemed she had been equally unaware of this arrangement. Eyes went wide as dinner plates. She froze up, going stiff as a board. After several seconds of unbearable silence, a shrill and piercing shriek tore from her lips. "Kyaa!" she screamed, scrambling off of him as though burned. She grabbed the sheets and pulled them up to cover herself, cowering and pointing accusingly. "Pervert, pedophile, get away from me, you dirty old geezer." She sprang off of the bed and dashed to the door, then, making a break for it, Sasuke stared in disbelief, flatly uncomprehending. Frozen in place, the woman continued to yell and raise a ruckus, fumbling and struggling with the doorknob for a moment in her panicked state. The door swung open, after a second, but it had nothing to do with the woman. She stumbled back and fell flat on her bottom, wild-eyed and surprised. She stared up a slender, willowy figure. Sasuke stared too. A teenager stood in the doorway, raven-haired and bespectacled, dressed in smartly conservative night clothes. She held a kunai in a reverse grip, and stood low in a combat-ready stance, scanning the room with sharp, piercing eyes, red eyes, ringed with commas, 3 tomoe apiece swirling around small, dark pupils. Sasuke's breath caught in his throat, unable to believe what his brain told him he was seeing. The woman, who was bearing more and more of a resemblance to Sakura Hiruno the longer he looked, went still, looking uncertain but hopeful. For a moment, the three of them stood in place. This was one of those moments, those instants, that seemed to catch and lag in the stream of time, a second that stretched out interminably into perceived eons of heavy, awkward silence, a tension like the sticky and viscous pull of a tar pit holding them all in place and dragging them down into its unfathomable depths. The moment hung there for ages, seemingly refusing to budge or progress, like a scratched DVD that got stuck on a scene forever, refusing to progress more than a single frame before pausing for several seconds, then starting, then pausing, and forcing the viewer to frustratedly jab the skip or rewind buttons on their remote or DVD player in a futile attempt to get to a part that would run properly. But then, abruptly and unceremoniously, it ended, and time once more resumed its natural flow. The teenager dropped out of her stance, her Sharingan, deactivated, and she looked away with a despondent sigh. Color drained from her very being, or so it seemed, and her exhalations seemed to expel all the energy from her body. She looked at Sasuke and the woman with dull, glassy eyes like those of a dead fish. Almost one might fancy, if this were rendered in manga style, that a wisp of soul shaped like a tiny, Casperesque ghost of the teen was trying to escape her mouth as she sighed. She looked like a woman who had just witnessed something no mortal should ever have to behold. "I see," she murmured. "So you guys are into that kind of play now. I should have known." She twitched and listlessly turned around, holding her kunai only limply. Looking over her shoulder, eyes glazed and staring somewhere into an indeterminate distance, she weakly raised the corners of her mouth into a stiff, hollow rictus. Her face was ashen, and she looked vaguely traumatized. "Sorry for interrupting, Mum, Dad." Sasuke blinked. He took a moment to process this. The woman blinked. She turned to stare at Sasuke. For several long seconds, she looked at his face, confused and curious. Then her eyes lit up with recognition, and in the same moment Sasuke knew. Perversely, why this woman bore such a resemblance to Sakura Hiruno. Sasuke-kun. The pinkette squealed, immediately brightening. Despite having the stature and, proportions of a grown, mature woman, her bearing and speech in that instant was undeniably that of a young girl, a young fangirl. Sasuke tried not to scream. Boruto, Bolt, Uzumaki and Sarada Salad Uchiha were two of a kind, some said, acclaimed as geniuses both, whether rightly or wrongly, as the Hokage's son and heiress of the clan Uchiha. They were respected and admired by many of their peers, and favored as well by some of their elders. Bolt, at 17 years of age, was in many ways the spitting image of his father, but in others also a very different person. With the benefit of parents to help him and teach him, he excelled early on where his father had floundered for many years, growing more quickly in skill, if possessing a similar lack of restraint or respect for authority. He grew up in his dad's shadow. Many people judged him in comparison to the Nanadame, even now, and from a young age he had gotten so sick of complete strangers cooing over him and asking if he wanted to be Hokage like his father that he had quite firmly decided long ago to never even consider pursuing that position. He didn't have to follow the same path as his dad. He was his own man, damn it. 5 years of service as a shinobi had done much to smooth out the rough edges of Bolt's personality, and he had over the years faced and overcome his own share of hardships. He had distinguished himself as an excellent and capable shinobi in his own right, growing into a reliable if not always responsible ninja of the leaf. He better appreciated as a young man nearing adulthood, just who his father was to the village and the world of shinobi, and had come to terms with the frustration and resentment he'd once felt. Not to be mistaken, Bolt was still standoffish and disrespectful to his father at nearly every turn, but it came now from a place of fondness and, somewhat paradoxically, genuine respect. He derided his dad as an uncool and out-of-touch old stiff, and scoffed at people who acted overawed of the man, but it was in the manner of a healthy teenager expressing their independence, rather than an angry child railing against what he saw as an unfair world. Sarada, in turn, was blessed with the fame of the Uchiha clan, and cursed with their infamy. Those people closest to her parents in a circle tended to treat her fondly, and those a little further out were prone to admiring both her skill and potential. But at the edges of the comfortable little circles in which she had grown up, there were many people who disdained, resented, or outright hated the Uchiha, whether out of mere principle or genuine grievance. In her early years, her mother had done a good job of sheltering Sarada from the more unpleasant truths of her father's ancestry. While Sarada had always been clever and inquisitive, Sakura managed to gloss over a lot of the messier details of the Uchiha clan's sordid past, focusing on the positive, emphasizing the good and admirable parts of their history while her daughter was young. Now obviously, Sarada had issues with her dad while growing up, mostly in regards to his nearly constant absence for a good chunk of his life. She'd been 12 when she met him for the first time, but that was in the past. Sasuke Uchiha had fulfilled his mission years ago, and had made up for lost time as best he could. He was awkward, socially, and a bit dour at times, but the Uchiha family had managed to make its share of happy memories, and furthermore, as a modestly experienced kunoichi herself, and one aspiring to be Hokage at that, Sarada could now understand why her dad had done what he did the way he did it. Shinobi had their duty, and that duty had to be carried out unquestioningly. Wanting to make a world where such things weren't necessary was a not inconsiderable part of her motivation to become Hokage, but it was a long journey, and while Sarada was certainly a most favored candidate, highly esteemed within Konoha, there were still those who remembered the sins of her forefathers, and who bitterly held those crimes against her. She'd come a long way, but hatred was slow to erode, and slower still to be forgotten. A lot of people had grievances against her ancestors, just or unjust, and even her own father faced lingering resentment despite all he had done for the village and the shinobi union in the years since the war. Bolt and Sarada both respected their fathers, in their own ways, and loved their mothers dearly. Yet for many years they had lived in relative ignorance of their parents' pasts, an obliviousness common to youths. They had long taken it for granted that their parents were who they were, and only occasionally had they delved into the sordid histories. But as the two of them neared adulthood, they became more aware of who their parents were as human beings, as people with strengths and weaknesses, fallible human beings with flaws and quirks and likes and dislikes, and many more years of life experience too. They knew some of the story of course, but as time passed they grew slowly more inquisitive. They wanted to know more. Normal teenagers would not have been so consumed with curiosity, but Boruto Uzumaki and Sarada Uchiha were hardly normal by any stretch of the imagination, nor were their parents ordinary people either. They were extraordinary, all of them down to the last one. Hey, Konohamaru-sensei, what were my parents like when they were kids? Bolt posed this question one day as the team waited for their orders in the local burger shop. They had just gotten back from giving their report on a B-rank mission to investigate allegations of magisterial corruption in a small, rural province at the Daimyo's request, a boring and unglamorous kind of job. but nonetheless very important. Or that's what his dad said, at least. Every mission was equally crucial to maintaining Konoha's status and reinforcing the image of the Shinobi Union as a for-profit peacekeeping organization, rather than a collective of mercenary nation-states, less the French Foreign Legion, and more the International Peace Corps, or something like that. Blah 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 was all Bolt ever really heard from his dad's lectures. The man was so boring when he got started on that crap that Bolt could never stand to pay attention to more than half of it. But regardless of their latest mission's value, or lack thereof, Bolt asked his question as he and his team were unwinding at the restaurant where they usually hung out. Mitsuki looked up from his soda in response, quirking a slender eyebrow and saying nothing. Sarada, seated next to Bolt, gave him a curiously searching look. Konohamaru blinked. "You want to know about your dad," he said. "Wow, it's been a while since you've asked me anything like that." "I want to know what he was like as a kid," Bolt reiterated. "Him and my mum Hinata-san too." I didn't know her all that well back then." Konohamaru looked a touch sheepish. He shrugged. "What were they like?" Bolt asked, stubbornly repeating his question. He had an odd look in his eye, a bull-headed obstinacy so much like his father's beginning to surface. Nostrils flared. Konohamaru sighed and hummed to himself, gesturing vaguely. "Well, if I had to say, I guess." Konohamaru grinned. "He was every bit as cool as he is now," he said, surely not at all biased or looking at the past through rose-tinted lenses. "I was his disciple, you know. He taught me his first original jutsu." Knowing exactly what this first original jutsu was, Sarada twitched, Mitsuki grinned, and Bolt scowled. "Was he really that cool?" the blonde skeptically muttered. "I wonder." "Of course he was," Konohamaru said stubbornly. "Do you doubt your sensei's word, Bolt? Hokage-sama is the coolest ninja in the whole village." I can believe that," said Sarada, smiling fondly. "Ugh, you so have a crush on my dad," Bolt said, making a face. "Gross," Sarada twitched. "I do not," she snapped, brandishing a fist warningly and glaring daggers at her teammate. "Get a room." "You too," Mitsuki drawled, smirking. "You stay out of this," Bolt and Sarada snarled in unison, wheeling around on the third member of their squad. Konohamaru laughed. Some while later, Bolt and Sarada were walking home from the burger joint, together, without Mitsuki or Konohamaru-sensei accompanying them. This was solely because they lived in the same part of town and would thus have to take a similar route anyways, and not for any other reasons, they would assure you. It wasn't like they enjoyed spending time together or being alone with each other, no matter what some people might insinuate about the two of them. They didn't hold hands or anything like that. They weren't dating. They just walked each other home. That was all. And if their route home usually happened to take them through some remote and secluded parts of the village which few other people frequented, and where there were many nooks and crannies where an amorous young couple could secret themselves away for some and private time, well, surely that was just an innocent coincidence, and not at all indicative of any ulterior motives on their parts. And Sarada surely wasn't at all disappointed when they were nearly at one of those convenient hiding places where a couple of young lovers like themselves, but not themselves, obviously, because they weren't lovers or anything of the sort, could kip away for a brisk snog, only for Bolt to stop short and let out a sigh that made it clear his mind was on very different matters from Sarada's. Not that this meant Sarada's mind was in the gutter. She wasn't a pervert. No, she was just thinking about other things, unrelated to whatever Bolt was thinking, but not related to, anything dirty. She wasn't a pervert. Seriously, though Bolt sighed, interrupting the suspiciously specific denials of Sarada's in a narration. "I wonder what our parents were like as kids." Sarada cocked an eyebrow, surprised. "You're still on about that?" "I don't know," he shrugged. "It's just been bugging me lately. I'm curious, is all." Bolt Uzumaki? Curious. Now there's a recipe for disaster, if ever I've heard one. Sarada was joking, mostly, but something in her teammate's expression made her wonder, for just a moment, if there mightn't be a degree of inadvertent truth to her teasing. There was something furtive about the way he flicked his eyes this way and that through the alley, and he fidgeted slightly in a manner Sarada had learned to associate with anxiety over getting in trouble for some recent mischief or other. Bolt waved her remark off with a chuckle, though, after a moment, and he gave another non-committal shrug. "You can't tell me you've never been curious about what your dad got up to when he was our age," he deadpanned. "Or younger." "I've heard the stories," Sarada said, rolling her eyes. "As much of them as anyone will tell me, at least. They grew up in a different time, Things were bloodier back then, more complicated." "Bloody nothing," Bolt scoffed, gesticulating irreverently. "Mum never fails to guilt me about how Dad didn't have any parents growing up, and how she barely knew her own mother. Yeah, I get it, their childhoods weren't all sunshine and roses. Neither were ours. But you don't hear us complaining." Sarada looked away and adjusted her glasses. It was more polite than a straight-up facepalm. "If you're so sure you already know all the important stuff, then why are you so curious?" she patiently queried. This question brought Bolt up short for a second. He colored a bit and averted his gaze, sputtering, well, we're gonna be adults ourselves, soon, you know, he said, we're almost 18, almost 20, practically. Before you know it, we'll be old enough to drink, we're already old enough to marry. His face colored a bit more deeply at this, and he coughed into his fist. Sarada also reddened, and she started to anxiously fidget with the hem of her shirt. I see, she said. Are you making a proposal, Naruto? Call me Bolt, he said reflexively. Everyone does, even my parents, except when you're in trouble. Yeah, except when I'm in trouble, Bolt winced. He rubbed a toe in the dirt. Am I, then, in trouble? That depends. Sarada adjusted her glasses again, smiling. Are you going to answer my question? Bolt blushed and spluttered. He cast his eyes around at their surroundings. Well, that is to say, he gulped. No, I'm not, proposing or anything like that. It's not like we're dating or anything, stupid. I don't like you like that. Well, said Sarada smartly. If we aren't dating, then I suppose we have no reason to hide ourselves away in a dark alley and engage in any secret activities. She turned as if to leave, a knowing smirk on her face. Wait. Bolt put a hand on her shoulder. It's not like I don't, like you or anything. Not that I like you, but, I don't dislike you. He stumbled over his words, red-faced and flustered. Not that, this means we're in a relationship, because that would make things all sorts of complicated, with your crush on my dad. But, well, aren't you the least bit curious? He fidgeted, and a hand slipped inside his jacket for just a moment. Sarada narrowed her eyes. Okay, she said. I do not have a crush on your dad. I just happen to admire him very much, and if I also appreciate the fact that he is decidedly handsome, well, that should work in your favor. Considering the family resemblance, she winked cheekily, clearly channeling her mother. Bolt blushed at her words, and her smirk returned full force. Is that a scroll in your pocket? She asked next, or are you just happy to see me, Didi Dumbus? Bolt yelped, going beet red. It's just a scroll, obviously. Geez, why do you always have to tease me like that, you jerk? Because it's funny, Sarada said blithely, before slipping a hand into Bolt's pocket. He froze up, going stiff as a board, and she smirked victoriously. Then she pulled a small scroll out of his pocket. It was ice cold in her hand, and glowed slightly as it met the air. Sarada's eyes went wide, and she looked askance at Bolt. Even without activating her Sharingan, she could see a shitload of residual chakra clinging to the scroll. Whoa, she breathed, tracing a bit of spidery sealwork scrawled over the borders, so thickly drawn that the white margins looked a glossy black. What is this, then? Bolt scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. The old man put some serious protection around those jutsu, he mumbled. Mimetic blockers or something, and lots of other really tricky mind-affecting shit. Besides, I had to put all kinds of seals on the scroll just so I wouldn't forget what I was transcribing halfway through. Sarada looked at Bolt, feeling a chill go down her spine. Jutsu, she said. Naruto, what kind of jutsu would you want to transcribe that the Lord Seventh would see fit to protect that heavily? And why? A time travel jutsu, Bolt said, beaming. I wanna see what our parents were like as kids, This seems like the best way to do it, beat. Time travel, Sarada deadpanned. Seriously? Is this really about wanting to find out more about your parents, or are you just curious to see if you can do it? Bolt's talents were considerable, and had gotten his team out of many sticky situations. He was a genius when it came to the ninja arts, and always working to push his limits, to distinguish himself from his father. Yet while his drive and proficiency were usually beneficial to the squad and the village, there were also times when Bolt's talent, ambition, and disregard for authority melded together into singularly awful clusterfucks of bad ideas. This, Sarada had swiftly become convinced, was one such situation. Bolt shrugged, a little of both, honestly, a sigh. Sarada's eye twitched. There's a reason your dad sealed all those jutsu away, she drawled. Even apart from almost all of them being purely theoretical and completely untestable, the possible ramifications of screwing this up, she shuddered, and even if you do perform it perfectly, there's no way to know whether it will even work. If we even want it to work, what are you scared of? Bolt asked. There's no way the two of us can mess this up, and if it doesn't work, then it just won't have any effect. No harm, no foul, or it could have some catastrophic effect that we can't predict, Sarada said. I don't fancy being remembered as the person responsible for destroying the space-time continuum. And what's this wee business? Bolt flushed and scratched the back of his neck. He gave a disarmingly contrite grin that made Sarada's heart skip a beat. Not that she was attracted to him. I figured you'd want to see what they were like more than anyone, Sarada, he said, gesturing vaguely. My dad and your parents were on the same team as Genin, right? It only seemed right for me to take you along. And besides, in the first place, you're the only person I'd want to travel back in time with. He mumbled this last part so quietly that it was almost inaudible. Sarada blushed a color indistinguishable from the hue of her Sharingan. "Ah," she said. "Well, when you put it like that, I guess I can't really complain." She coughed into a fist, her glasses fogging up. Bolt grinned and took her hand. "What do you say, Sarada? Wanna see what our parents were like?" "Yeah, sure, why not?" She nodded vigorously, and unfurled the scroll. Feeling recklessly emboldened, she read the name of the jutsu Bolt had transcribed in his neatly messy hand. It looked pretty complicated, and that was a real mouthful of a name, wasn't it? They worked well into the night, practicing the hand seals and perfecting the jutsu formula, dripping their blood into the heart of the sprawling ritual circle. Some of the instructions were very arcane, and they could only do so much to elucidate the text. It had been written in an older mode, using ancient and complicated forms of many kanji, with no kana at all, more like traditional Chinese than modern Japanese. Even with Sarada's vast knowledge of numerous subjects, and Bolt's talent for astounding leaps of deduction and invention, it still took them many hours just to make sense of the instructions, half of which was spent double and triple checking their work for errors. The description of the jutsu itself was a lost cause, however, unlike the dry and clinical terminology of modern jutsu researchers. Whoever had created this technique had written it more like a religious text with many archaic, seemingly nonsense turns of phrase and a great deal of metaphors and allusions. The language was annoyingly flowery and non-literal, while the directions for performing the jutsu were relatively clear and straightforward. Reading the rest of it felt like trying to get scientifically sound information from a medieval bestiarium. It was colorful and poetic, but not terribly helpful. In the end, they gave up that part of the text as a lost cause and turned their focus solely to the instructions. That was really all they needed for performing the technique anyways. Having thrown all caution to the wind at the entreating look on Bolt's face, Sarada helped him perform the final steps of the jutsu. It was midnight by the time they finally reached that point, and it was 10 minutes into the new day before they finally finished weaving all of the requisite hand seals. "Kin Pao," they intoned in unison. "Seijin Koshin Jikan Moishi no Jutsu." For a moment, nothing happened, then nothing else happened for several more minutes, and after that period nothing at all happened. They felt their chakra drain away by a good portion when they performed the final step, but there was no other cue, no other sign that they had been successful, no flash of light, no puff of smoke, no great and deafening rumble, not a single goddamn thing to show for their efforts. "It didn't work, did it?" Bolt said. "Doesn't seem that way, no." Sarada sighed. "What a shame. I was actually getting a little excited to see it happen, after all that work. Looks like the jutsu was a dud." "Damn it," Bolt groaned. "I really wanted to go back in time." "Yeah, I guess that kind of thing is just a pipe dream in the end, isn't it?" "I guess." "Yeah." Bolt scratched the back of his head. "Geez, we should probably head home. It's real late. Mom's probably worried herself sick." "Oh, you're not a child anymore," Sarada said, rolling her eyes. "I'm sure she realizes you can take care of yourself. You underestimate my mum." Bolt deadpanned. They parted with a shared laugh and commiserating grins, homeward bound. When Sarada got to her family's house, the lights were off and the doors were locked. Her parents were almost certainly asleep already. Clearly they hadn't bothered waiting up for her. Sweet dripping, the teenager tentatively shimmied up to her bedroom window and sneaked in that way, checking for any traps that might have been laid along her way. Sasuke Uchiha was, as a ninja and a father, of the mindset that if his daughter was going to be staying out late, she had better be on her guard at all times. And what better way to hammer this lesson into her head than by setting tripwires and non-lethal seal traps to keep her on her toes whenever she was out past curfew. If she was careless and set one off, that was rebuke enough. It was half punishment, half training, half rite of passage. If she wasn't able to make her way inside the house without setting off any of the traps, then clearly she was not yet ready to be going on dates or staying out late. So Sarada was thorough and cautious in her sweep, checking every inch of her path, not letting down her guard until she had gotten into her bedroom and given it a floor-to-ceiling check, 3 times over, just to be safe. Then she changed into her pajamas, brushed her teeth, and settled into bed. It felt like she was hardly asleep for any time at all before she was jarred awake by her mother's scream, and leaping instinctively into action, she armed herself and dashed to her parents' bedroom. What she saw there, well, it reminded her why she had done so much to repress the visits home her dad had made during his extended missions abroad. Those two were into some traumatizingly kinky shit. No kid should have to see their parents getting it on, but Sasuke and Sakura were like rabbits, and Sarada was critically unlucky. They at least had the decency to never bring it up. Bolt slept peacefully the whole night through. His rest was uninterrupted, and he did not stir until morning, when he felt someone tugging on his arm. "Bro," came the whine of his little sister, Himori. "Get up. Mum and Dad are still asleep. I need you to take me to school." Groaning, Bolt cracked his eyes open. He yawned and sat up in his bed. "They're asleep," he said, looking at his alarm clock.
It was 9:15. I had to make myself toast for breakfast, she answered. They must have been really busy last night. Bolt rubbed the crust out of his eyes. Ha, that was something. Mum and Dad were still asleep. Shikamaru was gonna be pissed. His old man rarely got to work later than 8, and sometimes had to leave as early as 7 or 6:30. There was no rest for the weary, not when they were Hokage, and Naruto's assistants were probably pulling their hair out right about now. And their mum was one of the most domestic people they knew. She was someone who lived to care and nurture, usually waking up before anyone else and starting on the day's chores while the morning was still dark. If being a housewife was a career, then Hinata Uzumaki was a single-minded businesswoman. It wasn't unheard of for his parents to sleep late. On special occasions they would stay up past midnight and enjoy themselves, go out dancing or drinking, or have dinner with old friends, and the morning after they might indulge themselves and sleep in a little. But as far as Bolt knew, there had been no such event last night. If his parents had gone out, they would have called him to see if he could babysit Himori. She may have been going into her final year at the academy, but she was still their precious little cinnamon bun. Absent-mindedly, Bolt grabbed his phone and checked it to see if they had called him, or tried to. Nope, nothing. The most recent message was a dirty joke Chow Chow had forwarded, and the only missed call had been from Mitsuki at around 8 the previous night. The last call on record from either his mum or dad's personal phones, or the house phone, was 3 days old, from before he and his team had set out on their previous mission. It was possible they'd tried to call him and been unable to get through, but something in Boruto's gut told him that this was unlikely. Maybe they were sick. He should probably check in on them, just to be sure. But first, he should really get Himori to school. Give me a moment to get dressed, sis, he said, then I'll give you a lift. Okay. Himori beamed and walked back out of the room to give her brother some privacy. Moving like greased lightning, liberally abusing the Shunshin no Jutsu to get from point A to point B as quickly as possibly, Bolt grabbed some clothes, splashed his face with water, and dressed. He could wash more thoroughly once he got back home, since it was a day off for him anyways, as long as he looked presentable. Alright, come on sis, he said, grabbing Himori's hand and accepting a thoughtfully proffered piece of toast. Don't want to be late, do we? No we don't. Himori giggled and held on tight. Taking a moment to focus, Bolt needed his chakra and sought out the academy in his mind's eye, clinging to a beacon of sorts outside the gate. One moment, they stood in the kitchen of the Uzumaki household. The next, they were at the academy. No transitionary state, no puff of smoke or flash of light, no trippy tunnel or melting backgrounds. It was so quick that for a nanosecond they existed in both places at once. When it came to the art of the flying thunder god, instantaneous was truly instantaneous. Himori giggled as she let go of her brother's hand, giddy from the rush of getting to experience his Hiration. She waved to him and smiled cheerfully, before running in the gate to greet her school friends. Have a good day at school, sis, he called out to her. I will, brother, she responded. One of her friends tittered, and another pointed at Bolt and blushed. Himori beamed and chattered a mile a minute, and soon they were heading inside. Bolt saw one of the boys blushing and staring at Himori. He narrowed his eyes and glared. The kid paled, quailed, and ducked out of sight, not sure why he felt like someone had just walked over his grave. It took Bolt a moment or two before he was willing to leave. Himori was so goddamn adorable, he just wanted to protect her forever. She was too precious, the most Mo of Imato. He loved her to bits. Sarada was making herself a late breakfast and trying to forget what she had seen in her parents' bedroom when her dad came stumbling into the kitchen, a haunted look in his eye. What fresh hell is this? He muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair and leaning weakly on the counter. He was pale, like he had just seen a ghost, and his clothes also looked rather bedraggled, as if he'd gotten dressed one-handed in the dark while desperately fighting off a horny fangirl. And then his face reddened suddenly, as if he was remembering how pleasantly shaped said fangirl's body had seemed lying next to him. His gaze was distant and glassy. You and Mum go out drinking last night, Sarada said neutrally. She avoided looking at him as she mixed a light drizzle of honey into her oatmeal. Sasuke gave her a bewildered look. Is that woman really your mother, he asked, a hint of something like miserable disbelief in his tone. Sarada replied with a baleful stare. A vein throbbed in her forehead. Dad, she said dangerously, her Sharingan flashing to life. Don't you dare start that again. Sasuke did not quail. He had his pride, so he swallowed the fear that welled up at the look on the girl's face and focused on another part of her statement. Namely, why do you keep calling me dad? Sarada stared at Sasuke. She reached into the cutlery drawer. Very slowly, she took out a butcher's knife. For a moment, she didn't do anything else. She just looked at Sasuke with her Sharingan active and a butcher's knife in hand. The killing intent rolling off of her was Jounin grade. At the very least, on par with the likes of Zabuza Momochi. She could have done better of course, but he was family. This was basically just a mild scowl in the Uchiha household. If Sarada wanted, she could have dropped an elephant simply by glaring. No Sharingan, just Saki. Sasuke, being in fact an inexperienced 12-year-old who had never before encountered this sort of killing intent, wet himself, just a little bit. That's not a funny joke, Dad, Sarada said, her voice as cold as ice. We've had more than enough drama over this crap. We don't need any more. Okay, Sasuke whimpered. Try as he might, he could not regain his composure. Is this some kind of jinjutsu, he wondered to himself. I need to break out of it. He reached for the knife in Sarada's hands, a hint of desperation in his expression. She pulled it back and gave him a disbelieving look. You're drunk, aren't you, she said. Geez, Dad, if you think you're trapped in a jinjutsu, just activate your Sharingan. Sasuke twitched. Don't patronize me, he growled. Just because I haven't activated my Sharingan yet doesn't mean I can't beat him. I'll find a way to get stronger. Stronger than anyone, and then I'll kill that man, and restore my clan's honor. Even if I don't have the Sharingan yet, beat. Sarada adjusted her glasses. You have it right now, she deadpanned. Huh, said Sasuke, doing a double take. Sharingan, she said. You've had the Sharingan since before I was born, and restoring our family's honor. Exactly who are you planning to kill, Dad? Did you hit your head or something? Sasuke blinked. Wait, what did you just say? Seriously, did you hit your head or something? No, Sasuke said, shaking his head. The first thing, about the Sharingan. You've had it since before I was born, Sarada said slowly, frowning. Sasuke scowled. No, he said, that can't be right. You're older than me. Sarada was at a loss for a moment. She looked deeply bemused, and the annoyance was gone. She set the knife on the kitchen counter.
Shikamaru Nara was not in a good mood. As the Hokage's advisor and right-hand man, he had some pretty big responsibilities. While his child self may have balked at the workload he dealt with every day, Shikamaru accepted that there was no one more qualified for this job than he. So as much as he would have loved to lie back in the grass and watch the clouds go by, he still came to work every morning, except for holidays of course, and Sundays, and family emergencies, and sick leave, and seminars, and personal days, and when he was on vacation. But aside from that, he came into work every morning and did his job as diligently as any member of the Hokage's staff. He was not a workaholic by any stretch of the imagination, but he was enough of an adult to get off his ass and do his damn job, except for when he just didn't feel like it. But this was much rarer than one might expect of him, if one were to judge the probability by the character and disposition of Shikamaru as he was when he had been a kid. Part of the blame for this disparity could be placed on simple maturity, while the rest lay squarely on the shoulders of his beautiful, wonderful, infuriatingly stubborn wife. Temari Nara could give the wife of Macbeth a run for her money as far as what she could nag and guilt and harangue her husband into doing, and rarely did she lose an argument. Shikamaru may have been technically more intelligent, but Temari was deviously persistent, and also still perilously hot. Middle age be damned. No matter how well-reasoned a debate he might make, if Temari wasn't convinced, then he wouldn't win. All she had to do was threaten to start sleeping in the guest bedroom and Shikamaru would immediately fold. Thus, despite his natural inclinations, Shikamaru was genuinely a pretty diligent worker. He had to be as the Hokage's advisor. If there was only one thing to be said in favor of Naruto Uzumaki's skill as a leader, then Shikamaru would claim it to be that Naruto was aware of his own shortcomings as far as more intellectual matters went. While the guy had come a long way from being the dead last dunce everyone had laughed at back in the academy, the world was still full of people much cleverer than him, and he knew it. So Shikamaru was entrusted with advising the Lord Seventh in a wide range of matters, helping him hammer out all kinds of complicated policy decisions. Naruto saw the big picture, but Shikamaru looked at the little details. Naruto was the idea guy, but Shikamaru was the one who figured out if and how to make it work, and Shikamaru was fine with that. Even if he couldn't live the average, unremarkable life he'd always wanted, that didn't mean he had to put himself up on the front stage. He was content to be the right-hand man. As a matter of fact, he preferred it. Shikamaru Nara was, in short, the very antithesis of the stereotypically ambitious and treacherous advisor, but that didn't mean he would be averse to wringing the Hokage's neck if that bastard didn't walk in the door within the next 5 minutes. He still isn't here, huh? Moji looked around the office, carrying another short stack of forms. Hey, where should I put these? Just set them down on the floor, Shikamaru said with a grimace. Try to leave a clear path though, will you? He was exaggerating, of course. It wasn't as though the office was in any danger of becoming packed from floor to ceiling with paperwork, there being simply a modest pile on Naruto's desk, but there was still a lot of stuff that needed the Hokage's personal scrutiny or approval. While Konoha's bureaucracy was far from so inefficient as to need the Hokage's signature on everything, there were still mission requests, progress reports, miscellaneous proposals, and other such stuff that required Naruto's attention. Moji smiled sheepishly and set the forms on the desk. There hasn't been any word then, she asked. I'd think someone would have raised a fuss by now if he was sick. and he didn't say he'd be coming in late, either, unless I'm much mistaken. Right, he didn't. Yeah, Shikamaru sighed, which is why I'm starting to seriously consider an assassination attempt if he doesn't get here soon. Heh, I think you'll have to get in line behind a few people for that, Moji chuckled. Probably, Shikamaru shrugged and glanced at the papers. I've sent Udon over to check up on the guy, and hopefully Hinata doesn't mistake that for an attempt on her husband's life. We've lost too many good Anbu that way. He has a very non-threatening presence, Udon does. I'm sure even Hinata-san wouldn't perceive him as an assassin, Moji said, smiling and waving a hand dismissively. One of them probably just came down with a cold and lost track of time. It's happened before. Shikamaru hummed and stroked his goatee. Possibly, somehow I doubt it, though. Do you want me to fetch Sakura-san or Shizune-san? Moji asked. Because with all due respect, Shikamaru-sama, even if your intuition tells you otherwise, I still think it would only be prudent to have a medic at the ready. Go ahead, Shikamaru said. You're probably right about that much, at least. When it comes to that guy, it's always wisest to prepare for every possibility. Get Sakura, and Sasuke too while you're at it. Between those two, no matter what's keeping the 7th from coming into work, they should be able to handle it. Whether it's a cold, an assassination attempt, or a fit of pique brought on by an impending midlife crisis, he gestured vaguely, concluding his statement. Moji nodded and curtly bowed. Of course, Shikamaru-sama, and for the last time, he added in exasperation, just San is fine. But Moji had already vanished in a swirl of leaves before he could finish his sentence. Shikamaru sighed, looking at the foliage now strewn about on the floor. An eye twitched. I'm not cleaning this up, he muttered. Pain in the ass. Naruto stirred slowly. He felt something soft and a bit heavy lying on top of him. His back ached a little too, and his feet were a tad chilly. He was on the floor, he realized. How did he get there? Did he roll out of his bed in the middle of the night, blinking gradually awake? Naruto pondered. Where was he? This didn't look like his bedroom, not even closed. There was zero resemblance between this place and his apartment, wherever this place was. Naruto was at a loss. Soft, he murmured, feeling something squish against his chest. What is this? Then he paused, noticing something odd about his voice. He said. What's up with this? I sound, my voice is all deep, uncharacteristically deep and low-pitched. He could still recognize it as his voice, but it sounded a fair bit deeper than he could ever remember it sounding before. He hummed thoughtfully. Do I have a cold? He wondered. Curious, Naruto tried swallowing, smooth, easy, and not at all sore or scratchy. Then he sniffed. Clear, unobstructed, and nearly silent. Odd. It didn't feel like a cold, at least not in that regard. His joints did feel a bit stiff though, and his back was feeling kinda sore, but the last one may have just been from waking up on the floor. He didn't really feel any sort of headache or general ickiness either. So it's not a cold, then, he mused to himself. A beat. Naruto was struck by a sudden recollection. Oh, shit, the test. I almost forgot. Whipping his head around, he sought out the nearest clock he could find. He saw an odd-looking one on the bedside table, one that read 9:15. Crap. Naruto swore. I am so late. In a panic, he pushed the pretty, half-naked woman off of him and darted for the closet. Despite being sure that he had never seen this room before in his life, Naruto was able to find a change of clothes like he had done this 1,000 times before. He was a bit upset that he couldn't find any of his clothes, but he nonetheless grabbed what he could and got dressed, in too much of a hurry to worry about washing up, and hoping Sakura-chan wouldn't notice if he looked a little messier than usual. Naruto rushed out of the room. Again, despite never having been here before, Naruto was able to navigate the house with ease. He didn't notice it, being otherwise preoccupied, and a bit dense to boot, but on some level he seemed to know this place like the back of his hand. Naruto was halfway down the stairs before he realized something. Wait, who was that pretty lady lying on top of me? This thought gave him serious pause, such that he wound up tripping and stumbling. His brain froze up, stunned senseless as the blonde belatedly registered the fact that he'd woken up underneath a buxom, half-naked beauty. He fell down the stairs and crashed into the landing. It hurt less than he expected. His body rolled as soon as it hit the floor, and he was back on his feet before he even knew what was going on. Whoa, lucky, Naruto muttered, looking down at his body. I'm okay, he blinked. Why was his right arm wrapped up in so many bandages? He didn't remember hurting it. Now that he thought about it though, it was like that when he woke up, wasn't it? Kuriusa and Kuriusa. Naruto thought about this for a whole 3 seconds, before remembering why he'd been in such a hurry. Oh right, he yelped. Crap. I am so late. Gotta hurry. He ran for the door. Man, what's up with those two today? Boruto muttered to himself as he strode up the steps to the front door. I can see one of them sleeping in, but both, they must be getting old. Those parents of ours. With hands in his pockets, lips pursed and brow furrowed, Bolt was lost in thought. He absent-mindedly nibbled on the last vestiges of the toast Himori had made him and walked up to the door. I should check up on them if they're still asleep, he said to no one in particular. It'd be a nuisance if that old man died overnight and started stinking up the house, although he'll probably live to 100, with as stubborn as he is. Sighing, Bolt reached out to grab the doorknob. He swallowed the last piece of crust and smacked his lips. Wonder if we still have any orange juice, he mused. I'm thirsty. Bolt turned the handle. In a turn of events that probably could have been seen coming from a mile off, the door flew open and smacked him in the face. Bolt staggered for a moment, and that was long enough for his old man to run straight into him. They fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Damn it, crap. Naruto swore as they toppled. Watch where you're going, you jerk. Gah. Shitty old man, Bolt snarled in turn. Why don't you watch where you're going? He thrashed in frustration as the older blonde fell down on top of him, angrily flailing his arms and catching his dad upside the head with an erratic fist. Ow, that hurt, you bastard. Naruto cursed. And who are you calling a shitty old man? I call em like I see em. You shitty old man, Bolt snapped. What were you doing sleeping in this long, huh? You're way late, damn it. Shikamaru's gonna be seriously pissed at you. How's that any of your business? Asshole, Naruto obstinately retorted. And Shikamaru, what's that lazy idiot got to do with anything, snap? You're the last person WHO should be calling someone an idiot, Dad. Bolt crashed another fist down on top of his father's head. The older blonde swore vehemently, if not terribly creatively, and he rolled off of his son, clutching at his head. Ow ow ow, Naruto said, wincing and rubbing his poor noggin. That really hurts, damn it. He paused, then, trailing off for a moment. Blink, blink. Wait, what? He stared at Bolt for a second. Hey, did you just call me? Come on, old man, Bolt said, scoffing and holding a hand out. Since you're running so late, I'll give you a lift. Just this once. For a moment, his dad just sat there and stared at him like a complete stranger. Bolt scowled in irritation and thrust his hand out again, this time with greater emphasis. He glowered at his old man in annoyance, feeling irked by the idiotic expression on his dad's face. Come on, you're really late, aren't you? Bolt said, frustratedly running a hand through his hair. Damn it, and this was supposed to be my day off, you know? But his dad continued to stare at him with that stupid look on his face. It was really starting to piss him off. After a seemingly interminable wait, the man finally stopped gaping dumbly and actually spoke. Dad, you know, Naruto said slowly, confusedly shaking his head. Hey, who the hell are you? Now it was Bolt's turn to stare with a stupid look on his face. He felt like a duck in a thunderstorm. Hey, that's not a funny joke, you old coot, he said, irritably scratching his cheek. Don't pretend to have amnesia on me, now. That routine stopped being funny after the third time. Amnesia, said Naruto, looking completely clueless. Right, I know what you mean, he nodded superciliously. Amnesia isn't funny. I'm sure I don't have anything like amnesia. Who even wants amnesia in the first place? He laughed, but it sounded oddly nervous. Bolt twitched. Dad, seriously? Naruto leaned in close, looking sheepish, and whispered in a conspiratorial manner. So, what is amnesia anyways? He asked, making a face. It sounds painful. Boruto Uzumaki knew that his father wasn't an idiot. Not really. However silly the man may have acted at times, he nonetheless had a reasonably good head on his shoulders. Even if Naruto had something of a fondness for stupid jokes like this, he wasn't really an idiot. Very funny, Dad, he deadpanned. You're a regular comedian, beat. Naruto blinked. Right? Ha ha ha, he laughed and scratched the back of his neck. Noticeably, he looked a touch uncomfortable, with shifty eyes and nervous fidgeting. So, why do you keep calling me that, eh? Bolt turned his head to stare at Naruto, his glance turned baleful. Hey, come on, I already told you that joke wasn't funny, old man. What joke? Naruto asked, frowning. Now that I think about it, doesn't it seem more like you're the one pulling a joke on me? Bolt's eye twitched dangerously. Hey, seriously, he muttered in a low voice. Cut it out, Pops. Now's not the time for this lame comedy routine. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and glared. There was something intractably petulant about the expression, a certain childish temperamentality. A look like this wasn't too out of place on his father's face, when the man was fooling around, but this really wasn't the time for the Nanadame to goof off with his son. Bolt thought so, and clearly so did Udon. Hokage-sama, there you are, came the cry of Konohamaru sensei's old teammate, a boring but dependable man who did his work in an efficient and unflashy manner. Udon. No last name given. Bolt let out a sigh of relief, seeing the man running toward them. Finally, someone who can talk some sense into this geezer, he thought, looking askance at his dad. He made a face and shook his head, getting up. He's all yours, Specs. Good luck, Bolt muttered, before going inside.
Udon stared at the young man's back for a moment, befuddled, before rounding on the Nanadame. Hokage-sama, he said again, unmistakably addressing Naruto. Come on, you're late. He grabbed Naruto by the wrist and pulled him up onto his feet. Naruto stared dumbly for several long seconds, rooted in place. Even when the door shut behind him and Bolt vanished from sight, he could only stare at Udon in silent shock. What? He said slowly, blinking owlishly. Wait, what did you call me? For a moment, Udon was bemused. He cocked his head curiously and squinted at Naruto through his glasses. Are you okay, Hokage-sama? He asked. Naruto's eyes widened. Hokage, he murmured. You called me Hokage, yes? Hokage-sama, said Udon, frowning concernedly. I did. You are, after all, the Lord Seventh. In an instant, Naruto's face lit up like a Christmas tree. His lips split in a grin so wide it could have spanned the Valley of the End, and gleaming eyes kindled with a light that sent a curiously fearful shiver up Udon's spine. I'm the Hokage, Naruto said slowly, grinning uncontrollably. I'm the Hokage. Ah, yes, you are, said Udon anxiously. Did you hit your head or something? Nanadame-sama, I'm perfectly fine, Specs, I'm the Hokage, after all. Ha 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 ha. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and guffawed, loud and uproarious. I'm the Hokage. This is actually a pretty good dream, isn't it? Even if it is kinda weird. Ha 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 ha. He threw his head back and loosed a howling laughter. Udon's sweet dropped. Dream, he muttered. Suck on that, world. Naruto shouted to the heavens, ignoring the bespectacled man's weary words. The Hokage. Sarada winced, hearing those words. Leaping across the rooftops toward the Uzumaki family home, she anxiously adjusted her glasses and tried to convince herself that this shout was just a coincidence. Biting her lip, she bounded from one roof to the next, hurtling towards her destination at breakneck speed. Boruto, she whispered, I think we've made a grave mistake. The jutsu didn't work the way we expected. We weren't the ones to travel through time, and our parents were complete idiots, she thought as well. Sarada shuddered, recalling how her mum had reacted to the news that, not only was she married to Sasuke, but she also had a teenage daughter as well. It's kinda weird how old he is, and I don't get why he's missing an arm, Sakura had said conversationally, eager to start gossiping. But once I get past all of that, Sasuke-kun's still really cool, isn't he? And so dreamy too, don't you think? Sarada turned a bit green around the gills, so to speak, just remembering those words. Her family life had never been what she would call normal, but she had never before been asked such an awkward question by her mum. Sakura, it seemed, did not completely grasp the little things about what Sarada being her daughter meant, and acted more like the young woman was a sister or older friend. As in, Sakura did not shy away from asking Sarada all kinds of uncomfortable questions about her sex life with Sasuke. No psychologically healthy person wanted to contemplate the idea of their parents having sex, and Sarada was no different. Nor did she want to hear her mum gush about how big her dad's sword had felt, or to be asked to speculate on how good her dad was in bed. Sakura Uchiha had been a pervert for as long as Sarada could remember. Mama's dirty, she used to say in exasperation whenever her mum so much as blushed or giggled, but never before had the woman been so gauche as to talk this directly about such matters with her daughter. No teenager ever wanted to have that kind of girl talk with their mother. Mortification abounding, Sarada took a deep breath and silently pushed these memories to the deepest, darkest corners of her psyche. Let a shrink deal with that matter somewhere down the line. For now, she just wanted to straighten out this fursterklack of a mess. By the time the Uzumaki house was in sight, Sarada couldn't see anyone outside it. She had definitely heard the Lord Seventh laughing and cheering earlier, but when she reached the place the noises had been coming from he was already gone. Her eyes flickered scarlet for a sec, and she scanned over the area to see if she could find any suspicious traces. She saw nothing. Deactivating her Sharingan, Sarada then performed a simple sensory jutsu. Bolt's chakra was inside the house, along with another, significantly weaker chakra. The general texture of the second signature betrayed similar affinities to Bolt, and the color was similar to Himori's, virtually identical to Lady Hinata's chakra, save that it was vast orders of magnitude smaller and lighter. Weaker, much weaker. Himori had to have at least thrice as much chakra as this person, and hers was denser as well, thick with a firstborn daughter's share of her father's life force and mother's spirit energy. Whoever this was, they had a chakra like that of Lady Hinata, in shade and hue, but one that was infinitely less in every measurable way. It reminded her of how her parents' chakras had looked, like, but unlike how it should have been, smaller and feebler and lacking much of the richness and subtle nuance they had acquired through decades of use and mastery. This seemed to confirm Sarada's sneaking suspicions. In hindsight, she should have expected something like this from the name of the technique. Seijin Koshin Jikan Morshi, Asai. We are so grounded when they get back, Sarada said. I just know it. Hinata woke without a sound, blinking her way owlishly back into the world of the living. She was lying on the floor, she noticed absently, but this fact was of minimal concern to her conscious mind. She was too absorbed in recollections of that wonderful dream. Me and Naruto-kun in a bed together, she thought wistfully, her lips quirking into a tiny smile. Ah, if only it were true. Idly, a part of her hoped that Naruto would grow up to be as handsome as the adult him she had been lying with in her dream. Not that she didn't think he was cute or charming now, but, well, the Naruto in her dream had been hot with a capital H. Hinata nearly swooned just thinking about it, her cheeks aflame. She clung to the details of the dream as she stirred, refusing to let the memories fade. Lately she had been suffering from nightmares due to stress over the graduation exams, and even passing Kyuni-sensei's personal test hadn't done much to assuage Hinata's anxiety. But she felt almost none of that now. Her mind seemed clearer, somehow, less frantically energetic. She felt calmer than she had in a very long time, and despite her lingering fears, Hinata found that a part of her was quite content to merely sit up for a moment and bathe in the details of her remembered dream. Her recollections of that wonderful fantasy seemed amazingly clear, nothing like the transient, fleeting substance of dreams. Why, if Hinata didn't know any better, she'd think she was remembering something that had actually happened. Yet that was impossible, sadly enough. Maybe one day, if all the stars aligned in heaven and the earth itself was moved to pity her lot, if pigs grew wings and all her relatives danced naked in the street, and the sky turned green where the grass grew blue, and the sun was snuffed and the moon was dropped, and all the world came crashing to an end, it seemed terribly unlikely to her, was the point she was getting at, regardless of any assets she may or may not have had at her disposal, and regardless of what one might think of her attractiveness, or possible lack thereof. It could not be denied that 12-year-old Hinata Hyruga was terribly shy and horrendously insecure. She could barely even bring herself to speak in her crush's presence. Lack of self-confidence had done in far greater men and women than she, and Hinata was at a delicate age. Fear of rejection paralyzed her, and in the face of this overwhelming dread she could muster no more courage than to watch from afar and dream idly, hopefully, of one day managing to approach him. So Hinata appropriately relished the memory of a firm and muscular body, nearly naked, flawless dusky skin reddening with a flush, and the glimpse of something she was sure her more conservative relatives would be abjectly scandalized to find her staring at. But in the realm of such a perfect dream, Hinata had felt no shame in taking the time to appreciate what she saw. Even if the view proved too much for her to handle even in her dream, the real Hinata was able to savor it, finding in the belief of this event's unreality the courage and composure to replay the image in her mind's eye, committing it to memory with all the attentiveness of a girl in love. Dimly, she perceived that she was not in her bedroom. Part of Hinata grew mildly distressed by this, worried that something might have happened, but the rest of her still felt oddly at ease, and was taking the time to bask in the lingering memories of her dream. Absent-mindedly, Hinata stood up. She did not think about it at first, because it did not initially register to the girl in her distracted state, but the floor seemed awfully far away, didn't it? If she had been paying attention she might have felt a slightest rush of vertigo, her conscious mind expecting to fall given how high her head was, yet her feet somehow managed to reach all the way down, and what was that weight on her chest? Unconsciously rubbing one of her shoulders, Hinata chanced to look down. She barely noticed how far away her feet were. The only thing she could see was those. Hinata's mind went blank. She stared down at her chest, uncomprehending. Certainly, she had read once that stressful environments could cause girls to go through puberty prematurely. A leftover survival mechanism, perhaps, from a time when such stress meant predators or other dangers liable to cut life short, making it crucial to pass on one's genes as soon as possible. She'd started blooming earlier than any of the other girls in her class, and had become used to the inconvenient reality of those lumps hanging from her chest no matter how hard she trained. But this was just ridiculous. This was, well, she simply had no words for it. Her initial thought, seeing it, was something along the lines of watermelons. That was the first impression she got from the size and shape of what she saw, until her eyes processed the color, the cloth covering, and the fact that these objects were quite clearly protruding from her chest. Blink, blink. Hinata stared some more. Hinata stared for a very long time at her breasts. Huge, she thought disbelievingly. How on earth did they get so? Blankly, she grabbed at the, not mounds, that was too little a word, they were more like mountains, than anything else, except that they were soft, very, very soft, and rounded, more like torpedoes, or bombshells, or teardrops. There came a knock at the door, and Hinata gave a start. She nearly jumped right out of her skin. Letting go of her grand tetons, she belatedly remembered that she was in an unfamiliar room. Meep, she squeaked under her breath, biting her lip, more loudly,
trying to inject even an ounce of confidence into her voice as she trembled, a million worst-case scenarios running through her mind at a mile a minute. She said, who is it? Mum. A voice spoke, a young man's voice with more tenor than bass. You okay in there? Dad was acting weird. I think he's come down with something. How about you? Need me to get you anything? Hinata blinked rapidly, several times in quick succession. She stared at the door, and without even realizing it her eyes began to tense and flex, veins bulging out with no need for instruction. Her body seemed to channel the chakra almost of its own volition, without any need for conscious thought on her part. Byakugan activated of its own accord. She did not even need to will as much, let alone form the hand seals to help herself knead her chakra to feed and awaken those ravenous eyes. She barely needed to focus on where she wanted to look. Some unconscious aspect of the visual cortex was already committing most of its resources to analyzing a point directly 1.7 meters in front of her, just outside the door. Hinata stared at a teenager with 2 whisker marks on either cheek, a markedly familiar face, and wavy blonde hair vaguely reminiscent of a leaf in the shape of its styling. Everything from the face to the hair to the familiar arch of those lips and squint of those eyes reminded her of Naruto, but she also saw a little more. If Hinata looked at herself in a mirror, she might see a number of familiar traits in herself that this youth possessed. His ears, the bridge of his nose, the shape of his chin, aspects from her own face, touches of a distinctly gracile Hyruga bone structure mixed with a certain subtle broadness and robustness Hinata had come to associate with her crush. Even the color of his skin seemed to be a blend of her and Naruto's complexions, lighter than his but darker than hers. Had she not known any better, Hinata would have thought, for an instant, that this young man could only be her and Naruto's son. But that was impossible, right? And yet, he called her mum, and also, there was still the curious matter of, again Hinata looked down at her breasts. This time with her Byakugan active, she noticed a plethora of other differences as well. From the length of the arms and legs, to the width of the pelvis, to hints of faint wrinkling and stretch marks in her skin, to a number of faint scars within and without that only a doujutsu user could see with the naked eye, and also to what looked like signs of healed over tearing in her. Well, let it simply be said that Hinata saw signs that she had long since learned to associate with women who had given birth at least once, possibly twice.
Oh hell, I am so sorry, we never should have done something that stupid. Sasuke stared pensively into the cup of tea sitting before him, remembering the words of the young woman who had called herself his daughter. He hummed in the back of his throat, unconsciously trying to grab the cup with his left hand, but there wasn't a hand there, not much of an arm either. He scowled and let out a sigh. Time travel, is it? He muttered. It was hard to believe. He probably never would have accepted such a thing as true, if not for the convincing case that girl, his daughter, Sarada, had made. He was in the future, a future where he had settled down and started a family. Presumably, this meant his future self had succeeded in killing Itachi. She'd been oddly tight-lipped on that topic, Sasuke hummed. Opposite him sat Sakura Hiruno, his teammate, and apparently his wife. On one hand, Sasuke could somewhat kind of appreciate the choice his other self had apparently made. She was an intelligent girl, and honestly a little closer to his tastes than he would, in pride, be willing to admit, had he not been so driven to distraction for so many years with determination to avenge his family, and had she not joined up with the rest of his squealing fangirls, he might have honestly considered an interest in her. Not that he would ever confess as much, especially not now, with the girl so starry-eyed and staring at him from across the table. If there had ever been a time when Sasuke Uchiha had truly and hopelessly cursed his unwanted ability to make girls go gaga over him, it was now. It boggled the mind. Sasuke didn't see himself as a charming person. He had no idea what all those girls saw in him, to be frank. He was bitter, asocial, wrapped in darkness and scarred by grief. The phrase damaged goods surely existed solely to describe people like himself. He was not the kind of person that he thought a smart or self-respecting girl should pursue. Couldn't they see how messed up he was, how dangerous a path he would have to walk? It galled Sasuke that so many girls should be so smitten with him. It felt insulting, somehow, like their infatuation devalued the tragedy of his clan's destruction, romanticizing his pain and frustration into an unrecognizable caricature of the person he really was. Their smiling, giggling, blushing, and cooing all angered him, like they saw it all as one big game, like they didn't take anything seriously. They didn't get it, they refused to understand. Sasuke was too different. He couldn't relate to them, couldn't comprehend them. He wasn't like them. Grimacing, he grabbed the teacup with his right hand, then took a sip of its contents. He refused to look Sakura in the eye. "You're so handsome, dear red heart," she tittered, undeterred by his attempt to ignore her presence. Her eyes twinkled with glee. Sigh. Sasuke set down his cup. "We're not married," he told her. "That's not what our daughter said," Sakura replied, waving a hand and smiling indulgently. "She's not our daughter," Sasuke replied. "She's the daughter of another Sasuke, and another Sakura."
You didn't give birth to her, your other self did. I never married you, but we will, Sakura said, clapping her hands and squealing. This is the future, Sasuke-kun. We're destined to be together. What good is destiny, Sasuke muttered. If I had any choice in the matter, my family. He went quiet, pensive. Sakura's smile faltered. Despite her exuberance and cheer at discovering that she was married to Sasuke-kun in at least this future, she was still leagues better at reading the atmosphere than people like, say, Naruto. Her expression fell, and she looked down into her own tea. Not another word was spoken for several minutes. Quietly, awkwardly, the two of them sipped their tea. All at once, after a lengthy quiet, there came a knock at the door. The sudden noise was jarring, and both adult-bodied preteens jumped in their seats. Sakura-san, Sasuke-san, are you home? Bolt. Serida's voice rang through the air, and the Uchiha appeared with the faintest flicker of movement. Her hair was a mess and her face was red. She appeared harried and disheveled. Her glasses had slid halfway down the bridge of her nose, and she only took a second to push them back up before ejaculating. Bolt, crap, we've really messed up, she said frantically. The blonde turned to look at her. His parents' bedroom door was open, and it looked like he had been seconds away from bolting inside. An irritated look crossed his face, and he glowered impatiently at Serida. Not now, he said. I just heard Mum collapse. She must be really sick. Serida frowned thoughtfully, and she seemed to hesitate for a second. Collapsed? Odd. She narrowed her eyes. But Bolt, I have to know. Were either of your parents acting strange this morning? Bolt grimaced and formed a shadow clone. He nodded to the construct, and his cage bunshin headed into the bedroom. Then he crossed his arms over his chest and turned to face Serida, giving off a weary and lancifering sigh. Strange, he said. This had better be important. If my mom's got anything serious, he glared warningly. The boy was nearly as protective of his mother as he was of his sister, and once he started worrying about them there was very little that could make him stop. Some of his snarkier peers had teased Bolt about having a sister Oedipus complex more than once, and joking or not, there was a tiny seed of truth there. Himori and Hinata Uzumaki were very up Boruto's list of priorities, and even his maybe not girlfriend rarely took precedence. Serida knew this, and she nodded, collecting her thoughts for a moment before continuing. Please answer my question first, she said, her expression strained. Have they been acting strange? Bolt swore and threw his hands up in the air. Yes, fine. Dad has, he answered snippily. Mum also sounded a little out of it before she collapsed. His expression then became a perplexed one, with just a hint of pink dusting his cheeks, when the sound of his shadow clone dispelling reached their ears. Furrowing his brow, Bolt shook his head, clearly trying to get an image of some sort out of his mind's eye. Chakra exhaustion, he said, bemused. How the heck would she have chakra exhaustion this early in the morning? She and Dad didn't even get out of bed until recently, as far as I know. Serida hummed thoughtfully. I thought so, she said. Their bodies are used to having much greater amounts of chakra flowing through them, so now that their reserves are so much smaller it's like a sort of chakra anemia. Anemia? Bolt said. Then he shook his head. Wait, what? Why would their reserves be smaller? The hell are you talking about, Kinpao? Seijin Koshin Jiken Morshi no Jutsu, Serida intoned, adjusting her glasses with a grimace. Forbidden technique. Art of adult child body temporal revolving, or, in layman's terms, a time travel jutsu that takes a person's consciousness and sends it into the past, by switching that present consciousness with a past incarnation. Bolt blinked. Wait, you mean, huh? That jutsu worked? He gawped for a moment, stunned, then he scowled. Damn it, if you knew that was how it worked, then why did you go along with it? Idiot. Serida hit him on the head. As if I knew then. I've just put it all together after realizing. She gave him a meaningful look, and gestured into the bedroom. Bolt's jaw dropped as he connected the dots. We switched our parents' brains with the brains of their past selves. Maybe not literally, said Serida, since they seem able to walk around in their bodies, but their minds, definitely. Fuck, Bolt moaned. We are so dead if they ever find out, let alone if Shikamaru-san finds out, Serida said. I heard your dad shouting a little earlier. He sounded very, excited about being Hokage. Bolt paled as the realization struck. How old are they? Do you know? He asked, looking fearful. Mum and Dad said they were 12, Serida answered. And you left them unattended? Bolt gaped, disbelieving. I'm not the one whose dad is the Hokage, Serida retorted. Bolt's heart stopped for just a second. My dad's the Hokage, he whispered. That idiot who doesn't even know what amnesia is the man responsible for. Oh shit, is it that bad? Serida asked, a little caught off guard by the severity of Bolt's reaction. I thought he was just playing a really bad joke, Bolt murmured in response. But, shit, I know he was dead last in his year, way back when. But, was he really that stupid? You weren't exactly the brightest yourself at his age, Serida replied. I was practically top of the class, Bolt riposted, sounding almost like a whine. Having good grades doesn't preclude you from doing stupid things, Sarada said, which you most certainly did do. In spades. She gave him a faintly baleful look. Bolt pouted. Sheesh, you're awfully pissy this morning, he muttered. I have seen things no woman should ever have to see, Sarada hissed, glaring so hard that her Sharingan automatically activated. Do not try me today, Boruto. Bolt was silent for a moment. Shikamaru's going to kill us when he finds out, isn't he? Sarada grimaced. Slowly and painfully. He was the Hokage. This was his office. It was a dream come true except for one odd detail. Naruto stared at the heap of papers on his desk. It looked high enough that if he sat down in the seat no one would be able to see his face. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Hey, what's with all this? He asked the bespectacled guy who'd guided him here. Paperwork, said Udon bluntly. Naruto nodded. Yeah, he said. So what's it doing on my desk, waiting for your signature? Udon replied, giving Naruto an odd look. Wait, you mean this is all mine? Naruto trailed off, his expression turning into one of dawning horror. So Udon said, frowning, are you feeling okay? No, Naruto said, I feel like this dream has turned into a nightmare. Weakly, Udon chuckled. You have an amusing sense of humor as ever, so he said deferentially. But really, we must get a start on these forms. Mizukage-sama is requesting a cage summit to discuss the increase of pirate activity in Mizu no Kuni's waters, and Kazekage-sama wants to adjust tariffs on imported goods. In addition, the daimyo has commissioned an A-rank mission to guard his nephew at an upcoming marriage interview with the daughter of the Land of Snow's daimyo, and the Land of Waves wants to renegotiate some old trade agreements. Also, your daughter's academy instructors want to talk to you about the possibility of early graduation. I know where you normally stand on this matter, but they are quite insistent that she would have nothing to gain from another year of schooling. I honestly think there might be some merit to the idea. Naruto was stock still for a moment as all of this sank in. He stared blankly at Udon, and his jaw slowly dipped lower and lower as the bespectacled shinobi continued to read off a mental itinerary. Oh hell, what was all this? Is that my work for the week? Naruto inquired with a pale face and nervous expression. The week, Udon quizzically parroted. This is just the stuff that's piled up since this morning. Naruto let out a sound that was unequivocally the least manly noise this body had produced since the last time the Hokage's personal physician had ordered him to cut back on his sodium intake, specifically, by cutting ramen out of his diet, permanently. The tearful, shameless whining and begging that had filled the doctor's office on that day was almost as pitiful as the noise that now escaped him. I think I'm gonna go on vacation, Naruto whimpered, turning to head for the door. He didn't get to make more than a single step before freezing up. And just where do you think you're going, Nanadame-san? This voice reached Naruto's ears. He did not recognize the speaker, but the tone was enough to send a dagger of ice shooting through his gut. Against his will, Naruto turned around and came face to face with a darkly glowering, goateed and ponytailed man. Despite years of stress lining the man's face around the mouth and eyes, and the unfamiliar facial hair, Naruto found himself immediately knowing who this person was. The resemblance was that strong. Shikamaru, he gaped. With a twitching eye and veins throbbing in his temple, the man was a truly frightful sight, and while Shikamaru wasn't exactly looking serene to begin with, he was much calmer outwardly than he was on the inside. Even Naruto was perceptive enough to see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Even Naruto could see this much. The blonde gulped. Shikamaru smiled, except something about the gesture felt more like the naked baring of teeth, a thinly veiled threat. Naruto, Shikamaru said slowly. I know you like to act childish, sometimes, but usually you at least know to become an adult when it's time to work. No one wants to deal with responsibility, but as men we have to grin and bear it, so you had better have a very good excuse for taking so long to come in. Naruto whimpered in spite of himself. He was rooted to the spot. It felt like his feet were nailed to the floor, only without any of the obvious pain that would come with that. I didn't know I was supposed to come, he said weakly. Shikamaru glared. Normally, Naruto, I'd let you off the hook for something like this, he said lowly. You're usually a pretty reliable guy, and I can accept that your job is even more demanding than mine in some ways, so naturally there'll be times when you want to sleep in or take the day off. Heaven knows I don't hesitate to do as much when I think I can get away with it. Shikamaru shook his head, a vein throbbing harder. But how old do you think you are, he asked, the question clearly rhetorical. You're an adult, Naruto. If you're going to come in late, then use your telephone to call and let us know. Quick question, Naruto interjected, his hand shooting up into the air. What's a telephone? For a moment, Shikamaru stared. He twitched once, twice. Silently, menacingly he reached behind his back and drew a razor-edged tesson. Fast as a bolt of lightning, he snapped the fan closed and whipped it through the air,
straight at Naruto's head. The blonde managed to just barely dodge on reflex, reacting before his brain had even begun to register the threat. 3 severed yellow locks of hair drifted to the floor. Wow, what the hell? Naruto yelped. Don't swing that around. You could have taken my head off, you crazy bastard. What are you talking about, Hokage-sama? Shikamaru said in an even tone. It's just a Hiruzen. The natural thing to do when someone says something that stupid is to smack them on the head with a Hiruzen, right? He flicked the fan out again, and Naruto again found himself ducking beneath a stroke so quickly he didn't even see what was happening. He heard the sound of steel striking wood, a sharp scraping, and cautiously looked up to see a deep, clean, horizontal gash in the door. A Hiruzen is supposed to be harmless, Naruto protested, leaping out of the way of another swipe. It's just a folded paper fan that makes a loud noise when it hits. This thing is the exact opposite of that, Shikamaru smiled. When dealing with an idiot on the level of a Hokage, it's only natural for a Hiruzen to be clad in iron and sharpened to a hair-splitting edge, he said. That's the minimum amount of threat needed to hammer something into your head, isn't it? He turned the fan sideways and spread it, smacking Naruto atop the head with the flat of the tesson. You dodged all the dangerous swings, after all, Shikamaru said, smiling more genuinely now. He looked calmer, less annoyed and ready to strangle his boss for breathing too loudly. Naruto's sweat dropped. So you're admitting it's dangerous, he muttered. Oh, don't make a fuss, Shikamaru said dismissively, putting the fan away. If that was all it took to harm you, you would have never made the cut for Hokage. So quit complaining and let's get to work, okay? You're not a kid anymore, I'm not the one who was bitching. Naruto snapped. And even if this is a dream I'm still. He paused. Wait. Naruto dimly raised a hand to rub the crown of his head. I felt that, he said slowly, his eyes widening infinitesimally. Even if it wasn't very painful, it still hurt. But that can't be right. Dreams aren't supposed to hurt, are they? Hokage-sama, said Udon, standing by the door. What are you talking about? Why do you keep saying dream this, and dream that? Did you hit your head this morning? I did when this jackass hit me, Naruto peevishly muttered, jabbing a finger at Shikamaru. The goateed man snorted. So what, do you think this is all a dream or something? Naruto, he deadpanned. Isn't it? Naruto frustratedly replied, throwing his hands up in the air. Shikamaru stared at Naruto for several long seconds. He frowned, and opened his mouth to say something, but he was interrupted by the door flying wide open, Moji bursting into the room. Shikamaru-sama, she breathlessly exclaimed. We have a situation. Sasuke-san and Sakura-sana. Sasuke and Sakura walked into the office behind her. The former was trying and failing to affect a stoic demeanor, while the latter did not even try to hide her horror. Both stared at Naruto, recognizing him immediately despite his aged-up appearance. Oh god, this really is a bad future, isn't it? Sasuke said, his face paling. Is that idiot seriously the Hokage? On the one hand, I'm married to Sasuke-kun, Sakura whispered, but on the other hand, Naruto is the Hokage. She shuddered. Naruto brightened immediately, completely failing to read the mood, and leaped over to Sakura. Sakura-chan, he cheered, throwing his arms wide. Wanna go on a date? She punched him in the face. No way, Sakura protested. I'm married to Sasuke-kun now. Several things happened at once. Then, firstly, Sakura's body channeled chakra into her fist, as much chakra as it could muster, and released it all at once at the moment of impact. With her chakra reserves as small as they were, this punch was only a fraction of its potential strength, and the amount of chakra it expelled was enough to leave the girl woozy. Secondly, while Sakura's punch was only at a fraction of its usual power, this was still more than enough to send Naruto flying across the room with a broken nose gouting blood into the air. He crashed into his desk and tipped it over, sending the papers flying everywhere at once. Naruto went out like a light. Thirdly, Bolt and Sarada had in fact been in the process of bringing a bleary-eyed Hinata to the Hokage's office, when Naruto threw himself at Sakura, and in response to the blonde's cry Hinata slumped into a black gloom. She became instantly despondent and refused to react to any jostling or jolting on her carrier's parts. Her soul looked ready to leak out of her mouth, and all color had evacuated from her face. Fourthly, Shikamaru, with this new influx of information brought by Sasuke and Sakura's behavior and comments, along with his pre-existing knowledge of the various time travel jutsu Naruto had sealed away in the Forbidden Scroll, had enough data and context to add the values up and come to a conclusion. He stared around the room at the bloody, insensate Nanadame, the wobbling, dizzy chief medic, the visibly perturbed Sasuke, the gloomy Hinata, and the guilty looks on Bolt and Sarada's faces. A vein throbbed in his forehead. Ive, he sighed. Boruto, Sarada, exactly what did you two do to your parents? The teens' backs went ramrod straight, and they froze on the spot. Not just from Shikamaru's shadow possession jutsu either. Listening to the pair's nervous chuckles, Shikamaru sourly marched them into the office. The door slammed shut. Explain, Shikamaru repeated. Now, Bolt and Sarada fearfully gulped. The story tumbled out of the teens' mouths like water from a faucet, splashing all over the place in an incoherent mess. Bolt was babbling uncontrollably, and Sarada seemed to be confessing every slightest transgression she'd committed in the last 10 years, from jaywalking to copying off of classmates' homework to misfiling mission reports and neglecting to correct the errors. Shikamaru towered over the pair, seeming much taller than usual in his silent wrath. It was only natural for the Hokage's right-hand man to be on the imposing side, whether physically or psychologically, and Shikamaru's shadow Buddha Nara was no exception. Even the son and favored successor of the Hokage, Boruto and Sarada respectively, were not immune to retribution from the man they called the century's greatest strategist. Yammering anxiously away, they spilled the beans in a tangled jumble of words, talking over one another and bouncing back and forth in tense, setting, voice, and tone. It was all over the place, and most people wouldn't have been able to make heads or tails of the panicked confession. But Shikamaru quietly listened with his arms folded over his chest, eyes closed, nodding to himself once or twice as the picture unfolded in his mind. He sorted through the story as it was told, analyzing the account on multiple levels simultaneously as they told it. Finally, he had enough to go on and raised a hand up, holding it palm outward to silence the pair. Okay, he said, sighing languorously, that's enough. I think I get the picture. Shaking his head, Shikamaru looked from Sakura, who was leaning against Sasuke, to Sasuke, who was blushing and trying to gingerly shift Sakura off of him, to Hinata, who was moping beside a sympathetic-looking Moji, to Naruto, whose broken nose was being tended to by udon. Then he let his gaze fall on Sarada and Bolt. A vein throbbed in his forehead, and his left eye twitched. If you two weren't who you are, Shikamaru said slowly, dangerously, I'd have you arrested on the spot for tampering with the forbidden scroll and performing an outlawed kinjutsu. Some villagers would consider that sufficient grounds for charges of high treason. Bolt and Sarada nervously gulped. Considering the circumstances, however, I know better, Shikamaru added, continuing on. He gave both teens a penetrating glance. You kids are both special cases, in a sense, loath as I am to admit it. We can't just execute you or put you in the stocks for this, mostly because Hokage-sama has outlawed or heavily regulated most of the more barbaric forms of punishment you might have earned with a stunt like this in the past, but also partly because of your relationships to him, either as his son, or one of his personally favored choices for succession. For a moment, Bolt and Sarada looked like they were about to breathe a sigh of relief. Shikamaru smirked. So instead, I'll leave the bulk of your punishment up to your parents, once they get back. His eyes gleamed with an almost sadistic pleasure, seeing the immediate, terrified reaction this statement elicited from the kids. And, make no mistake, they will get back. Oh, of course, Shikamaru, Boruto stammered. We'll help reverse the jutsu, of course, right? Sarada yelped. We'll do whatever it takes to get them back. Shikamaru nodded. I know, he said, and you'll be wearing these until they do get back. With a gesture of his hand, a tendril of shadow appeared pulling something out of a closet in the office. The Kagyoshi tentacle twisted around to reveal its load to the two teens. Bolt and Sarada stared. Two gaudy signboards reading "We will not mess around with forbidden jutsu" were dangled in front of their faces. Bold, colorful, traffic cone orange was the color of the boards, and the lettering was done in sharp, glossy black. The colors alone made it clear this was something the Nanadame had personally made. Paling significantly, the teens nervously swallowed. Shikamaru afforded them a cold smile. Now put them on and get to work, he said. Why yes sir, Bolt and Sarada squeaked, snapping off fearful salutes. They took the proffered boards and draped them over their torsos, but after doing this they hesitated for a moment as if unsure how to proceed next. I assume you have notes on the jutsu, Shikamaru said. Yeah, Bolt replied, but I gave them to Sarada last night. What did you do with them? He turned and asked her. Sarada flushed. They're at my house, she answered. Go get them then, Shikamaru said. Both of you. Udon can go with, once he's done treating Lord Sev. Naruto. He caught himself at the last moment, making a mental note to call up Kakashi and ask him a favor. The teens gaped. But that's halfway across town, Sarada squeaked. She looked down at the signboards she and Boruto had been forced to don, anxiously fiddling with one of the straps over her shoulders. Her face was beet red, and her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Shikamaru was unmoved. This is part of your punishment, he coolly replied. Maybe a healthy dose of public humiliation will make you kids think twice the next time you consider messing with kinjutsu. Bolt and Sarada blushed and gulped. Of course, Shikamaru-san, they said. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes. That's Sama to you. Why yes, Shikamaru-sama, they squealed.
Chunin exam stadium timeline. B to the past day. Clamor arose as Naruto and Sasuke headed back to the other exam participants.
Spectating nobles ordered their attendants to make notes on the performance of the finalists, already mentally calculating bids for those young ninja to carry out missions for them. Local shinobi who weren't completely dispirited by the level of this fight likewise started revising their training regimens from the ground up. Konoha's civilians, on the other hand, were in a state of shock, cheering out of patriotism, but privately chilled with fear at the revelation of Naruto and Sasuke's power. In particular, those who had alienated, ignored, or neglected the former were quite frankly petrified. Naruto had never been outright abused, no matter what some writers might insist, at least not in any traditionally understood sense of the word. He was cared for as an infant, bottle-fed and all that, and as a young child he had a roof over his head and food on the table, thanks to Konoha's deftly managed social welfare programs, but he'd always been alone, an outcast. That was all it took to mess a kid up, and it was all that had happened to him. He wasn't chased by angry mobs or beaten halfway to death by vengeful drunks, although there certainly were shopkeepers who'd chased him away in the past, worried that his presence would scare away their customers. And yes, parents told their kids to stay away from him, and some people muttered darkly when they saw him, but that was the extent of it. And while that was certainly enough to make the civilians of Konoha, and a few of its shinobi as well, fear a little for their safety, it was more due to the fact that many of them still associated Naruto to some degree with the Nine Tails, a connection that had only been strengthened by the giant, fox-shaped shroud of chakra he'd used in his fight against Sasuke, than any worry over retribution for significant trespasses. From their perspective, it wasn't like they'd done anything wrong, they hadn't kicked or cursed or molested him or anything like that. Sure, parents warned their kids to stay away from Naruto, and most others steered clear of him, but that was for their own safety. Sealing was a very esoteric discipline, and even among shinobi, there were few who truly understood the most advanced techniques. As far as they knew, the only thing holding the fox back was a bit of Incan chakra. To the civilians, who had seen the Nine Tails shatter buildings with just its roar, and rend through steel and concrete and solid wood with aught but the air pressure from swipes of its claws, this seemed incredible, and too good to be true. Even those elite ninja who understood how Fuinjutsu worked had reason to be wary. Just looking at the history of Biju in the other villages, whether Shukaku in Sunagakure, or the Hachibi in Kumo, there were ample reports of Jinchuriki being overtaken by the beasts within them and going on destructive or murderous rampages. The Kyuubi's own history in Konoha was a much better kept secret, known only to the eldest and most highly ranked, so it wasn't like they avoided Naruto just to be assholes. There were legitimate reasons for them to be wary, and considerable historical precedent for the unpredictability of Jinchuriki. Even if ignorant civilians, or younger ninja, did not understand all of this, they could be excused when, even many of those who did understand were cautious of Naruto. Not that this meant it was intelligent or sensible of them to alienate the boy, but fear and memories of loss rarely led people to make rational decisions. Aside from citizens of the Leaf who were old enough to know the secret of Naruto's tenet though, most of the rest of the people in the audience were simply amazed. Whether it was Konoha kids and fellow genin, or foreign dignitaries and spectators, or even villagers from outlying townships, they applauded the match. Holy crap, since when have genin been so powerful? Some older ninja said incredulously. The Uchiha clan really must have been something, to produce a kid like that, said others. Kaya, wow, they're both actually really cute, aren't they? So cool, Red Heart, gushed an exceptional number of girls, and a lesser, but not insignificant number of boys within the age range of the winner and his opponent. Aren't they teammates, mused a couple people. Their sensei is Kakashi Hatake, right? That Sharingan hero from the Battle of Kanabi Bridge, and he was taught by the Yellow Flash. At least one person responded to the previous. Who was taught by the Toad Sage, who was taught by the Professor, who was taught by the first and second Hokage. Geez, talk about a privileged legacy. Those kids seem destined for greatness, don't they? And a handful of spies from other villages, secreted away in the stadiums, mentally prepared their next reports. Holy shit, thought one Iowa informant. I don't think even the Yellow Flash was anywhere near that strong. I'm not sure if even Sachikage-sama is that strong, given his age. She shuddered. Konoha has some real monsters in this new generation, Akiri spy mused elsewhere. His hands were trembling, and his face was ashen white. I don't think it would even be possible to assassinate them, he gulped. An agent from Kumo scribbled out a terse, encoded report on a small scroll and slipped it into a secure case on his summoned owl's leg. Its contents wouldn't make sense to anyone who didn't have the key, but even if they did, the brevity of the message wouldn't lend much clarity without exact context. We are so fucked. Are you guys for real? Ino pointed from Naruto to Sasuke, seeming utterly bewildered. She looked back and forth between the two boys, gaping disbelievingly. Seriously, what the hell was that? How? Even for someone like Sasuke-kun, that was so much for not setting too high a bar, Shikamaru muttered.
Now mom'll never get off my case about training more. Yeesh. I got exhausted just watching you two go at it. Naruto grinned and scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. Sorry, we eat our vegetables, he fibbed, blatantly sidestepping the question. Meh, we're just that talented, was Sasuke's response. In turn, Sakura stepped forward, chortling, and put a hand on the latter's shoulder. She winked. I hope you don't plan on changing into new clothes, she joked, looking at her man's tattered shorts and bare chest. More quietly, she purred, it may be scrawnier than I'm used to, but my darling's body is my darling's body, at the end of the day, no fair. Ino whined, overhearing this. Even though you tease me like that, you're still into, I'm into a lot of things, Ino-chan red heart. Sakura chirped, blowing a kiss to the blonde. But maybe I'll help you find a nice boy for yourself, eh? Ino blushed fiercely. One of her nostrils dripped a single drop of red. Why yes, she squeaked. Of course, mistress. Shikamaru looked away and sighed, a bead of sweat streaking down the side of his head. They're all completely mad, he groaned miserably. Ugh, what a drag. Temari, standing nearby, grimaced and gave him a sympathetic look. Her face was a little pinker than usual, but the smile was genuine enough, and she nodded in agreement with his conclusion. I know that feeling, she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Shikamaru, with his genius intellect, could not help thinking of the fact that Naruto had flashed this girl with a harem jutsu modeled after himself not an hour earlier. He guessed that there was no way Temari could have forgotten it so quickly, and no doubt the images were dancing through her head even as she voiced her sympathies. It took an unusual amount of willpower on the Nara's part to keep himself from jumping to conclusions at the fact that Temari was able to look him in the eye after that and only have a small blush, wondering whether her lack of apparent disgust in regards to him was because of emotional maturity or because, well, she had liked what she'd seen. Aside from a liberty or two between the legs, Naruto's sexy jutsu had been remarkably accurate. Shikamaru struggled not to let his brain run away from him with thoughts like this. To distract himself from these thoughts, Shikamaru latched onto something else instead. So Naruto really is the vessel of the nine tails, after all, he commented, changing the subject and looking at the blonde. Naruto grinned and gave him a peace sign. Hehe, when did you figure it out? He asked cheerfully, effectively confirming the lad's suspicions. I knew for sure during your fight, Shikamaru said, but I've suspected as much for years. Ever since we joined the academy? Wow, really? Naruto said, laughing. And here I only found out the day I got my head banned. Temari gaped. Wait, seriously, she said. That sounds horrendously dangerous, eh? Dad's sealing jutsu was hella powerful, Naruto replied, shrugging it off. There was a moment of silence as those contestants who were born and raised in Konoha processed this information. Jaws dropped after a few moments as the slowly burgeoning lotus of understanding spread its petals within their minds. Hinata smiled indulgently and clasped Naruto's hand. Wasn't that supposed to be a secret? She said in a mildly amused tone. If it was, it wasn't a very well kept one, Naruto said. Only a complete idiot would miss the resemblance. He then sneezed the instant he finished his sentence. Sasuke stifled a snort. Secret meeting room timeline gamma. The future. It was the kind of scene conspiracy theorists would die to capture on film. The heads of Konoha's most prominent clans, from Aburame to Yamanaka, several of the highest-ranking members of its government, including two past Hokage and the present Lord Seventh's trusted advisor, and even a handful of lauded rookies from the new generation, all of them were meeting in a single room, a secure and secret chamber hardened against attack and warded against surveillance, buried deep underneath the Hokage Tower's foundations. A long table was dotted with the bluish-white glow of tablet screens sitting before every occupied chair, automatically scrolling their various graphs and algorithms. In the center of the table, a holographic projector cast the glimmering, three-dimensional shapes of amorphous starbursts and whirling vortices of cosmic dust into the air. It was pretty, but not particularly meaningful at the moment. There were Lady Tsunade and Lord Kakashi, 5th and 6th Hokage, Hanabi Hyruga, head of the Hyruga, Sayamanaka, senior Anbu captain, Shino Aburame, Kiba Inuzuka, Temari Nara, Chaoji and Keru Akimichi, Kyunui, Mirai, and Konohamaru Seratobi, Tenten, Rock Lee, and Might Guy. From clan heads to first-rate shinobi, many of the village's most powerful people were assembled here. Yes, peering around at the occupants of the room, Shikamaru mused that this gathering really was the kind of thing that would get conspiracy theorists foaming at the mouth. From the outside looking in, people would view it as a meeting of the village's highest elite, an eerily inscrutable collective of the most powerful people in Konoha, both martially and politically. And yet, watching as Chaoji snacked on a bag of chips, Kiba put his feet up on the table, doodled in his sketchpad, and the others shared juicy bits of gossip and stories of their daily doings. Shikamaru couldn't help but feel like they were all treating this as little more than an ice cream social. How troublesome. Sighing as he thought this,
Shikamaru sat down at the head of the table. Usually this was Naruto's seat, a position of authority reserved for the Hokage, but considering recent developments, well, he'd have to take the spot for now. His fingers clicked a brief sequence of keys on the input panel, and the tablets around the table let out little ding sounds as they unlocked access to files and documents relevant to this meeting. Displays brightened, and at once all of the small screens shifted to a directory of links. The assembled figures and persons looked down curiously. Temari was the first one to say anything. "What's all this then?" she said, tapping the topmost link. "Brain scans, biometrics, preliminary psychiatric evaluations. This is Sakura's medical record," noted Tsunade, looking younger than ever as she perused a list of past illnesses, injuries, and medications. "My sister's is here too," remarked the young Hyuga clan head, Hanabi, and her husband's. Konohamaru looked up, seated beside Hanabi. "Really? Hokage-sama's records as well," he said, surprised. "I heard rumors of him coming down with some sort of illness this morning, but even Sasuke-san's records are here," Sai interjected, looking up. "It's interesting that the most recent notes are almost all about psychological or neurological tests though. Is this what my wife left the house in such a rush for? What a tragedy," opined Lee, his words accompanied by appropriately grandiose gesticulations. "To think that Hokage-sama, his wife, and his former teammates could have all fallen sick in a single day." "Indeed," said Academy instructor and upcoming Aburame clan head, Shino. "A tragedy that would seem as though it had to be caused by enemy action." "Why?" "Because 1 falling sick is natural, 2 falling sick is a coincidence, 3 falling sick is suspicious, but 4 of the village's most prominent figures becoming deathly ill in a single morning." There was a stir around the table at this insinuation, and Shikamaru resisted the urge to massage his temples as voices rose and people started to bicker. "What are we doing? Wasting time around this table? If someone's tried to assassinate Hinata and Hokage-sama, call up the Anbu and have them find the culprit." Kiba Inuzuka growled, pounding the surface of the table and baring his fangs. "Assuming it was the result of an assassination attempt," said the retired Rokudame, Kakashi Hatake. "From what I can see here, their only notable physical problems at present are mild to moderate cases of chakra anemia, and while that is certainly suspicious, they could just be out of shape," suggested Chaoji, the Akimichi clan head. "Chakra reserves will atrophy if they aren't regularly tapped past a certain extent. A lot of the older, retired members of the Akimichi clan have similar problems." His wife Keru, seated next to him, nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure it's nothing," she said. "We've got medicine for that. Feed them a diluted soldier pill or 2 and they should be fine, eh?" "Isn't this a lot more serious than that?" said Tenten, a Jounin and proud owner of a specialty weapons shop, as well as a few of the oldest and most priceless artifacts in the world, that just so happen to be ninja tools. "Whether it's illness, or enemy action, if Lord Hokage is bedridden, shouldn't we be doing something about that?" "Indeed," declared Might Guy from his wheelchair. "Now is the time for action." Kyuni rested her forehead in the palm of her hand. "Ugh, I am 1,000 times too hungover to deal with him this early in the morning," she muttered. "It's almost noon, Mum," said Mirai. "My point still stands." The bickering and debating continued, and it looked like tempers were about to flare, especially on the parts of Kiba, Shino, and Hanabi. They were worried about Hinata, no doubt. Kakashi maintained his calm through years of practice, though, likely aided by a keen insight and knack for picking up on small details. "Shikamaru hasn't actually told us why he called this meeting yet," the Lord Sixth noted. "I think this matter might be more complicated than we think." Tiredly, Shikamaru nodded. "Your students make terrible decisions, Konohamaru," he said pointedly, turning to face the Sarutobi. Konohamaru groaned. "What have they done this time?" Silently, Shikamaru tapped a big red button. The hologram projector flickered, and semi-translucent, 3-dimensional images of 4 familiar figures came to life above the table. Holograms of Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Hinata smiled as they rotated in the air. The images shifted, then, and beside each of them a 3-dimensional brain scan split apart into multiple sections with floating, holographic notes and measurements. Anomalous interactions between brain cells and chakra. Synchronization subnormal. Concluded less than 50% compatibility of present perimental pathways with subject's physical neurology. Higher brain function, personality, and conscious memory show highest disconnect between yin and yang aspects. Brain stem and unconscious sectors appear least affected. Hormone levels within standard deviation for age and gender of subjects. Motor functions and reflexes unchanged. Preliminary psychiatric evaluations inconclusive. Signs of potential Hiruno effect in subjects may warrant extended observation. Tsunade narrowed her eyes, scanning over the 3D charts and diagrams. Crossing her arms over her chest, she let out a sigh that seemed to carry the full weight of her age. A deceptively youthful-looking visage wrinkled at the brow as she frowned. "Shizune took these notes, didn't she?" she shrewdly remarked. "I can tell."
HMPH. Hiruno effect, though, that's Ino's terminology. This seems to suggest some kind of Yamanaka mind jutsu. But, what's a Hiruno effect? Wondered Mirai, pursing her lips. I've never heard of that. I'm not surprised, said Sai. It's a rare phenomenon, not least of which because it only becomes noticeable under artificial circumstances, and is not widely recognized outside my wife's immediate circle of colleagues. A door opened and Ino walked inside carrying a thick manila folder. All you need to know is that it means a massive headache for all of us, the blonde said smartly, nodding to her acquaintances around the table. Because Hokage-sama Hinata, Sasuke-kun, and Sakura have effectively regressed into 12-year-olds, Kakashi took a sharp, hissing intake of breath at this. Oh hell, he groaned. Is that why you called in me and Tsunade-sama? Lord Seventh is not fit for duty in his present state of mind, said Shikamaru with a pained, sympathetic grimace. I'd be happy to take his place, said Kiba smoothly. Really? I'm as qualified as anyone else in this room, aren't I? He grinned and gave a thumbs up. A beat. Sasuke and Sakura being out of commission is unfortunate, Shino remarked as though his former teammate hadn't said anything. Since both are highly ranked elites with numerous responsibilities, particularly in regards to the latter, it will be difficult adjusting the workloads. Konohamaru, Lee, Chaoji, and Sai could probably split Sasuke's work among themselves, but we have precious few medics of comparable level to Sakura, or in possession of as much administrative experience. Kiba bristled and shot his teammate a black look. Okay, maybe I don't have all the qualifications to fill in for Naruto, he griped, but I'm plenty good enough to cover Sasuke's damn ass. The others summarily ignored him. Aburame-san has a point, Hanabi mused, especially since we'll also want to divert some of those medics to figuring out a remedy for them. The Hyruga clan has a few private specialists in traumatic brain injuries and the like, if you need them. It's fortunate that Hinata hasn't been active in the field for years, said Kunai also. At least her status won't be leaving any such vacuums outside her own family, and I'm sure Boruto or Hanabi can take care of Himori for the time being. Speak for yourself, Konohamaru moaned. The next installment of Icha Icha is due in a month, and Hinata was writing this one. Gah. It'll be a nightmare sorting through her notes. I just hope this whole matter can be fixed and done with shortly. You know, at least a third of the people sitting around the table grew visibly disheartened at this news. Damn, that's a shame, Keru muttered, biting her lip. I've really been wanting to find out what happens. They ended the last one on such a cliffhanger. I know, right? Tenten said. Gah, and I'd already pre-ordered it too. Where from? Temari asked. I've been looking for a while, but I couldn't find any sites. Oh, it's a bookstore owned by one of my business associates, Tenten said. Just a small one, but they carry some real hidden gems. I'll bring you there some time. Shikamaru sighed as the discussion once more fractured into a number of vectors, each veering off course from the original topic. Yeah, he thought, this is going to take a while. Chunin Exam Stadium timeline B to the past are, they're quite fearsome, aren't they? Those students of Kakashi's. Kunai Yuhi took another swig from her hip flask, her face ruddy. It's amazing how strong they are. Asuma agreed, lighting another cigarette. Spent butts littered the floor at his feet. Simply terrifying. I'm glad I've never done anything to get on their bad side. Seriously, though, Kunai continued, slurring her words a bit. It's ridicule, crazy stupid how strong those two are. Not even Hinata's that strong, and I was sure she'd win this whole thing with both hands tied behind her back. Scrazzy, Asuma took a long drag of his cigarette, so much so that a full quarter of its length wound up glowing orange and crumbling into ash within a few seconds. He coughed loudly and explosively, the cigarette nearly flying right out of his mouth. Kakashi's really outdone himself with these guys, the man said with noticeable jitters. They're absolute monsters. It's absurd how powerful they are. Horribly unfair to the rest of us. Yakunai agreed, slouching in her seat. How can we compete with those lil devils some ways off? Anko Materashi was vocally applauding her date. You're a hell of a teacher, Kakashi, she crowed. Although I had a part in teaching Sasuke too, but I certainly know that I didn't teach him to make a giant suit of armor out of chakra. Haha, I didn't do all that much, honestly, said Kakashi in response, scratching the back of his. Largely I just focused on teamwork building exercises and stuff like that. Most of their techniques were self-taught or learned from independent mentors. You aren't giving yourself enough credit, Guy laughed. If the students excel so thoroughly, surely the master must have had some hand in it. This modesty is just what I would expect from my eternal rival, Kakashi sweet dropped. Ah yeah, I'm really not being modest, he said. Those three were ridiculously powerful well before I got my hands on them. In all honesty, they actually haven't even improved that much in the time since their genin test, aside from learning a wider array of jutsu, and even that has been more through their own independent study than any teaching on my part. Don't be so shy, killer, Anko teased, waggling her eyebrows. I'm not the one who taught Sasuke all those fancy visual jutsu, those were self-taught, Kakashi insisted. I didn't even know the Sharingan had such potential until after Sasuke first used Tsukuyomi on me, and most of Naruto's jutsu were either invented by the boy himself, or taught to him by Jiraiya Asama. Honestly, the only one of them I went out of my way to teach jutsu to was Sakura, and even she owes most of her power and control to simple independent training. Ha ha ha, Guy boisterously laughed. They say humility is characteristic of true greatness, Kakashi. I'll have to work hard to keep up with you as a teacher. Until now I've focused on Lee because he was the one most in need of help, and the one most likely to benefit from learning my style. But if my students are to stand a chance against yours, I will need to increase the intensity of all their training. Elsewhere in the audience, Neji and Tenten felt cold shivers go down their spines. Kakashi sighed. What part of autodidactic prodigies do you guys not understand? He wondered.
The part where you'd deny credit for making those kids so strong, Anko said, especially to the face of your sexy, easily impressed girlfriend. Why, she might be ready to jump your bones the second she has you alone, if only you'd go along with the praise. Oh, so you're easily impressed now, are you? Said Kakashi dryly. I am, as far as you know, Anko cheekily replied, giving him a rakish wink. She then placed a hand on his lap and leaned in close. Guy chortled and politely averted his gaze. It was a rare show of perceptiveness on the hot-blooded Jounin's part. Kakashi gulped and felt his cheeks burn red hot. Oh, he said lamely, unable to think of anything more eloquent. Anko grinned from ear to ear. Hyruga family estate timeline gamma. The future Hayashi Hyruga was not the most, emotionally savvy father out there, but he was good enough to know when his older daughter was upset. Some would say he was not the best dad in the world, and that he hadn't done the greatest job of nurturing his children when they were young, and he'd be among the first to say these detractors were probably right, but at the end of the day, he still cared for his daughters. He had been willing to fight a blind spaceman and his flying ninja army to protect Hinata and Hanabi, and had readily set aside his own pride and pleaded with the Hokage to stall the destruction of the moon during that whole fiasco 18 years back. Hayashi may not have been a tender or sensitive sort of man, but he still loved his children and tried to do right by them in his own way. So when he saw his eldest Hinata moping aimlessly around the compound with a despondent, dejected expression, naturally the man felt it was his duty to find out what was wrong. He might not have been the most gentle or supportive father, but he cared for his children and genuinely wanted them to be happy. Hello Hinata, is there something bothering you? He greeted her with this query and a small nod, walking up beside her. She gave a start at the sound of his voice, and spun around to face him. Right away, Hayashi could tell that she seemed tense, anxious. She stared at him for a moment, and almost it seemed like she was trying to work out who he was. Then her eyes widened and she grew a shade paler, stiffening up and noticeably straightening her back. Father, hello. I'm fine. She did not look him in the eye as she said this. Hayashi resisted the urge to frown, bemused by this reaction. He studied Hinata curiously for a moment, noting how she fidgeted and shuffled her feet. That was odd. He hadn't seen such worried and insecure body language from his daughter since the early days of her first pregnancy, when she had initially fretted over the well-being of her unborn child and her own fitness to be a mother. Even then, that had only lasted a few days, after which she shed her fears. By the time of her second pregnancy, she was as calm as an old hand and perfectly confident. And aside from that, Hayashi could not recall seeing Hinata so jumpy or nervous in decades, not since her youth. It was like she had lost almost all of the confidence she had built up over the years. To his knowledge, there was only one thing that might possibly have caused her to regress this badly, although even that felt like a serious stretch. Hayashi closed his eyes. Has there been a problem with your husband? He shrewdly inquired. An astute individual would have taken immediate note of the fact that a man as prim, proper, and fastidiously traditional as Hayashi did not refer to Naruto as Hokage-sama in asking this question. Hinata blushed and fidgeted. Hayashi did not need to see his daughter to know her reaction. He already knew the answer before she even said it. Yes, father, she admitted, folding immediately. Hayashi was a little taken aback by how quickly she confessed this. Right or wrong, his daughter was normally stubbornly protective of her husband, and almost never spoke ill of him, directly or indirectly, whether he deserved it or not. Was this a sign, then, that his son-in-law had done something too awful for even the patient and forgiving Hinata to gloss over? Or was the matter more complicated than that, or something else entirely? Hayashi, while not one to put much store by mere hearsay, had heard tell of the Nanadame allegedly falling ill. Although he did not know the veracity of these claims, he supposed that if Naruto became extremely sick, then Hinata might very well go beside herself with worry. Wanting to give the younger man a benefit of the doubt, Hayashi decided to inquire further into the specifics of his daughter's anxiety. She was less forthcoming on this part, however, and what little he could coax her to say was fragmented and confused. But with much reassuring and gentle wheedling, he eventually managed to figure out that Naruto had apparently engaged in some manner of flirtatious behavior with his former teammate, Sakura Uchiha. This somewhat bemused Hayashi, as while he chose to remain as ignorant as possible in regards to his daughter's sex life, because that was far too awkward a topic of conversation for an old-fashioned man like him, he nonetheless knew enough to understand that there had been understandings in the past between Hinata and her husband, particularly in regards to the Uchiha clan head and his wife. Uzumaki were a passionate lot, and Uchiha no less so, even if the latter was better at obfuscating it with a veneer of aloof stoicism, and the former in particular had once possessed something of a reputation for their libertarian views on sexuality and marriage. Some called them hedonists, others perverts, but a bold few actually emulated a couple of their bizarre traditions. Much though he would prefer not to know this, Hayashi was peripherally aware of the fact that his daughter and her husband had engaged in certain activities with the Uchiha couple in the past. Thus, he was at first a little puzzled that Hinata, who had in domesticity found her true calling and become almost immutably sure and confident over the years, should seem so distraught over something he would have thought was, well, just a thing they did. But then, the whole concept of such activities seemed unutterably alien to Hayashi in the first place, so he supposed it was not inconceivable that there might be a whole world of unspoken rules and courtesies he knew nothing about which dictated what was and was not appropriate in such arrangements, and it was equally conceivable that his son-in-law, however much he had matured over the years, might have through some lingering vestiges of thoughtless insensitivity crossed some nebulous line and distressed his daughter. It still felt like a bit of a stretch, but that was the best explanation he could come up with. Now, while a part of Hayashi immediately wanted to exact brutal retribution on Naruto, the more rational and restrained portions of his mind knew that assaulting the Hokage, aside from being horribly idiotic and easily construed as high treason, would not fix whatever underlying problems there were that had caused his daughter's apparent nervous breakdown, and Hinata still loved her husband. Hayashi could see that much as plain as daylight, and his daughter would most certainly not appreciate any violent actions on her father's part, so he took a deep breath, gave her a comforting pat on the shoulder, much to her apparent confusion, and resolved to have a talk with Lord Seventh at the nearest possible opportunity. "Dad, please stop hovering over my shoulder, I'm trying to focus." Sasuke Uchiha colored a little and took a step back. He still lingered in Sarada's immediate vicinity, however, and his eyes were trained intently on the young woman's back. "It's getting kinda creepy," Naruto muttered under his breath next to Sarada, tapping a pencil on a piece of notebook paper as he absent-mindedly studied a half-finished sketch of a seal array. "Why is he the only one still here? They took your mum back to the Hyuga estate, and my mum to stay with Shizune-san. I'm not sure where your dad got to, but I know they're keeping a close watch on him. And your dad, well, he didn't want to leave," Sarada said lamely. "And anemic chakra or not, he still has all his old reflexes. I don't think there's anyone short of the Hokage who could get him to budge," Bolt snorted. "I'm sure I could make him leave if I wanted to," he said. "Or, failing that, the two of us working together, maybe," Sarada said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose, "since he'd tire himself out quickly, without access to his usual reserves, but that would make a big ruckus, and things would probably get even more complicated. So we'll just have to suffer through the awkwardness for now." There was a moment of silence. "How's that jutsu formula look?" she asked. "Not good," Bolt said, knowing that Sarada was intentionally changing the topic. "If figuring out how to do the jutsu was hard, working out a way to reverse it will be a nightmare," Sarada hummed thoughtfully. "Maybe that's not the right way to go about it, though," she murmured. "If we performed the jutsu again, maybe we could." "Unlikely," Bolt said, "since we haven't ceased to exist, and since we continue to be aware of the fact that time travel has occurred, it is safe to assume that our past is unchanged. And I really doubt that this is because of our parents not changing anything. Besides, if you think about it, if they were sent into past, and we were operating under linear time, then what happened to them? Their present bodies are here, only occupied by past minds. Yet, if our parents' minds were sent into the past of this world, then logically wouldn't their present minds be here, occupying their bodies, only having gone through the past a second time up to this point?" Sarada blinked. "I didn't understand a single word of that," she said frankly. "Time travel is fucking confusing," Naruto commiserated, "but essentially, I don't think using the jutsu again would solve our problem. With our luck, it would just switch these past minds with other past minds, making things even more complicated. No, I think it's safe to say that space-time is operating under string theory, multiverse theory, or something analogous to that." "Oh," Sarada said, nodding slowly, "that makes more sense. So our parents are probably stuck in a tangential timeline that has completely diverged from this one, undoubtedly lost to us among a sea of infinite probability." A beat.
From outside Hokage Tower, citizens of Konoha were privy to the apparent explosion of a good chunk of the second floor's east wing. A great smashing sound alerted them to the sudden destruction, before wood and plaster started to rain down on the streets. With an ease of much practice, civilian passerby nimbly ducked for cover as the mostly harmless shrapnel fell. At first, some people wondered if the village was under attack. Some of the jumpier, more experienced old-timers, in particular, started heading for the emergency shelters, or running to fetch their weapons out of reflex. But then they heard a shout that anyone who had lived in this village for any length of time would be well familiar with. Shanaru, and, realizing that it was just Mrs. Uchiha or her daughter, the citizens promptly relaxed and resumed their regular activities.
Hokage's office timeline beat to the past. Hello, Danzo. I understand you wanted to meet with me. The Sandaime sat at his desk, hands folded in front of him, smiling and projecting a disarmingly kind and grandfatherly air. His old friend was not fooled one whit by this geniality, however. But then Danzo was not terribly open or emotional to begin with. I did indeed, said the former commander of Root in a gruff, unamused tone. As a matter of fact, I seem to recall making an appointment a week before the final phase of the exams. Curious how the request has only now been processed. A week after the final phase, he gave Hiruzen a pointed look and tapped his cane on the floor as if to punctuate his statement. It has been a very busy couple of weeks, said Hiruzen, shrugging. Both the incident with that party, then those new facts that were brought to light regarding young Itachi's case and the subsequent hearing, as well as organizing mandatory psychiatric exams for all shinobi above a certain rank. And of course the exam itself. I understand you haven't finalized your decision on the exam results, Danzo said evenly. He leaned on his cane and swept an eye over the Sandaime's table. It was nearly devoid of paperwork, a mark of Hiruzen's diligence and skillful time management. When will you announce the new promotions? When I've made my final decision, Hiruzen smartly replied. Foolish choices are often made in haste, but a little patience and thought can avert them entirely. Mulling too long over the same dilemma will send your mind into endless circles. However, Danzo shot back. Resolve yourself to act, or ruminate forever. Some things never changed. You are as impatient as ever, Danzo, and I see that you are still an indecisive panderer. Hiruzen, the Sandaime chortled. Did you make this appointment 2 weeks in advance merely to lecture me on timely action? I expected it to take no more than a day for my request to be processed, Danzo said. Considering my position, you are retired, Danzo. Officially, you have no position. Danzo glowered at the third, narrowing his one visible eye. With a harumph, he once more impatiently rapped his cane on the floor. His expression was stony and unreadable. What have you decided in regards to Kakashi's cell? He brusquely inquired. His students are certainly fit to become Chunin, Hiruzen said, stroking his beard. They have all demonstrated the necessary leadership skills in some form or other, and of course their strength is unprecedented. That is not what I meant, and you know it, Danzo muttered. Ah, is this a matter of how quickly Naruto's abilities have grown, then? Hiruzen ventured a guess. Do you and the council fear that the Nine Tails might be subverting the boy and teaching him skills too advanced for him to be trusted with, or that he is simply growing too strong, and poses a threat of some kind? Danzo gave Hiruzen an odd look. Why should I be concerned about that? He asked. Certainly the sheer level of the boy's mastery over the fox's chakra is surprising, and I do think precautions should be taken to ensure that he does not turn against the leaf. But if anything, I had until recently feared that the boy would turn out too weak to be of use to the village. So as long as his power is put to a constructive use, indeed, Hiruzen hummed, affording his old friend a small, wry smile, although I do believe that our definitions of constructive use vary wildly, HMPH. Undoubtedly, Danzo muttered with a dark scowl. But if nothing else, the power he displayed at the exams should serve as a deterrent against our enemies. And even if you are too soft-hearted to train the boy as he ought to be, surely you can at least appreciate the fact that the very knowledge of his existence as a Jinchuriki is an invaluable psychological weapon. Yes, fair enough, Hiruzen said. A fearsome reputation will deter all but the strongest and boldest, allowing us to spare ourselves from many a needless conflict. Such was the case with the boy's father, and with the Uchiha clan as well, to a degree. Danzo's expression soured. And so you touch on the heart of my concerns, he said. The Nine Tails Jinchuriki is impressionable and simple-minded, such that he should be easy to keep in line, but his teammate is another matter entirely. Oh, not this again, Hiruzen couldn't help but groan. You and your damn obsession. Yes, this again, Danzo responded. I will not back down. The Uchiha should not be trusted, really now, will you never stop? Hiruzen shook his head and reached into his desk, bringing up a handful of papers to straighten and shuffle. Do you have some manner of personal vendetta against the clan? I should have thought your crusade was over, with all but 2 of them dead. But the 2 who remain are by themselves a greater threat than the whole rest of their clan had been, Danzo said. If they were to turn on the village, or if you or I were to turn on the village, Hiruzen said, or Jiraiya, or Kakashi or Guy,
or the Anbu, or any number of our elite shinobi. Yes, Itachi and Sasuke are dangerous, but making a fuss over it is nonsense when there are so many other dangerous people in Konoha. You know they're unpredictable, Danzo said, continuing unabated. The Uchiha have a long history of, they're determined, Hiruzen interjected, cutting the other man off, and Itachi has proven himself loyal beyond any shadow of doubt, as you should well know, Danzo glowered. Spare it, Hiruzen, your sentimentality will be the death of me. Don't lie, old friend, Hiruzen said with a smirk. If you were that easy to kill, many of my problems could have been solved by now, and if I could, I would have killed you long ago, Danzo drawled. So we are left at an impasse and forced into damnable compromise. Hiruzen set the papers down on the desk and reached for his pipe. It was unlit, and he tapped a bit of tobacco into it. Then he pressed his thumb to the base and channeled a bit of fire-natured chakra through it, sending a thin wisp of smoke into the air. By the way, Danzo, he said slowly, eyeing his old friend, I've been meaning to ask, but weren't you scheduled to attend a remedial ethics class today? Danzo averted his gaze, a slightly guilty expression on his face. Ah well, he mumbled evasively. I thought so, Hiruzen said, smiling. I'll let you off this time, but your teacher might not be so forgiving. The visible portion of Danzo's face reddened, because simply saying Danzo blushed would have felt much too surreal. Ichiraku Ramen Timeline Gamma. The future nervous breakdowns caused by overwork. That was the official explanation Shikamaru and the others had composed. It was terse, but a believable fabrication. The Hokage in particular was well known to be very diligent in his duties, and many had expected that something like this would happen eventually, and his wife was likewise dedicated to her own job. Similarly, Sakura Uchiha had been known to work herself to the point of exhaustion, and her husband was, well, Sasuke. Something like a nervous breakdown sounded entirely possible, if it was them. That was not, of course, the actual case, but this whole time travel fiasco was, for various reasons, hushed up and kept on the down low by Shikamaru and the others. Pretty much only Boruto, Sarada, the people who attended the emergency meeting, and a few others were in on the truth. Things could get very complicated very quickly if people found out exactly why Lord Seventh and two of the most reliable people in the village plus Sasuke were taking an indefinite leave of absence from their duties. So it was necessary to devise a cover story. Likewise, it was necessary for the 12-year-old versions of Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Hinata to get briefed on various matters. Organizing everything the kids would need to be told, however, would take a while, and until then Anbu were keeping close eyes on them to make sure they didn't get into too much trouble. Accepting this was the major condition for them to be allowed into the village at large. So, the odds of them causing any serious problems were low. Hence why Naruto was allowed to be sitting on his favorite stool at Ichiraku, slurping up a bowl of ramen with unassailable cheer. 2 empty bowls were already sitting on the table before him. Suspended from the ceiling in one corner, an LCD television was broadcasting a news report on economic trends and predictions that Naruto found utterly incomprehensible and thus completely ignored. Greedily, the blonde tipped back his third bowl of ramen and downed the broth in a single draft. Man, that really hits the spot, he said, setting the now empty vessel down on the stack and letting out a contented sigh. One more. Bachan, Aim, middle-aged and happily married, couldn't help but twitch a little at this form of address. It was uncharacteristic of the Lord Seventh, who usually just called her Aim, and reminded her of how he used to be as a kid and young adult before finally taking the effort to learn proper manners and courtesy while dating Hinata. She'd never quite grasped how irritating that side of him could have been until today. It was one thing to be called Nichan, that was cute and kind of endearing, but Bachan, well, Aim was hardly the most vain woman around, but she was still young enough to feel a little annoyed at being called something like that, especially by a man who wasn't even more than 5 or 6 years her junior. So it was with a moderately forced smile and a subtly pulsing vein in her forehead that Aim set a fourth bowl of ramen on the table before her customer. Here you are, Hokage-sama, she said through grit teeth, visibly biting back her annoyance. Enjoy. If Naruto noticed her irritation, he didn't show any sign of it. Considering who this was, particularly in terms of his mental age at present, it was not at all surprising. He had zero ability to read the atmosphere. Aim headed into the back to attend the pots and strainers and such, and Naruto attacked his ramen with relish. A few minutes into his fourth bowl, the curtain behind the blonde parted. Hayashi Hyruga walked into Ichiraku Ramen. It was like the setup to a joke, except for the grimly serious look on his face, although Hayashi almost always looked like that anyways. But he stepped into the restaurant and took a seat beside Naruto, as though he had intended to from the start. That very well may have been the case too. Muttering a low but polite greeting to Aim, Hayashi quietly requested a bowl of shio ramen and 2 cups of sake. Aim huffed at this, considering it was the middle of the day and all that, as well as the fact that she didn't technically have a liquor license. but Hayashi waved away her complaints and produced a Ryo bill of relatively high denomination. "Keep the change," he said, and Aim quickly changed her tune. Outwardly, at least, she still shot Hayashi a mildly disapproving look when she didn't think he was looking. He saw this, of course, but accepted it with grace and no complaint. It was honestly rather inappropriate, after all, for a man of his standing to be seen drinking in the middle of the day. Naruto, finishing up his fourth bowl, finally noticed Hayashi's presence. "Oh," he said, blinking owlishly. Seeing Hayashi give him a piercing look, he sheepishly added, "Hi." Aim came back with a bottle of shochu and 2 cups. "It's all we have," she said. Her tone was polite, if only grudgingly so. "Thank you," Hayashi said with a nod. "I'll have another chashu ramen, please," Naruto interjected, stacking up his 4th empty bowl. "Of course," said Aim, a little glad that he hadn't called her Bachan this time. She then turned and walked once more into the back of the shop. A moment of silence passed. Naruto fiddled with his chopsticks and stared off into space. At the same time, Hayashi silently uncapped the bottle and poured out 2 glasses of shochu. The older man had a calm expression on his face, neutral and nearly unreadable. He pushed 1 glass toward Naruto. "Here, son," he said, catching the blonde's attention. "Let's talk." Naruto blinked. Warning signs began to go off in his head. Go ahead, drink up," Hayashi said, gesturing vaguely. "This is the kind of discussion that I would rather not have sober." He then took a sip from his glass, saying this, and nodded to his son-in-law. Naruto had no idea who this old guy was or what he wanted with him, but hesitantly, feeling those oddly familiar eyes on him, Naruto raised his own cup and took an anxious, tentative sip. He then immediately spewed it back out, making a face and gagging. "Jaya, that's bitter," he exclaimed. A soft chortle came from Hayashi, seeing this reaction. The man nodded, his lips quirking up at the corners. "So are many trappings of adulthood," he said wistfully, taking another sip. "But we must learn to accept the good and the bad. And sometimes you may find that something which seems initially unpleasant might actually become enjoyable, if you simply endure it a little while." Naruto knitted his brows and shot a skeptical look at this strange, unfamiliar old man. But, reluctantly, he tried taking another sip of shochu. He downed it quickly, like forcing medicine down his throat, and shuddered as he set the glass back down. "Still tastes awful," he grunted, making a face. Hayashi laughed. An actual laugh, however soft and understated. Even not having any idea who this guy was, aside from an oddly visceral mixture of apprehension and foggy familiarity somewhere in the back of his mind, Naruto had a feeling that this was something remarkable. Just looking at the way this man carried himself could betray that much. "Yes, it does," Hayashi agreed. "But this is the traditional way for men to have a heart-to-heart talk, wouldn't you agree?" Naruto frowned and cocked his head. "I wouldn't know, old-timer." Hayashi looked at him thoughtfully for a moment, then he smiled, a small and bittersweet thing, before taking yet another sip. Perhaps," he murmured, "but we have to try and understand each other before we can try to change each other. You taught me at least that much, son." Naruto sat quietly on his stool, and reluctantly took another sip from his glass. He said nothing. "Hinata was in a fretful state when I saw her earlier today," Hayashi continued after a brief silence. "It seems you did something to upset her." It took Naruto a second to remember who Hinata was, and another second or two to figure out what Hayashi might be talking about. He blushed, recalling how he had woken up in bed with a woman who was apparently the grown-up version of that strange, dark, quiet girl from his class at the academy. Considering the relatively lacking state of dress in which the two of them had awoken, it was not inconceivable that she might be angry or dismayed with him. Girls didn't like to be seen naked, or at least that was the impression he'd gotten in the past, and they also didn't seem to like to see most boys naked. And the two of them in that bed had only been a couple garments each from lying there in their birthday suits. Of course she would be upset. "Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about," Naruto said, sighing. He felt an uncharacteristic pang of melancholy, and took another sip of shochu. The taste didn't seem quite as strong this time. Hayashi slowly nodded, giving Naruto a look that seemed almost sympathetic. "I'm sure you didn't mean to hurt her," he said. "At the very least she seems to think as much, even if it still upset her. I can't claim to understand all the intricacies of your relationship. Things are very different from how they were when I was young, or so it seems, but the fact remains that you made a mistake, and my daughter got hurt as a result." Naruto flinched. He looked intently at the surface of the bar. Aim was frozen a little ways away, 2 bowls of ramen in hand, appearing hesitant to interrupt this discussion. She watched intently, abashed but undeniably interested. Sorry," Naruto mumbled. This felt like the only right thing to say. "Don't apologize to me," Hayashi replied. "I'm not the one who needs to hear it." Naruto winced, and he fidgeted uncomfortably. Hayashi's expression softened a hair, seeing this. "You're a good man, Naruto." "I know you are," he said. No other single person has done more for my family, for my daughter, than you have. I respect you as both a shinobi and a human being. I know you'll do your best to make up for this, because you always have in the past. That is the only reason I've not already made an attempt on your life for upsetting her." Naruto gulped, his throat going dry. He took another sip and felt the alcohol burn all the way down to his stomach. "She's my wife," he said half to himself, only now really grasping this. It seemed so bizarre. How did the two of us ever wind up together anyway? He wondered aloud. "I've often asked myself the same question, but love rarely makes sense from an outside perspective," Hayashi said. "My daughter has cared for you since the beginning, and if I did not believe that you felt the same way for her," he gave Naruto a look and trailed off meaningfully. Naruto gulped. "I really love her," he said to himself. His face reddened, his mind once more finding itself rudely invaded by the remembered sights of Hinata's very adult body lying on top of him, and in the bed next to him. "I wonder why." Hayashi gave Naruto a curious look. "That's a question only you can answer," he said evenly. "If you don't know it by now, there's nothing I can tell you, huh?" "Well, she did look real pretty in that nightgown," Naruto mumbled absently, scratching the back of his head. Hayashi sputtered, and his face went beet red. "Too much information," he squeaked, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Naruto didn't seem to notice. Crescent Moon Kingdom timeline B to the past. It was a gorgeous day. Waves lapped at the beach, wetting the ivory sands. The sea was sparkling, its water crystal clear in the idyllic shallows of this private stretch of shore. Palm trees swayed in a gentle breeze, perfectly landscaped grass draping over the curve of a slowly rising hill. A path paved with planks of wood split the face of the hillside in two, rising up to the heel of a tropical seaside shack. Part of it was propped up on stilts and wood braces, an open balcony overlooking a sheer drop and a chain of tidal pools below. Overall, the structure had in its style of architecture that certain affectation of humility you might find in a wealthy man's retreat, and the quality of the construction was tellingly high. Considering where this was, the building was quite inconspicuous. Many rich merchants or what have you owned homes or timeshares on the shores of the Crescent Moon Kingdom, where property was coveted and highly valued, practically a status symbol. This place was further off the beaten path than most, located on the very edge of this small island country, but not so far from civilization as to be suspicious. It was perfectly innocuous. No one would suspect the true identity of the owner and inhabitant of this particular plot of land. Had Obito not been familiar with the man's chakra, even he might not have noticed it at all, but he was, and he did, adjusting his swirly orange mask to make sure that the seal markings were properly elegant, a suppressing formula that cut off his eyes linked to whatever it was that had been showing him all that porn and naked anko. Obito stepped out of his Kamui dimension, a Manger Kaiao Sharingan drilling no space-time and pulling his body through the hole like water through a drain. It was disorienting as hell and not just a little uncomfortable, but he was mostly used to it after all these years. The only factor really making it especially difficult now was the lingering soreness of Obito's body, and the awkwardness of getting used to a new arm and leg. But he grit his teeth and soldiered on with only a bare minimum of muttered swears and curses. Making sure that his cloak was on straight, Obito set his foot on the balcony overlooking the shallow pools. Down below he saw his quarry hunched over the water, poking and prodding something unidentifiable with various scientific instruments. Okay, he was locked on. Now came the hard part. Taking a deep breath and mentally bracing himself, Obito jumped down from the balcony in dramatic silence, cloak billowing impressively behind him. He landed feet first on one of the larger stones, crouching over his target like something out of a gothic novel. Obito took care to latch immediately onto the stone's surface with chakra, knowing that it would be smooth and likely slick, and bit back a hiss of pain at the concentrated ouch, which shot up his not quite completely mended yet legs. He knew from long experience what to watch out for when making a dramatic entrance. He had suffered more than enough pratfalls and failed theatrics in his youth to grasp the biggest risks of stunts like this, and so could usually pull something like this off with minimal difficulty. He had lots of practice, with one hand holding his mask in place, just in case, dramatically framing a shadowed hole as he lifted his dawn-colored visage to let light stream through and glint off of a scarlet eye. Obito struck what he considered to be an appropriately intimidating pose. In live action it would have looked plain silly, but as a manga character, he pulled it off with aplomb. The gesture was subtle and understated compared to the sort of grandstanding he'd enjoyed as a child, of course, but was it still an indulgence on Obito's part, catering to his personal lifelong fondness for theatrics? And it was honestly his firm belief, even after all these years, that whether one was a hero or a villain, knowing how to make an entrance was half the job. His inner child probably imagined a dramatic theme swelling with pomp and menace, maybe a slowly building orchestral piece that rose to a climax as the person below looked up from what they were doing to gaze on his masked face. Damn, I am so cool, the part of Obito that had never matured past the age of 13 was likely thinking at that moment. Hello, Orochimaru, he said in a deep and measured voice, his tone dripping with condescension. What brings an infamous devil like you so far from the shinobi territories? I'd heard you were a monster in human form, but look at you now, reeking of low tide and poking at beached jellyfish, Orochimaru scoffed. For one thing, this is a culture of slime mold, not a jellyfish. For another, it would be trapped in a tidal pool, not beached, he said scornfully, giving the masked man an unimpressed look. And I'm retired. What I do with my free time is my business and no one else's. A shame. Here I thought you might make a worthy partner in my endeavor, Obito muttered, but clearly you are just another weakling dragged along by the tides of history, hardly an equal to Madara Uchiha. Orochimaru snorted. Please do drop the act, Obito-kun, he drawled, causing the man in the mask to visibly wince. Even if you were the real Madara, I have no interest in your little plot. My calling is something loftier. You just said that you were retired, though Obito deadpanned, although he was still reeling from Orochimaru's casual name drop. From being a ninja, Orochimaru replied, I see no point in struggling to keep up with the younger generation as a fighter, not when the world holds so many mysteries for me to unravel. Better to spend my time doing research, than risk humanity losing all of this uncatalogued knowledge. He tapped the side of his head, smirking, in a fight against some fresh, spry little monsters, I've been overtaken and roundly surpassed as a ninja. I'll readily admit that. There's clearly no future for me in war or politics, so it's far more constructive to just start over from scratch than try to salvage anything from my ill-conceived past experiments. He scooped a bit of the clear, gelatinous slime into a vial and capped it. I am a scientist, after all. I know better. A moment of silence passed, are you sure you won't reconsider? Obito asked, his tone perhaps a touch imploring. Let's drop the pretenses. I wouldn't be approaching you if I had any other options. You are a creepy son of a bitch, and horribly untrustworthy, but I really don't have anyone else. Oh yes, Orochimaru hummed. Nagato and Konan finally kicked you to the curb, I hear, and most of the other Akatsuki members have been killed, or taken into custody. A pity. His voice was dripping with sarcasm on that last line. Obito twitched in response. You're alone, Orochimaru, he said slowly. Precisely. You've cut yourself off from your support base and your underlings, and you aren't nearly as dangerous by yourself as Nagato and Konan were together. It's the same situation for you, Orochimaru smartly replied, except that I chose to seclude myself, and am in peak condition, where you were ousted by your closest henchman and left for dead, and you still haven't healed completely, have you? A hand flashed up, holding a razor-sharp scalpel, and faster than Obito could react the blade scraped up the middle of his mask, raking a fine line through the hardened material. It was a perfectly straight, clean slice, shallow and only scratching the surface, but the point was made. His body was still mending, even with the enhanced regeneration of Hashirama's cells, and his reflexes were yet only a shadow of what they should have been. Orochimaru had perfectly called his bluff, I really hate you, Obito muttered, raising a hand to the scratch. The spiral pattern of his visage was completely bisected. This was my favorite mask. The feeling is mutual, Orochimaru dryly quipped. So I suggest you go find someone else to team up with. I hear young Kabuto has taken over a Togakure in my absence. HMPH. Maybe I will. Obito sniffed. Goodbye, and good riddance. Orochimaru coolly smiled. Jeeves, he said, kindly escort our guest out, of course, so said the elderly butler, standing on the rock next to the guest in question. Obito nearly jumped out of his skin at the man's sudden appearance. He hadn't even noticed the butler's presence. Here's the door, Sir Jeeves said, putting a hand on Obito's shoulder. And them, before Obito even knew what was happening, he was hurtling over the sea at a ridiculous speed with Orochimaru's last retreat rapidly shrinking into the distance. It took him a moment to piece together what had just happened, flying through the air like a human ragdoll. Of course Orochimaru wouldn't settle for an ordinary manservant. Note to self, Obito thought. Watch the hell out for butlers in the future. Konoha Market District Timeline Gamma the future. Hello. How are you doing today, Mrs. Uchiha? I hear you and your husband fell sick a while back. I hope you're on the mend. I saw your daughter in the market the other day, Mrs. Uchiha, and she looked so cute. She takes after her mother, that's for sure. Mrs. Uchiha. Here, have a free sample. We just got a fresh shipment of produce yesterday. The tomatoes are particularly juicy, Mrs. Uchiha. Mrs. Uchiha. Mrs. Uchiha. Sakura was walking on air as she went through the town, taking in her surroundings. A day had passed since they first arrived in this strange future, and despite the lethargy and fainting fits she had suffered from initially, the pinkette now found herself feeling hardier and more vigorous than ever. According to the grown-up version of Ino, who'd wound up marrying some guy Sakura had never heard of, this was because of the pills they'd had her take. Supposedly it was some kind medicine intended to accelerate the growth of shrunken chakra reserves or something like that. Sakura didn't quite understand the specifics, as the details were all very technical and complicated even for an intelligent young thing like herself, but the gist of it was that she could now go out without having to worry about suddenly collapsing, though apparently she'd been prone to such fits even before this whole time kerfuffle. But that didn't matter to Sakura. No, the important thing was that she, Sakura Hiruno, was Sasuke-kun's wife. It had been very surreal until now, and while she'd certainly revealed in the thought, it hadn't quite sunk in until she went out into town. Just seeing townspeople smile and wave, and hearing them greet her as Mrs. Uchiha, felt so marvelous, that Sakura could barely contain herself. Only remembering what Shikamaru-san and the Lord Sixth had told her and the others about doing their best to avoid drawing attention to the fact that they were mentally 12 kept Sakura from jumping for joy or gaily skipping down the street. Still, she was smiling like crazy as she strolled through the market. She didn't have any particular business here, of course. It was just a pleasant break from the examinations and debriefings. As she walked downtown, humming cheerfully to herself, Sakura barely noticed as people's greetings became gradually cooler and more infrequent the further she traveled from the center of the village. Konoha's layout was quite different from what she remembered, and without paying close attention she could easily get herself lost. Every town had its underbelly. Even the most beautiful beach would have a shoal or stretch of shore where ocean currents and topographical oddities brought driftwood and refused to cluster together. Garbage snagging more garbage until it had become an island of refuse in the corner of a sparkling sea. And while a lot of people who live on the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak, are just decent but down on their luck folk looking to eke out a living wherever they can, these places also tended to be overlooked, ignored, or avoided by authorities, such that less savory elements may also take root there. Konoha was a large, prosperous city, while petty crooks and gangs could not easily make a foothold in a village populated by shinobi, and the reputations of the Five Cage and Union elites tended to ward off the larger organizations and crime rings. The Hidden Leaf still had its own dark side. Social welfare and various programs kept most people clothed and fed, and unemployment rates were low with a good and strong economy, so it wasn't especially poor or run down, but there were still slums of a sort. Interestingly, the poorest and most lawless part of Konoha, again, relatively speaking, was located right where the old Uchiha district used to be. This was a place most people avoided due to ill rumors and bad reputation, an area haunted by the sins and hatred of past generations. Even in a ninja village, most people who had a choice would avoid living or developing in a place where so much bloodshed had occurred. Paradoxically appropriately, this plot of land was particularly attractive to social malcontents and troublemakers, whether otherwise honest folk who for one reason or another had grudges against the establishment, or bullies and wannabe thugs who saw it as a playground to run wild in. And considering the amount of text devoted to establishing all of this, it should be fairly obvious to the reader that Sakura just so happened to walk straight into this place. Even the brightest lad or lass could suffer a lapse in judgment when lost in romantic reverie, and Sakura was especially susceptible to bouts of daydreaming and giddy fantasization, so it's only a little surprising that, in her distraction, she might wander halfway across the village. It wasn't until the smiling faces and warm greetings had faded away and been completely replaced by haggard faces scowling and cloudy, drunken red eyes glaring that Sakura noticed it. When she became aware of the pinpricks of dozens of eyes boring holes into her form, she finally, belatedly snapped out of her dreamy daze and took a careful look at her surroundings. Naturally, she was perturbed to realize that she had no idea where she was. Furthermore, the glint and gleam of narrowed eyes and yellowing, gap-toothed sneers surrounded by the wafting reek of alcohol, vomit, and unwashed bodies left her distinctly nonplussed. Literally, for several seconds Sakura was left in a state where she could do nonplussed, or nothing more. To make it plainer, she was frozen up in a mixture of confusion, creeping unease, and a distinct sense that she was quite unwelcome here. Oh, how bout ya doubt, eh? Yeah, kind ain't welcome here, woman, slurred a hoary, jaundiced vagrant redundantly. Ah, growled another, brandishing a half-empty bottle of cheap liquor. You Uchiha in yeah darn Uchiha, think yeah so much better and the rest of us, go home, love, jeered yet another, perversely dragging eyes up and down Sakura's form. Be a shame if and that purdy arso yeah's got itself into trouble with us near dowls, wadn't it? Ho, now, thar's th only thin I'd keep the witch round fair, personally another crowed. Aye, she's got a real nasty personality, but her body ain't too bad to look at. Ha ha. Sakura's cheeks burned as she processed these words, and she shot indignant glares at the assembled drunks and wastrels. Although she was a little apprehensive to realize she had stumbled into a place like this, she did have her own pride as a kunoichi, and refused to show any sign that she might feel intimidated by a handful of bums. Sniffing, she turned her nose up at them before turning to leave, attempting to preserve her dignity and demonstrate her aloofness to their taunting while carrying out a tactical retreat. HMPH. I don't have to stay here and listen to this, she muttered under her breath. Secretly, of course, as a 12-year-old youth in general and a historically insecure young girl in particular, Sakura was to some extent upset by these cries and sneers, but she refused to let it show. A proper young girl had to behave a certain way, after all. Guys didn't like girls who went around picking fights or shouting at the top of their lungs, did they? On the inside, of course, she ranted and raved angrily at these guys, but she did not say anything outwardly. Girls were supposed to be soft, sweet, and deferential. That was what boys liked, after all, wasn't it? Sighing, Sakura started to head back the way she came. She made it all of 3 steps before a grubby, sticky hand grabbed her by the arm. Oh, said we were done with ye, doll, said one of the gaunt, sallow-faced wastrels. His fingers were long and bony, and his grip seemed terribly weak and clumsy to some unconscious part of Sakura, although a civilian might have found it strong and firm. Reeking breath burned her ears as he spoke, and she heard him lewdly smack his lips. I done blame ye for wandering away from the treacherous eunuch. Add a breakdown, dinny. Serves the dastard right, I say. Sakura shuddered and stiffened. What did you say, you bastard? Her inner self growled. Another vagrant shambled forward, short and hairy and enormously fat. Unlike Chaoji, who wore his weight well and was suited to his hefty build by generations of adaptation and a lifetime of training, this man's face was glossy from a thick sheen of sweat even though it was a rather cool day out, and he was panting and noisily wheezing as he waddled over. Don't be rude to her now, he said, smirking. I'm sure she loves her husband dearly. Jez came down here for a little fun and no more, I'm sure, to laugh at us hopeless trash and go back to a nice little ooze and a nice little family. Not a fault she decided to reach up with a faithless piece of scum like that Sasuke. He probably tricked her into it with his Sharingan hypnosis. Inner Sakura twitched. Hokage's office timeline beat to the past officially. In their own time, Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha were ranked as Hokage and Nuke Nin. One was the leader of the village, and the other was an unranked operative who worked outside the system to take care of things. Without a doubt, they were the 2 strongest and most respected shinobi alive, but neither of them had ever passed the Chunin exam, or been given a field promotion. Naruto was still just a genin. Sasuke didn't even have that much. They were not Chunin, not Jounin, not Anbu. Sasuke was technically classified as a rogue ninja, even if he had no bounty on his head and was perfectly loyal to his village, and willfully a subordinate of the Lord Hokage. Naruto, despite being the hero of the 4th Great Ninja War and widely considered to have surpassed all the previous Hokage, was at the end of the day still ranked lower than his own son. Sasuke and Naruto did not like to be reminded of these facts, and they still held a slight grudge against Kakashi over the fiasco that had been their last attempt at the Chunin exams. It was probably petty of them, but seriously, failing the first phase on a technicality, that was just infuriating. It was almost as bullshit as the time Naruto got disqualified in an earlier Chunin exam for using Senjutsu, which Tsunade and the other organizers had banned seemingly just to spite him. This shit always seemed to go bad when they were involved. Even Boruto and Sarada hadn't been able to get through their own Chunin exams without a couple of extra-dimensional assholes coming in to crash the party. Really, it was almost like a curse or something. So when the Sandaime called them, Sakura, Hinata, Shikamaru, and Shino into his office, the 2 men in boys' bodies were naturally a little unsure how to react. They were almost afraid to get their hopes up. I suppose you're wondering why I called you here, the Hokage said, puffing on his pipe. The door to his office was closed behind the kids, and the Lord Third's son and daughter-in-law were hidden in the shadows, the elite Anbu operatives standing a silent, unseen vigil over Konoha's commander-in-chief, Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, Hinata Hyruga, Sakura Hiruno, Shikamaru Nara, and Shino Aburame stood at attention. Half of them belonged to influential clans within the Hidden Leaf. A third of them were the scion of nearly extinct clans that had once been just as powerful, if not Morizo. Even the 6th of them was at least the child of 2 shinobi. Sakura was cheerfully grinning, and Hinata was more subtly smiling. Shino was stoic and as inscrutable as a tree, while Shikamaru looked like he was trying, very badly, to mask his disinterest. Naruto and Sasuke looked unsure what to think. I dare say we have a pretty good idea, Hokage-sama, Sakura chirped. She gave him a cheeky wink and theatrically bowed. Yeah, I'm sure you have an excellent reason, so said Shikamaru with just a touch of insolence. Hiruzen smiled. Haha, yes, that I do, he said. Congratulations. After thorough consideration, it has been decided that you 6 demonstrated sufficient merit for promotion during your exams. You are now Chunin. He unrolled a small storage scroll and swiped his thumb over the key. With a puff of smoke, 6 flak vests appeared on the surface of his desk. Shikamaru looked the exact opposite of thrilled. Shino was unreadable. Sakura and Hinata smiled pleasantly. Sasuke stared, and Naruto hummed, I would give a speech here about what an honor this is for you, and what responsibilities await you as newly appointed Chunin, the Sandaime said, but I think you kids already have the idea. He gestured for them to take the vests. So this is what it feels like to become a Chunin, Naruto idly said, grabbing a flak vest and throwing it on. Ha, kinda underwhelming, tell me about it, Sasuke muttered, nodding in agreement. He slung a flak vest over his shoulder, not bothering to don it. His expression was stolid and dour. It's about damn time, Sakura sniggered, remembering how the last Chunin exam Naruto and Sasuke participated in went, and even Hinata had to stifle a slight giggle at their expense. Shino and Shikamaru gave the quartet an odd look. Report in tomorrow for your first missions assignments as Chunin, Hiruzen told the kids. I hope you look forward to it. He then smiled and dismissed the newly confirmed Chunin with a wave of his hand. This was sure to be interesting. Sakura walked out of the movie theater with an enormous grin on her face. Her eyes were fiercely twinkling, and she gleefully rubbed her hands together. Next to her walked Hinata, who was humming to herself and absent-mindedly jotting down notes on a piece of paper. Hee, Princess Gale is as gorgeous as I remember, Sakura remarked. Not to say that Lady Kazuhana wasn't still a total MILF, of course, but there's just something about a young woman in the prime of life. It reminds me of the night we conceived Boruto, Hinata said wistfully. It was our second anniversary, 10 at night or so, and we'd gotten through the library of her works up to this movie. The way Naruto blushed when he brought out the next film was so adorable, and, well, I could hardly say no to that face. Sakura perked up. Was it the public release of the film, she asked. I remember there was a bit of controversy when it finally came out after the war. They had to sanitize the final cut a lot because of politics and all that. A pity in my opinion, uncut and unrated, Hinata said, smiling. Apparently she had intended to send that edition to Lord Jiraiya, since he was the original author, but since he was dead by that point, well, apparently she wound up sending it to Naruto-kun instead. Since he was Jiraiya's apprentice as well as a fond and respected acquaintance of hers. The night of our second anniversary was the first time he ever watched it, though Sakura pouted. Do you still have it? She gave Hinata a cutely imploring look. I've secretly always wished I could see the restricted original version of the Icha Icha movie. If I'd known Naruto had it, I think we might still have it in storage, Hinata said, looking thoughtful. Apart from our writing, we locked most of that stuff away after Bolt reached a certain age. Oh, can I borrow it when we get back? Sakura asked. I've wanted to talk Sasuke into having another kid for a while now. Certainly, if I can find it, Hinata answered. Sakura squealed and gave the other girl a tight hug. You're the best, Hinata, she gushed. Hinata smiled and waved it off, saying, it's the least I can do. But that aside, we really should focus on our mission. Sakura let go, though not before planting a quick, blink and you'll miss it kiss on Hinata's cheek. Yes, she conceded. Sexy starlets don't guard themselves, after all. She then winked, eliciting an amused giggle from Hinata. At that moment, Princess Gale went flying down the street on horseback, pursued by several men in military costumes of fake but convincing armor and weapons. Hinata cocked her head, and Sakura smiled. Oh my, said Hinata, it looks like our charge is trying to escape. Yes, said Sakura, nodding. We should probably stop her. Wriggling her fingers into a seal, the pinkette focused her chakra with a smile. The horses froze in place, some of them stopping so suddenly as to nearly throw their riders, or actually throw them in the runaway actress's case. But Yuki was lucky enough to be caught in midair, Hinata snatching the woman up before she could hit the ground. The Hyruga held the woman in her arms with no difficulty despite their difference in size, and came to a graceful landing on the side of the road. Several pedestrians stared in surprise. All of this happened in the amount of time it would take someone to blink, and civilians could hardly follow things moving that fast. Yuki Fujikaze blinked, looking left and right as she tried to process what the fuck had just happened. An elderly gentleman held an armful of cabbages and was propping up a teetering cart of produce with one foot, keeping it from spilling all over the street. He looked tense, exasperated, and harried. A gaggle of schoolgirls were squealing and holding down their skirts, faces beet red, fluttering garments betrayed a strong breeze, and flustered expressions showed how little they appreciated it. The stuntmen and crew were sitting dumbly on their horses, owlishly staring as they limply clutched the reins of their steeds. Beneath them the horses were shivering and pathetically whinnying, some of them looking like they had frozen up mid-stride. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her face felt hot enough to fry an egg. Woozy, Yuki realized that she must have been tossed from her horse, and for a moment she supposed that she might have broken her neck and died. It certainly felt surreal enough, but then something squeezed, and the actress realized that she could feel a hand on her ass. Reacting on instinct, Yuki whipped out a can of mace and sprayed it into her molester's eyes. There was a moment of tense silence before Hinata let out a scream of pure agony and dropped her charge on the ground. Sakura winced in sympathy,
Target acquired. Silent as a whisper, they stalked through the brush, betraying not the slightest noise. Communicating through glance and gesture, they coordinated themselves to slip as stealthily as shadows around their prey, hemming it in before it could even notice. Their formation was perfect. All they had to do was skulk in and close the net around their target. A breeze picked up. The ferret froze, eyes wide such that one might have related it to a human expression of shock, although the ferret of course did not use the same non-verbal language as humans, but it tensed regardless, leery and ready to run. Shit, a young man cursed, breaking the silence. Get it? Now, simultaneously, acting as one at this command, 3 young teens pounced. Well, 2 pounced. Shino didn't do fumbling around like a jackass, unless you counted a Kamaru as well, in which case yes, it was indeed 3 pouncing, although the pup could not really be called a teen, unless you were measuring by dog years, possibly, but that hardly counts in any serious discussion. Additionally, Naruto was only a teenager in the physiological sense, while mentally he was approaching middle-aged, so, to be exact, it was more like one young teen, one middle-aged man in a young teen's body, and a puppy, pouncing on a cornered ferret. The classic comedic outcome for such a scene would have been for the ferret to evade them and get away, and it certainly danced out of Kiba's reach, ducked between a Kamaru's legs, and shot past Naruto's outstretched hand. As a result, the 2 boys and 1 dog ended up in a tangled heap, while their target made a break for it. Had this not been a part of their gambit, and indeed what they wanted the ferret to do, Kiba would have groaned in annoyance. He still shot Naruto a dirty look for coming up with a plan that left them in such an undignified state, and a Kamaru whined. But as for the ferret, it wound up running straight into the hands of a camouflaged Naruto shadow clone, who grinned and raised the critter triumphantly into the air. Shino then checked to make sure that this was, in fact, the ferret they'd been hired to find. There was a moment's silence. A beat, this isn't the one, he said with just the slightest touch of disappointment in his stoic monotone. Kiba groaned. Seriously, he said, this is the 3rd one. How the hell many ferrets can there possibly be out here? Far more than 3, I'm sure. Shino deadpanned. Naruto laughed. Are you sure you don't want my help tracking it, Kiba? I'll find it on my own. Kiba sniped back, indignantly reddening. I don't need your help, Naruto. What do you know about tracking anyways? Well, I am a sensor type, Naruto nonchalantly replied. Kiba scowled and crossed his arms over his chest, giving a theatrical harumph. He muttered under his breath and turned to face his canine companion, bending over to talk with the dog and make a point of ignoring Naruto. Shino sighed and pushed his sunglasses up the bridge of his nose. This was totally not just an excuse to flip off his comrades. Seriously though, what are the odds of us finding one specific ferret in all this wilderness? Kiba wondered aloud, more sheer grumbling than anything else. The second he said that, a Kamaru barked, and a squealing, beige and brown ferret went darting past their feet. Naruto stooped to pick it up, catching the critter without even blinking, and he smiling when he saw 2 beady red eyes looking up at him. Shino cocked an eyebrow. Hey, Naruto said, smiling at the furious little creature. You're Neruge, aren't you? Kiba sidled over and looked down at the ferret, which was wriggling and squealing in Naruto's hand. He looks like the picture. All right, the boy said. Talk about a lucky break. The ferret bared its teeth and snapped at Kiba, continuing to angrily claw Naruto's hand. It seems frantic, Shino commented. Something must have upset it very badly to send it running like that. What do you suppose it might have been? A Kamaru barked again, quite suddenly, and that was all the warning the 3 humans had before a half-dozen bulky, heavily armored forms came barreling through the forest. Twigs snapped under iron-shod boots, and big studded maces were hefted and swung in menacing arcs. Glowing red motes that were presumably eyes glared out from slits in thick helms. A beat. That yeah, I think it was that. Yes, Shino nodded. You're probably right. The nearest one raised its morning star and swung it down. Naruto and Kiba jumped aside, but Shino did not. He didn't have to. His form broke apart into a glistening swarm of insects, and the chitinous mass promptly engulfed the head of the mace. Within seconds Shino's Kakechu had traveled up the handle of the bludgeon and swarmed over the dumpy, armored assailant. Had it still been human, the wretched pawn would have screamed as the insects forced their way down its throat, and in through every other orifice as well. Its fellows pushed past it even as it stumbled and staggered, before collapsing lifeless to the ground. Kiba and Akamaru were ready to let loose with their Gatsuga combo by that point however, and tore one of the armored things into pieces. Naruto casually slapped a Rasengan into the gut of the 3rd one. The remaining 3 armors charged forward, heedless of any peril. Under a glaring sun, in a hot and arid wasteland, a caravan trundled along. Wagons towed by exotic beasts of burden left dozens of overlapping impressions in the dust and dirt behind them, hoof tracks and footprints peppering the ruts. It was dry as a bone and hot as hell. Itachi Uchiha wiped a few beads of sweat from his brow, eyes briefly closing. He cast off the moisture with a flick of his wrist, ponytail whipping fabulously behind him. The droplets seemed to catch the sunlight, freezing in midair, and the hearts of every androsexual person in the caravan skipped a beat watching him. Several ladies and more than a few gentlemen as well swooned. Itachi seemed oblivious to the throbbing hearts left in his wake, and continued to walk alongside the caravan. Beside him was his younger brother Sasuke. Behind them, in the caravan's wake, were the insensate bodies of a few dozen bandits who had made the terrible life choice of barging in on a conversation between the two Uchiha siblings. Even apart from putting themselves at odds with the two as far as their mission to protect this caravan, all 40-odd of the brigands had been defeated in a matter of seconds. So, as I was saying, Sasuke said, this guy assured me there was no way his plan could fail, but of course my backup arrived in the middle of his speech. You should have seen the look on his face when he saw that katana poking out of his gut. He might have survived that, but the evidence I'd collected was still enough to get him arrested and his operation shut down permanently, so he wasn't too happy as you can imagine. Itachi nodded along with this story, smiling absently. You've had an eventful life, he remarked. I'm sorry about all the trouble I put you through, but I'm also glad you were able to find happiness. Was it eventful? Sasuke inclined his head. I suppose so. In hindsight, a lot of my problems were self-inflicted, so to speak, but I managed to come out on the other end more or less intact. I think that might be all that really matters. Itachi smiled a little more. Several of the people looking in his direction felt their hearts flutter, regardless of their normal orientation. Tell me more about your family, he said. What's there to tell? Sasuke replied. A smile tugged at his own lips, and his eyes gleamed with something not dissimilar to mischief. You'll have to find out for yourself what that's like. Is this an admission that you're the one who has been setting me up on those blind dates? Nonsense. Why would I ever subject you to something like that? Sasuke sniffed, an obvious evasion, the same incomprehensible, alien logic that causes anyone to try and pair off the people around them, I'm sure, Itachi said smoothly. Hey, don't lump me in with shippers, Sasuke said, giving his brother an annoyed look. Itachi smirked. Aha, so it was you, he said victoriously, eyes twinkling, GRK, Sasuke winced, face reddening. Clearing his throat, he shiftily said, I admit nothing. Of course you don't, Itachi said, nodding knowingly. There was a moment of silence after this, before he eyed Sasuke thoughtfully and asked, but as a side note, what do you mean by shipper? Well, it's kind of a long story, Sasuke replied, looking sheepish. You had to have been there, I suppose. Have you heard of the Icha series? Itachi blushed beet red, before looking away and coughing into a tightly clenched fist. Yes, I have, he said, appearing shifty-eyed. Not that I've, read them or anything. Sasuke cleared his throat a tad uncomfortably, cheeks similarly pink, before continuing. Well, this series has continued for many years, he explained. It has a very large and devoted fanbase, with unofficial fan magazines early on, and these magazines had sections where people would share or submit their own stories set in the Icha universes, and character romances were a very popular subject with this fan-made fiction, or fanfiction, if you will, to the extent that, well, as Sasuke cleared his throat, obviously not the most at ease with this topic of discussion. For a moment he paused, as though unsure where to go next with his explanation or how to put into the words the sheer unbridled insanity that was the internet and all the bizarrely specific kinds of communities that had sprouted up in its dark and baffling depths. He was so blatantly uncomfortable, and so at a loss for how to explain these things to his brother, who lived in an era where computers were still basically just glorified number machines and technologically distributed mass media outside of books and magazines was virtually non-existent, that when someone spoke up and interrupted him one could actually see the sigh of relief he stifled. Hey you, yes, Sasuke said, promptly turning to face the speaker. He saw that it was the son of their client, a bespectacled young boy with a passing resemblance to himself as a child. Hikaru, son of Prince Michiru, scowled and looked back down at the screen of his handheld. He sniffed with imperious disdain as he returned to the lofty task of beating up pixelated foes. HMP aged. Never mind, the boy muttered. Sasuke twitched. This kid was an insufferably spoiled brat, and while he had dealt with worse, it was still hard not to betray any hint of irritation or annoyance at the twerp's juvenile power plays. It took him a lot more effort than he would gladly admit to keep his expression blank in the face of this impudence. I do not envy anyone who has to watch over that child, Itachi remarked. He's just annoying, Sasuke said. It seemed like he was saying this as much to himself as to Itachi, as though he had to remind himself more than anyone else that these were just petty, inconsequential vexations. I was on a team with Naruto and Sakura. I can handle annoying. They didn't seem that annoying to me. Of course they don't. They've matured, but they used to be annoying as kids. Sasuke shivered. They were the worst, he said emphatically. Even if I did eventually grow fond of it, they were still just completely I think I get it, Itachi said, nodding. You're at Sundeer, aren't you? Sasuke tripped and fell flat on his face. Hokage's office timeline. Gamma. The future Kakashi had never dreamed about becoming Hokage. That had never been his goal. Even as a kid he'd been smarter than to want this job, leaving it up to Obito to go around dreaming about stupid things, and to Sensei to actually be a good candidate for the job. No, in an ideal world Kakashi never would have become the Hokage. His team would have survived the war, Sensei would have held the title for more than a year, and maybe Obito would have eventually been chosen as the Yondame's successor. Perhaps Naruto would have even become the Rokudame, after Obito, but not Kakashi. Only necessity could have forced him into this position. That, and a request from a friend. So if Kakashi had any reason to hate Obito, it wasn't for masterminding Akatsuki's schemes, starting the Fourth Great Ninja War, indirectly bringing death and crippling injuries to thousands of people, and sinking the economy of the 5 principal territories into the shitter for nearly a decade. It was for guilting him into becoming Hokage in a period of reconstruction and renewal, forced to puzzle out a new order for the world of shinobi alongside the other 5 caged, and go prematurely grey from stress, although his hair had always been grey. But, the point is that Kakashi was not one of those people who had dreamed of becoming a caged. It was hardly his dream job, and he did it only because the village needed him to. Frankly, he had seen himself as just a placeholder for until Naruto was ready to take the hat. Kakashi was a ninja, not a politician, not a bureaucrat, but a ninja. Working in an office environment was his own private hell. Responsible or not, dutiful or not, able to make a game out of paperwork or not, he had still been relieved down to his soul when he'd finally passed the torch on to Naruto. And sure, he still stayed on in an advisory capacity, helping the Nanadame out every so often, whether by providing a sounding board for ideas, or just waking the poor bastard up when he looked ready to collapse from stress and exhaustion. But now he had to actually take over for Naruto because his students' kids had gone and done something stupid like messing around with time travel jutsu. Ugh. Kakashi was fond of the squirts, and respected them as exceptionally skilled young shinobi, but that did not excuse them from occasionally doing very stupid things. They were as bad as their parents in that regard. Well, not so much Hinata. Anyone who could write with such love for the original Icha deserved the utmost respect as an author. In Kakashi's mind, Naruto got off a little lighter too, in this regard, although it had been a while since he'd written one by himself. The Lord Sixth shook his head, then, realizing that his attention was straying, sighing, he focused back on the paperwork in front of him. It had been a while since he'd had to do this, and it seemed he'd fallen out of practice in regards to not getting bored out of his skull. Hopefully the kids would be returned to normal before he had to relearn that skill. Tsunade got off lucky, he mused to himself, skimming his eyes over another form, just having to cover for Sakura, and with Shizune's help at that. Although I suppose that at her age even that much must be rather taxing. A slightest prickle of fear ran down Kakashi's spine. Blinking and looking up from the papers, he saw the visage of the woman in question. It appeared she was giving a good college try at killing him with just a look, judging by the intensity of her death glare. At whose age, Kakashi? Tsunade said darkly, crossing her arms over her ample chest. The Rokudame absent-mindedly thought of his penpal Kahayao, the lovely Yuki clanswoman and chief warden of Hazukaja, whose letters were possibly the only thing in the world that he enjoyed reading more than Ichicha. Idly he wondered how she was doing. No offense intended, Tsunade-sama, he drawled, scribbling his signature onto another form. You are getting on in years. I'm not so old that I can't beat some respect into that head of yours, she retorted with a scowl. I don't doubt it, Kakashi said blandly, but I'm sure you didn't come here just to threaten me. HMPH. Of course I didn't, Tsunade sniffed. I'm here to find out about the progress those kids have made on the jutsu. The sooner they get it done, the sooner I can get back into retirement. I could assign Mitsuki to help lighten your load, Kakashi offered. He's not as experienced, but he's the closest to being on your, Sakura's, or Shizune's level in medical ninjutsu. Tsunade narrowed her eyes and rested a hand on the Hokage's desk. Kakashi, she growled. They're doing their best, he said, but it's a very complicated matter. Space-time jutsu are only poorly understood even in this day and age, and time travel jutsu infinitely less so. How long? Maybe 3 months, at the most optimistic, but probably closer to half a year, if we're being realistic. Kakashi paused and gave her a sympathetic look. I don't like it either, but there's no way Naruto, Sakura, or the others are in any state to do their duties. We'll have to cover for them for the foreseeable future, she scowled. Damn, and there's no way we can train them to take care of their usual jobs. Not even a little. Kakashi gave her an odd look. It took them decades to get this far, he said. Even if you gave them a crash course, there's no way you could teach them more than a tiny fraction of everything they would need to know. We're on our own. Ugh, Tsunade groaned. I'm too old for this garbage. I agree, said Kakashi. She glared daggers in response.